In a quaint village, excitement buzzed in the air as children gathered for the entrance test to the prestigious Magic Academy. Among them was Ian Page, a boy who had always lived a solitary life with his mother. As he approached the testing grounds, he passed a guard who greeted him with a smug smile. Instinctively, Ian sensed that something was amiss. As soon as they entered the room, the examiner began the test, probing for mana in Ian's mind and then in his heart. But Ian, not one to wait, unleashed a simultaneous barrage of fire and water magic. Gasps filled the air as everyone in the room stood in stunned silence, their jaws dropping in disbelief. As they struggled to comprehend how a child could pull off such a feat, Ian's mother suddenly screamed. He rushed outside to find a guard gripping her arm, insisting that she shouldn't make things difficult. The head guard approached, demanding to know what was happening. In a moment of cowardice, the guard fabricated a feeble excuse, claiming he mistook her for an intruder. But Ian saw right through the deception and resolved to keep a close watch on him. As night descended, the guard roamed the city, seething with anger over the humiliation inflicted by the maid's son. He was determined to make Ian regret his boldness. Suddenly, an icy chill gripped his body, leaving him frozen in place. Ian materialized right behind him, his voice low and menacing. "You've messed with the wrong person's mother. She means everything to me, and no one is ever going to touch her again." With that, Ian hurled the man into the water, leaving him to struggle against the waves. Unfortunately for the guard, this kid was anything but ordinary. He was one of the greatest mages in the kingdom, destined for greatness. But in his past life, betrayal struck deep. His closest friend, Ragna, had poisoned his drink. As Ragna turned his back, Ian, in a moment of despair, plunged a dagger into his own heart. The dagger temporarily halted the poison, granting him a precious moment to cast a spell and travel back in time. With the magic circle prepared, he journeyed 30 years into the past. Now armed with newfound power and knowledge, Ian is determined to reshape history. As he plots his revenge against his former friend, his most important mission remains to protect his mother. In his past life, he attended the Magic Academy while his mother fell ill and passed away, never experiencing the luxury that came with his rise as a powerful mage. But now, he's determined to rise to the top once more, ready to do everything in his power to give her the life she truly deserves. For those without a mother, this moment resonates deeply. The following day, he awoke to find the village encircled by the royal guard. The king discovered that Ian possessed the rare ability to cast 2 spells simultaneously and sent him a message recognizing his extraordinary talent. Without delay, Ian was brought to the imperial palace. Upon arriving at the Morgrian family mansion, he and his mother were treated like royalty, warmly welcomed by Lord Marcus Morgrian himself. During his time there, Ian dedicated himself solely to training, honing his sinister ice magic. He was acutely aware of his own weakness, knowing he lacked the strength to freeze the entire palace just yet. Suddenly, a servant burst in, panic etched across their face. "The Lord and his son have vanished," they exclaimed. "They went out to hunt goblins yesterday and never returned." Ian may not be as strong as he once was, but he possesses a powerful new ability, the foresight to see the future. He understands that Marcus holds immense significance and that an assassin is poised to take his life just before the onset of the First Great War. Such a loss would have dire consequences for everyone involved. Ian knows he must intervene to prevent this tragedy from unfolding too soon. Inside the palace, he encounters his mother, who is in a state of panic, insisting that he is far too young for this mission. Unbeknownst to her, he has traveled through time. To aid in the rescue, Marcus's daughter, Margaret, has provided him with a crucial tool. Grateful for her support, he joins the soldiers and sets off to confront the Lord. As he searched through the dense forest, he stumbled upon bloodstains and the lifeless bodies of several goblins. To aid his quest, he conjured a spirit wolf, its keen nose honing in on the scent of blood. Meanwhile, Marcus and his son remained alive, but they were cornered by goblins, utterly drained of the strength to fight back. One of the monsters, sensing the Lord's exhaustion, launched a surprise attack from behind. Just a millisecond before the blow struck, the world around them transformed into a frozen landscape. Ian had arrived just in time, unleashing a single attack that encased every goblin in the vicinity in ice before collapsing from the effort. Marcus stared at Ian, awestruck by the boy's incredible power. Marcus slowly opened his eyes as his daughter gently roused him from sleep. He lifted his head and found her beaming at him from beside the bed. As he attempted to sit up, a wave of dizziness washed over him, and he instinctively clutched his head, asking what had happened. She replied that Ian had saved him. Overcome with emotion, Margaret burst into tears, revealing that both he and Ravi had been unconscious for a full 2 days. A moment later, the butler burst into the room, his face alight with joy at Marcus's awakening. Marcus glanced at him and inquired about the others. The butler lowered his head, delivering the somber news that the 12 soldiers had not returned. Concern etched on his face, Marcus then asked about the magician. The butler nodded, promising to fetch him immediately. Tien was at the training ground when the butler called for him. The old man hurried over, expressing gratitude for saving his life. He mentioned that Lord Marcus wanted to speak with him in his chambers. Tien raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Upon entering, he found Marcus and Ravi waiting for him, their faces lighting up with relief and warmth. They beckoned him closer, eager to engage in conversation. Peishan entered with a warm smile and inquired about Marcus's well-being. Marcus replied that he was feeling much better now, all thanks to MC, and expressed his desire to thank him in person for saving them. Ravi returned his smile as Marcus continued, noting that MC had safeguarded both the present and future of the Mogrian clan. Placing a hand over his heart, Marcus declared that the protagonist had also cleared Mount Mogrian of goblins, insisting that he could not let his benefactor go unrewarded. He reached for a box and said it was his way of expressing gratitude. At Marcus's urging, Ian took the box and opened it. His curiosity piqued. Inside, he found the ring, and his eyes widened in surprise. Marcus explained that he had heard the main character sense the mana within his daughter's ring. The ring had been in the family for generations, though its true power remained a mystery. Yet, it had proven invaluable to him. Without breaking his gaze, he explained that the ring enhanced its owner's mana, which had been crucial in their battle against the goblins. Smiling, Marcus expressed his relief and declared that from that moment on, the ring would belong to Ian, a symbol of honor and trust. The protagonist turned to him, curiosity etched on his face. "What do you mean by that honor?" Marcus smiled, his eyes gleaming with significance. "From this day forward, you shall be the Mogrian's eternal guest of honor." As MC reached for the ring nestled in the box, Marcus continued, "Will you accept this gift?" With a steady breath, MC slipped the ring onto his finger, examining its intricate design. He understood the weight of the title. Being an eternal guest of honor was a 1,000-year oath that every noble in the empire was bound to respect. Marcus bowed slightly, vowing that his family would always welcome Ian with honor and support him in difficult times. The protagonist observed him intently. Then, father and son bowed together, and Marcus pledged that this oath would be passed down through every generation, as long as the Mogrians thrived north of the Emerald River. Later, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the dense forest. The main character and his squad of knights navigated through the dense woods. Suddenly, he halted and turned to the captain. "Is Lloyd's village still far?" he inquired. The captain smiled reassuringly. "Not much farther. We just need to go around the hill." Ian listened intently, recalling Marcus's words about someone who could help him with the elixir. Marcus had mentioned an alchemist named Letty O'Heyman, who resided in the northern village of Lloyd, and was likely capable of crafting the potion they needed. He hailed from the capital, but had relocated here to gather rare herbs. As he gazed ahead, he realized that, unlike in his past life, he desperately needed the alchemist to obtain an elixir capable of restoring his lost mana. Suddenly, one of the knights shouted for the captain and Ian to look. They turned toward the village, and the protagonist froze in shock at the sight of flames consuming it. The knights unsheathed their swords, bracing themselves for battle. In the village, a bandit brandished a bloodied axe, its grim evidence of past violence. With a casual flick, he tossed it over his shoulder, commanding his men to take care of the rest. The one-eyed bandit turned, a wicked grin spreading across his face, as he declared it was time to take the boy to Lockwood. The young boy thrashed in his captive's grip, screaming, "No!" His father shouted after them, pleading for his son to be released. Suddenly, the one-eyed bandit struck the man hard in the side, sneering that he talked too much. The man doubled over in pain, groaning. Meanwhile, the boy struggled even more fiercely, begging them to stop. The one-eyed bandit, growing impatient, snapped back that the boy was becoming quite annoying. The bandit glared at the boy and sneered. "Would killing your father finally silence you?" The boy's face drained of color as tears streamed down his cheeks. With a menacing flick of his wrist, the bandit revealed a knife and approached the father. "I'll take your son somewhere better," he taunted, "so you can die in peace." The boy's cries grew desperate as he pleaded through his sobs. Right before him, the bandit struck down his father. The boy stood frozen in horror as he watched. Tears streamed down his face, and the lifeless hand of the fallen man fell to the ground. Suddenly, the bandits looked around in confusion, questioning the source of the ice that had appeared. Yingya stepped forward, encircled by menacing ice thorns. As freezing rain began to pour over the bandits, their shouts of panic filled the air. Smoke billowed near the mountain as MC stood atop a high hill, gazing down at the village below. Observing the scene, he couldn't help but feel that the ring had truly made a difference. Slowly, he turned his hand to examine the ring, contemplating how it might have elevated him to the status of a third-class magician. As Ian continued to study his hand, the sight of the villagers mourning among the ruins of their once thriving homes weighed heavily on his heart. Amidst the wreckage, he heard someone call his name. The captain rushed over, relief evident on his face. When the protagonist asked if anyone was hurt, the man assured him that everyone was safe, all thanks to his efforts. Ian nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. As he glanced around, a troubling thought crossed his mind. Was that man still alive? Suddenly, the sound of voices trying to rouse the alchemist snapped him back to reality, catching him off guard. A man cradled the unconscious alchemist in his arms, while his son desperately shook him awake. Gently, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and offered to examine his father. As he leaned in for a closer look, the protagonist felt a jolt of surprise. Carefully inspecting the man, he quickly noticed the telltale signs. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost devoid of color, and streaks of gray marred his hair. Ian's heart sank as he wondered if this was the result of man addiction. A dark memory flickered in his mind. This illness was often referred to as God's curse. For some, mana becomes trapped in the brain, inflicting relentless pain as it cannot flow through the body or escape. They endure this torment until death claims them. The main character glanced aside, contemplating that the man before him likely hadn't brought this suffering upon himself. No, it was more likely the work of an evil sorcerer, and now the situation had escalated to a dire level. He pressed two glowing fingers against the man's forehead, knowing there was only one thing he could do for now: clear out the stagnant mana and replace it with fresh energy. As he worked, the man's face relaxed, and he exhaled slowly. Ian instructed him to tend to his injuries, and the man nodded in agreement, gratitude shining in his eyes. Before he could leave, the boy grabbed his cloak and called out for him to wait. Turning back, the protagonist heard the boy ask if his father would get better. With a heavy heart, he replied that it was only a temporary solution. While giving mana could ease the pain, it wouldn't truly cure the disease. The boy gazed up at him, struggling to grasp the weight of his words. Ian understood that the relief would be fleeting. The man would need to continue receiving mana or face death. Noticing the boy's expression darken, he added that the process would be painful as well. Overwhelmed, the boy broke into tears, vowing to find the reindeer flower and save his father. Suddenly, he spun around and dashed away. His father called after him, asking where he was going. Ian froze for a moment at the sound of the boy's name. A dark-haired young man flashed through his memory: Douglas, the greatest alchemist in the history of the Empire. He was born a commoner, yet he ascended to greatness. The protagonist recalled another crucial detail. In his past life, Douglas despised magicians. Suddenly, everything fell into place. This wretched man was an alchemist, destroyed by his addiction to mana, and it all led back to a magician and a mystical flower from the north. The memory of Douglas's tears echoed in his mind as he vowed to find that flower. It truly had the power to neutralize mana, but it was also a lethal poison. Suddenly, Ian remembered the poison drink, and his face went pale. He leaned forward, casting an acceleration spell. Douglas turned just as Ian rushed toward him. The protagonist closed the distance quickly, seizing the boy by both shoulders. He warned him that robbers might still be lurking outside the village, and that the forest was far from safe. Tears streamed down Douglas's face as he insisted he couldn't just sit and wait. "If I don't find the flower," he began. But Ian interrupted him, their argument escalating. In the midst of their quarrel, Ian quietly cast a sleep spell. Douglas swayed slightly, mumbling under his breath as the world around him faded. The boy slumped onto MC's shoulder, and he instinctively caught him, releasing a sigh of relief. For a brief moment, silence enveloped them. As he gazed at the sleeping child, Ian couldn't help but think that, aside from his youth, the boy bore a striking resemblance to the great alchemist from his past life. Sitting beside him, the protagonist suddenly grasped the weight of his presence in the village. If he hadn't arrived, Douglas's father would have perished, and Douglas himself would have been taken away. A vision of an older Douglas flashed through his mind, the very man who had concocted the poison that ultimately claimed his life. He was aware of the plan devised by MC's brother and had acted under his orders. The realization left him momentarily speechless. He glanced at the boy, contemplating whether he should eliminate the threat before it even had a chance to manifest. But then, Ian smacked his forehead in frustration. Charging in recklessly could jeopardize everything. Douglas was far too talented. He had risen from obscurity to become an esteemed imperial alchemist. With that, the protagonist chose a different path. He needed to win Douglas over to his side. Yet he hesitated, covering his mouth in contemplation. Even if he rescued him from slavery, what guarantee was there that Douglas wouldn't betray him later? The protagonist glanced at his hand, uncertainty gnawing at him. A voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. The captain rushed over, concern etched on his face. Ian asked what was wrong, and the captain explained that he had come looking for him after Douglas had mysteriously vanished. He glanced down at the boy, his expression serious. "Douglas acted recklessly," he said, "so I had to put him to sleep for a while." As the protagonist stood up, he declared that with the captain present, it was only fitting for him to carry the boy back to the village. The captain observed him closely and inquired if he was planning to leave. Ian glanced back, revealing a hint of determination in his eyes, and replied that he had something to take care of. With that, he turned away, adding that he was headed in a different direction. Deep into the night, one small house remained awake, a warm light glowing softly through its window. Lydio Heyman sat up in bed and glanced at his son beside him. "Are you awake?" he asked. Without turning, Douglas replied, "I am." Lydio informed him that a magician had saved the village and that Douglas had acted recklessly alongside him. Still lying there, Douglas vowed he would find the flower. Lydio cautioned him about the danger, reminding him that the robbers were still lurking nearby. In a sudden burst of frustration, Douglas shot up and shouted, "What else am I supposed to do?" The magician revealed that his father would continue to fall ill. Lydio lowered his head, offering a gentle reassurance. "Don't worry," he said softly, but Douglas interrupted, tears streaming down his face. "We've been searching for over a year," he lamented. "We found nothing. How can you expect me to believe that now?" Both of them turned at the sound of a voice from the doorway. Lydio narrowed his eyes, demanding to know who was there. Standing in the entrance was Ian, casually leaning against the frame. "I heard you needed a randier flower," he said with a smirk. As the door creaked open, Lydio swung it wide, fixing MC with a piercing gaze. He lowered his hood and greeted them with a calm demeanor. The moment Douglas laid eyes on him, he shouted, "This is the magician." Lydio, however, remained skeptical. Ian placed a glowing stone on the table and introduced himself. Lydio stared at it, curiosity piqued, and asked, "What is this?" As he leaned in for a closer look, his eyes widened in surprise. It truly was a randier flower. The flower was encased in a clear blue stone. The protagonist declared he would hand it over, but first, he demanded an answer. Locking eyes with the alchemist, he asked how Lydio knew the flower's true potential. Lydio lowered his head and closed his eyes, confessing that he had read about it. Ian listened intently as Lydio explained that the information came from a reference book. With a gesture, Lydio indicated the book, mentioning that his father had gifted it to him. He then opened the pages, inviting Ian to take a closer look. As Ian read the entry, he discovered details about a rare flower. It thrived only in the north, had the ability to neutralize mana, boasted 12 dark petals, green leaves, and a poisonous stem. It withers as soon as it's picked, making it impossible to store or cultivate, Ian remarked. Curious, he asked if Lydio's father had also been an alchemist. Lou nodded, folding his arms. "Alchemy is our family trade," he replied, "and so is this book." His tone was firm, underscoring the weight of their legacy. The protagonist raised his head and stated that if that were the case, Lou should also be aware that the flower's poison is lethal to a wizard with 2 types of mana. Lou stiffened, swallowing hard. He acknowledged the weight of the question, but insisted that his family had never crafted elixirs meant to harm the living. He swore it on the honor of the Hammond family. MC turned his gaze to Douglas, skepticism still lingering in his eyes. Douglas flinched, meeting his gaze with confusion. Finally, Ian looked away, conceding, with a nod of understanding. He picked up the stone adorned with the flower and expressed his gratitude to Lydio for providing clarity. Gripping the stone tightly, he extended it forward, offering a heartfelt apology. At that moment, the flower withered and crumbled in Ian's hand. He explained that it couldn't be transported. He had merely frozen it to maintain its shape. Lydio stepped back, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Did you lie to me?" he asked. The protagonist met his gaze steadily. "I've already proven I can find the flower," he replied, his confidence unwavering. Lydio extended an invitation, asking if the alchemist was interested in making a deal. The alchemist's eyes widened in curiosity as he inquired about the specifics. Lydio, glancing down, proposed a solution. He would continue supplying mana to alleviate the burden of the alchemist's illness. With a spark of hope, Ian raised his head and added that he would also find a way to transform the flower into medicine. After a moment of contemplation, he concluded that the note he needed must exist somewhere. In his past life, Douglas and Ragnar had arrived at this same conclusion. As a result, Lydio would have to accompany him to the capital. Without lifting his gaze from the floor, Lydio quietly inquired about what he was supposed to do there. The protagonist envisioned a vibrant red elixir, claiming it could not only restore his missing mana, but also aid in his mother's treatment. Lydio stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. "If a magician can hire any alchemist, why would they choose you? You're not even the best." MC closed his eyes for a moment, expressing his need for someone who would remain by his side and craft elixirs solely for him. Douglas leaned in, listening intently. As Ian pressed Lediel for answers, he recalled how his son had dashed into the forest, driven solely by the desire to save him. As a father, he knew he had to make the best choice for his child. Douglas glanced up at his father, startled, and opened his mouth to speak. Lediel, stroking his chin, remarked that Douglas was clearly no ordinary boy. Then he requested a moment to think. The protagonist nodded, lowering his head slightly, and replied, "Of course." As Lediel approached and placed a reassuring hand on Douglas's shoulder, the MC realized that in this life, Douglas had neither lost his father nor become a slave. Observing their bond, Ian silently vowed that he would not allow Douglas's talent to fall into his brother's hands. Lediel tenderly stroked Douglas's head, a gesture filled with warmth and care. Later, he perched on a fence beneath a tree, gazing quietly over the village. Suddenly, a voice called out, pulling him from his thoughts. It was the captain, announcing that the preparations were complete and they were ready to depart. Ian averted his gaze, remaining silent as his eyes wandered back to the alchemist's house. As MC rose from the fence, he announced that they could begin moving. Yet one lingering thought weighed on his mind. They still lacked a definitive answer. Just then, the door of the hut creaked open. Lediel and Douglas emerged, their eyes falling on Ian. Douglas quickly registered that he was still present. He turned to them and offered a brief approving hum before walking over. "Have you made up your mind, Lediel?" he asked. Lediel nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "Yes," he replied. "There's no point in refusing when my life depends on it." As he descended the steps, Lediel scratched the back of his head. A mix of determination and uncertainty etched on his face. With a gentle smile, he reminded the protagonist to keep his promise. Ian returned the smile, assuring him he would, no matter what. Turning to Douglas, who was clinging to his father, he asked, "Do you really think you can heal me?" The protagonist responded with a warm smile filled with hope. He lowered his head and vowed that he could. Douglas stared at him, repeating the question, but Ian's response remained unchanged. Overjoyed, Douglas threw his hands in the air, closed his eyes, and exclaimed, asking if he could call the protagonist Captain. Caught off guard, the MC hesitated, but finally replied that he could if he wanted. Without missing a beat, Douglas eagerly confirmed that he did. He recalled the greatest alchemist, Douglas, and the unwavering belief he once held in him. Suddenly, a horse thundered down the forest path, its hooves pounding against the ground. The sound made Ian and Douglas turn in unison. A knight leaped from the saddle and urgently informed the protagonist that they needed to hurry. Without hesitation, the protagonist asked, "What happened?" The knight stepped forward, revealing that the prince had already crossed the Comis River. MC stared in shock, his mind racing as he questioned why the prince was so close. The knight replied that the news had only arrived that morning. MC shot him a hard look, frustration bubbling within him. Why was he the last to know? Ignoring the knight's gaze, Ian brushed past him, demanding to borrow the horse. The knight inquired if the protagonist even knew how to ride. Approaching the horse, the protagonist gently stroked its mane and admitted, "Not really, but I think we'll manage." With determination, he took the horse's head in both hands and cast a taming spell. In an instant, the horse's eyes shimmered with a brilliant blue light. MC's eyes shimmered with determination as he insisted they needed to reach the provincial castle. He turned to the horse, asking if it knew the way. The creature slowly lowered itself, ready to comply. Ian studied the horse for a moment before turning to the astonished captain and alchemist. "Don't forget to bring Mr. Lediel Hammond," he reminded them. With a burst of energy, he sprang onto the horse, declaring, "I'll scout ahead." A grand convoy escorted a massive white carriage, its presence commanding attention. Inside, the crown prince sat by the window, his expression clouded with discontent. He recalled the moment in the emperor's office when Tien had informed him that there were still more tasks awaiting him. The tower master, Herbert, had recently been in close contact with the fifth prince, a revelation that sent a jolt of surprise through the crown prince. With his back turned, the emperor remarked that the noble's loyalty to Herbert made his support invaluable. However, at this moment, his favor lay with the fifth prince. The crown prince stood tall, absorbing every word. Still not facing them, the emperor continued, noting that the fifth prince, Ragnar, was astute enough to enlist the tower master in his quest to gather powerful allies. Terry turned to his son, resting a hand on the back of his chair. "We need to win over Ian Page before the tower can take action," the emperor stated firmly. The prince narrowed his eyes, feeling the weight of his father's words as he was instructed to lure the protagonist away. Ian could prove to be a significant asset. Back in the carriage, the crown prince exhaled sharply, glancing away in annoyance. He ran a hand through his hair, reflecting on how MC was just a child despite being a magician. What could he possibly contribute? Besides, all magicians answered to the ivory tower, so why would MC ever consider joining him? Glancing up at the window, he bitterly questioned why the Tower Master had chosen the fifth prince. Once he ascended to the throne, he vowed to rid himself of everyone who had overlooked him. He partially obscured his face and shot a glare to the side. Just then, one of the escort knights approached, calling out to the crown prince. It was Oliver, the second captain of the Imperial Knights. From the window, he suggested they at least send word to Mogrian Castle. The prince gazed out thoughtfully, reminding Oliver that they had already discussed this matter. Troubled, Oliver replied that the castle would need time to prepare for his visit and pleaded for some mercy. With a weary sigh, the prince inquired if Oliver's family resided in the north, near Mogrian. Oliver confirmed yes. When asked how much farther they had to go, he replied that it would take about 2 more days. The prince offered a slight grin, declaring that since they were so close now, a message could indeed be sent after all. Folding his arms, he smugly added that he was eager to see how the northern guards, the Empire's shields, would welcome him. Oliver peered into the carriage, relief washing over him as he expressed his gratitude. In the distance, the provincial castle came into view, alive with a buzz of excitement, as shouts announced the imminent arrival of the crown prince. The lord gestured sharply, barking orders that not a single speck of dust should remain. Marcus pressed a hand to his forehead, pondering why no one had thought to warn them sooner. He hadn't anticipated the visit would come so quickly. Turning to the butler, he inquired whether the other families had arrived. The butler confirmed that the Macfadians and Oliver would be there shortly, while everyone else was already present. Marcus then asked if there was any news from the magician. The butler lowered his head and replied, "Not yet." Marcus briefly covered his face, muttering that this was bad before declaring he had to leave. Just then, a knight shouted that His Highness the Crown Prince had arrived. A grand convoy rolled up to Mogrian Castle, coming to a sudden halt. The prince stepped out and gazed intently to the south, his expression serious as he surveyed the scene ahead. He approached Marcus, eager to ask about the magician's whereabouts. Just as Marcus began to respond, a horse burst onto the scene, skidding to a halt on the road. Ian was slumped over the saddle, but he managed to lift his head slightly and apologized for his tardiness. Marcus flinched in surprise but quickly recovered, expressing his relief that Ian had finally arrived. The crowd behind him watched in bewilderment, struggling to comprehend that this child was the magician they had heard about. Marcus leaned down, giving the protagonist a gentle hug, and explained that the Emperor had personally sent for him, urging him to step forward. Together, Marcus and Ian approached the prince and Oliver. The crown prince gazed down at him, his expression curious, and asked, "Are you MC Page?" He stared back, realizing it had been a long time since he had last seen him. As the protagonist glanced aside, he noticed a group of people in white cloaks. His gaze landed on one girl in particular. The dark-haired girl turned to him, offering a faint smile, and he recognized her as Cecilia. The sight caught him off guard. He knew she was a spy for the Coldwood Empire. The group entered the hall, and Oliver bowed his head slightly, urging the prince to exercise some restraint. Holding a glass of wine, the prince scoffed, declaring that wine was the only thing worth having in this dreary place. He glanced around, his discontent evident as he lamented the long journey, calling the venue boring and expressing his disdain for the magician. Oliver could only look at him in confusion, unsure of how to respond. After a brief pause, the prince declared that he would prefer to rest. Nearby, Cecilia leaned against a column, a glass of wine in hand, observing the room. As she surveyed the scene, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Emperor's missions had taken a peculiar turn lately, particularly this sudden fascination with a boy. Narrowing her eyes, Cecilia recalled the 2 orders she had received just a few days prior. She needed to verify the rumors surrounding the young magician. If they proved true, she would kidnap him and his mother for Coldwood. As she observed the banquet, Cecilia pondered what made this boy so significant, that he warranted such drastic measures. Determined to uncover the truth, she made her way to the training ground, scanning the area for any sign of him. Then she spotted Ian standing in the middle of the field. There he was. A faint smile graced her lips as she began to cast with her left hand. She decided to test him first with something simple. The wind tousled her hair as she called out the spell. Magic arrows. A barrage of magical arrows shot straight toward him. Cecilia stared ahead, taken aback. Ian had already raised a shield, glaring at her with intensity. "Who are you?" he demanded. She simply smiled, claiming to be a magician from the ivory tower, here only to greet him. Ian turned fully toward her, annoyance etched on his face. "Is attacking from behind how you say hello?" he retorted. She took a step back, warning him to mind his tone. After all, she was older, and he should show her some respect. Ian fell silent, lowering his head as he uttered a single name, Cecilia. She froze, shock washing over her. He continued, Cecilia Coldwalker. Fear flickered in her eyes. Regaining her composure, Cecilia demanded to know who he was and how he knew her name. The main character had just asked for her thoughts when he flashed a small grin. That's the name every Coldwood spy uses, he said, confidently claiming he knew everyone working with her. As he took a few slow steps closer, Ian began to rattle off names. Yule, the caretaker of the Malton stable. Cecilia moved toward him, disbelief etched across her face, but he continued, unfazed. Robin, the Emperor's secretary, stood alongside Rio from the 9th Division, and Isabel, a palace maid. He cast a glance at her and asked if she realized they were all connected. He certainly did. Cecilia narrowed her eyes, regarding him as if he were nothing more than a foolish child. But then, a spark of rage ignited within her. Summoning a fireball, she warned him that while she was unsure how he had acquired such knowledge, it would be wiser for him to pretend he knew nothing at all. A moment later, she unleashed a fireball directly at him. Cecilia watched in disbelief as the flames danced and spread. To her astonishment, Ian emerged from the inferno accompanied by Ash. Striding through the flames, he declared himself the only one who knew about their secret and began casting spells of his own. Fear flickered across Cecilia's face as she demanded to know why he hadn't reported them. At that moment, she couldn't comprehend how he remained completely unharmed. The protagonist hurled a glowing sphere of magic into the air, confidently declaring that he still had plenty of tricks up his sleeve. Cecilia's eyes widened in horror as sharp ice shards suddenly hurtled toward her. Ian swept his hand aside, causing more fragments to materialize behind him. I know why you're after me, he declared, his voice steady. With a swift motion, he thrust out his hand and unleashed Ice Spear. The icy projectiles hurtled toward Cecilia in a flurry. She tensed, quickly assuming her stance and raising a mana barrier just in time. Though she managed to shield herself from the onslaught, cracks rapidly spiderwebbed across the surface of her barrier, threatening to shatter under the pressure. Sweat trickled down her face as she fought to maintain her concentration. Ian raised his hand, and a massive red orb materialized in his palm, his glare fixed firmly on Cecilia. With a fierce shout, he hurled it at her, declaring, Fire explosion! Cecilia strained under the pressure, unable to counterattack while sustaining the barrier, but if she didn't act quickly, she knew it would be the end. She leaped just as the barrier shattered, ice shards slicing into her leg. Despite the pain, Cecilia pushed forward, but more shards tore into her, drawing blood. She sprinted on, each fragment cutting deeper. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted behind her, sending her stumbling in fear as she turned to face the chaos. Cecilia could only stare in terror as she glanced back at the explosion. Dropping to the ground, she shut her eyes, convincing herself she had survived. He must have exhausted all his mana with that last attack, and help would arrive soon. Taking a deep breath, she opened her eyes and looked up, reassuring herself that he had no proof. No one would believe a child, and the tower's magicians would undoubtedly side with her. Ian began to approach her slowly. Cecilia turned her head sharply in his direction, startled. She had been contemplating her recovery, planning to decide her next move later. But then she heard him say he could expose her. He stopped beside her and declared it was true. Cecilia turned to him sharply, demanding to know if he really meant it. The protagonist smirked, confirming that there was evidence even the Cold Walkers themselves were unaware of. Furious, Cecilia spun around and shouted that he was lying. Just then, guards emerged at the entrance of the training ground. Oliver rushed over to the girl, his heart racing. He lifted Cecilia gently, his eyes widening as he noticed her injuries. From the crowd, Ian's voice rang out, claiming responsibility for what had happened. All eyes turned to him, the tension thickening in the air. Oliver fixed Ian with a piercing glare, demanding an explanation. He folded his hands and revealed that he had accidentally witnessed a woman meeting with a masked man. Cecilia stared at him, puzzled by his sudden confession. Glancing slightly to the side, Ian continued, explaining that when they spotted him, they attacked and attempted to kill him. Oliver interjected, asking if that meant he had only acted in self-defense. The protagonist nodded in affirmation. Oliver glanced around before asking if he could demonstrate his point. The MC replied that they had been inspecting each other's bodies for any marks. The guard lowered his head, contemplating the situation, before commanding that Cecilia be examined. The two men accompanying her immediately protested, claiming the captain was overstepping his authority and disrespecting the tower's magicians. A knight slowly unsheathed his sword, the blade glinting ominously as it came to rest just inches from the shouting man's face. Oliver held the weapon steady, his voice firm as he reminded them that the crown prince was present and that this incident unfolded under his watchful eye. The man raised his hands in surrender as Oliver pressed on, demanding the truth and seeking to understand how this was connected to the tower's magicians. The man urgently pleaded for Cecilia to receive treatment first. Oliver raised a hand, insisting that the examination must take precedence. After the women completed their inspection of the spy, Oliver inquired if they had discovered anything. They lowered their heads, responding with a somber no. The men quickly interjected, claiming they had accused the wrong person, and insisted that treatment for Cecilia should begin immediately. Oliver turned to Ian, questioning him about a possible lie. Ian shook his head, insisting he hadn't lied. Without hesitation, Oliver approached Cecilia, turning her over with a firm grip. "Forgive me," he pleaded. Cecilia could only watch as he brought his glowing hand to the back of her neck, leaving the entire crowd in stunned silence. A bright mana mark glowed on her back. Cecilia shot Ian an angry glare, demanding to know what he was doing. Rising to her feet, the protagonist explained that he had seen them touch that area, as if they were checking for a mark. He recalled the man he had tortured, reflecting on how all Cold Walkers were sent to training camps, where they received a hidden mark known only to the trainers. It wasn't until one individual finally broke after a year of torment that the secret was revealed. Oliver glanced at the others, his voice steady as he asked if anyone knew the meaning behind the mark. One man turned his face away, admitting he had never seen it before, and then asked if Ian knew anything about it. Oliver glanced down, contemplating that perhaps no one truly understood its exact meaning. Yet, it was evident that something deeper was at play. Cecilia shot him a glare as Oliver commanded them to focus on healing her, insisting that they could save the questions for later. The men exchanged uneasy glances when instructed to prepare a mantra for her. Suddenly, Oliver turned sharply to MC and called out, declaring that if Ian was correct, he would personally inform His Highness about him. MC remained silent, his gaze fixed ahead. Later, the prince lounged on a sofa, arms crossed, and inquired with a hint of skepticism, "Did you really defeat a third-class magician?" Oliver confirmed the truth of the matter, prompting the prince to express his disbelief. Leaning back thoughtfully, the prince inquired about the impression MC had left on Oliver. With a sidelong glance, Oliver replied that Ian was unlike any other magician he had encountered. The way Ian spoke and carried himself was far beyond that of a typical teenager. The prince tightened his arms across his chest, deep in thought. After a moment of contemplation, he closed his eyes and declared that he wished to meet him in person. He then commanded Oliver to bring the visitor in. As the protagonist stepped into the prince's chambers, he offered a slight bow and announced his presence. The prince rose from the sofa, clasping his hands behind his back, and replied with a simple yes. He had heard that Ian had exposed a Coldwood spy and defeated her, despite her status as a high-ranking magician. Glancing toward the fireplace, the prince remarked that it was a victory worthy of praise. The main character lowered his gaze slightly and replied that such praise was an honor. The prince then extended his hand, suggesting that Ian deserved a reward for his bravery. If he could wish for anything, what would it be? The protagonist slowly lifted his head, contemplating just how far the prince's generosity truly extended. With the offer laid before him, he decided to seize the opportunity. "That sounds good," Ian murmured quietly. Gazing at the prince, he requested permission to visit the ruins of the old ivory tower on their way to the castle. The prince tilted his head, curiosity piqued. "What's so fascinating about that place?" The MC, a bit embarrassed, folded his hands and replied, "I heard stories about those ruins as a child. I've always wanted to see them for myself." The prince studied him for a moment, pondering how he could have asked for anything grand, yet chose something so seemingly insignificant. Despite the prince's casual mention of their destination, Ian felt a surge of confidence. He nodded quickly, convinced that this would be a straightforward task. In his mind, the true objective was crystal clear. A hidden book beneath the ancient tower ruins. Below lay a dungeon, and within it rested a tome of dragon spells, inscribed in the dragon tonga, crucial element of time magic. There was nothing else quite like it. In his past life, he had discovered it just before his untimely end, never having the chance to fully grasp its teachings. This time, however, would be different. The protagonist lowered his gaze, a faint grin playing on his lips. In the stillness of the night, the only sounds were the rhythmic clatter of wheels and the soft clip-clop of horses. An opulent carriage glided through the shadowy forest. Ian's mother peered out the window, her eyes sparkling with wonder as she remarked that it was their first journey this far. With a warm smile, she turned to Ian and asked if it was truly the case. Ian returned her smile, affirming that it was indeed. Lydio placed a hand on his chest and offered to show her around, having lived in the capital for quite some time. Mrs. Page chuckled softly and expressed her gratitude. Meanwhile, Ian stiffened slightly, casting a sidelong glance, unsure of what kind of tour they were discussing. Suddenly, a knock on the window broke his thoughts. He turned to see Paul, the second vice captain of the Imperial Army, bowing slightly. "We've arrived," he announced. Before them loomed a grand marble structure. As the protagonist stepped out of the carriage, he learned they would be staying here for the next 2 days. The prince had granted him the freedom to roam as he pleased. With a smile, Paul assured him that this liberty extended throughout the entire area. Pointing ahead, he announced that he would first lead them to their accommodations. Together, they made their way into a quaint little village. An elderly bald man bowed deeply, placing a hand over his chest as he expressed the great honor it was for their humble village to welcome the crown prince. The prince, appearing slightly bashful, touched his cheek and replied that it was no big deal. From his vantage point behind them, Ian observed the exchange intently. He turned fully toward the prince, surprised to find him behaving quite normally. This was a stark contrast to his past life, where the prince had always seemed cold and hostile during their encounters. Back then, the prince had regarded him with an unmistakable menace. Ian realized that Ragnar had always been by the prince's side, shaping his demeanor. Observing the prince's smile, he noted how differently he interacted with those outside his family and the nobility. Turning his gaze away, Ian began to grasp why the emperor favored this prince as his heir. Just then, someone called out to him. It was Douglas, who approached with a curious glint in his eye. "When are we heading to the ruins?" he asked eagerly. MC regarded the alchemist with a calm demeanor, inquiring, "What's your interest in them?" Douglas scratched the back of his head, a sheepish smile creeping onto his face. "Honestly, I just want to see them for myself," he confessed, letting out a small breath as if the admission had lifted a weight off his shoulders. Since the hidden basement only revealed itself at dawn, he suggested they go together the following day. Douglas's face lit up, and he asked once more to confirm. Ian nodded affirmatively, and the boy erupted with joy. Lydio and the protagonist's mother observed the two boys, noting how Douglas had seemingly formed a friendship with the young magician. Covering his mouth slightly, the alchemist leaned in and whispered to Mrs. Page, curious about Ian. "Has he always acted this mature, even at just 12? He asked, his tone a mix of admiration and surprise. Mrs. Page gazed at her son, noting how much he had matured. She remarked that Mage was not only intelligent, but also compassionate, much like his father. Deep down, she felt a pang of guilt for the way he tirelessly tried to step into his father's shoes, even if he never voiced it. Lydio absorbed this revelation, realizing he truly was like her husband, and asked if he had been a magician. Mrs. Page quickly shook her head, clarifying that Friend had been an ordinary man. Reflecting on her husband, she recounted how, even before the protagonist was born, Friend had left for work one day and simply vanished. 5 years later, his belongings were returned to them, a haunting reminder of his absence. Her expression fell as she confessed that she didn't know why, but lately, Ian had been acting like a stranger. Mrs. Page abruptly halted, leaving Lydio feeling uneasy. She exhaled softly and dismissed it, saying it was nothing. Ian's mind drifted back to his past life. After the war, he had fled from both the Emperor and the Ivory Tower, wandering aimlessly beneath the stars, without a true destination in sight. That road ultimately brought him here. Staff in hand, he had traversed open fields in another life. Initially, he dismissed the discovery of the ancient tower ruins as mere coincidence, but deep down, he sensed he was destined to arrive. As he approached the marble remnants, a wave of familiarity washed over him. In his past life, the young protagonist had stood in this very spot. As he gazed upward, Ian felt an unsettling sense of permanence. The structure loomed above him, unchanged by the passage of time. Memories flooded back 3 centuries ago. This very place had been the battleground for a fierce conflict between the tower's magicians and the dragon descendants known as the Draconians. In his mind, dragons and gargoyles unleashed dark magic potent enough to obliterate an empire. Yet, the top mages of the Ivory Tower, led by Mitchell, stood resolute against them. These powerful sorcerers shattered the dragon's will and vanquished the gargoyles, all to safeguard their homeland. After leading the nation to victory, the emperor relinquished his throne and dedicated himself to the tower, establishing a new one in Green Riverium, where it still stands today. The image of that magnificent tower lingered in Ian's mind. As he stood among the ruins, he reflected on how the old tower had ultimately been abandoned, left to fade into the annals of history. He paused at a particular spot, sensing that this was the place. Pressing his hand against the stone, a soft light began to glow at his fingertips. He focused intently on a single point, his breath held in anticipation. Suddenly, a staircase materialized before him, leading down into the depths of the dungeon. With determination, Ian began his descent. He raised his hand and cast a light spell, conjuring a small glowing orb that hovered above his palm. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it soaring upward, where it landed softly on the head of a stone gargoyle. Before him, on a pedestal, loomed an ancient gargoyle, its stone visage steeped in mystery. Ian recalled the shock he felt the first time he laid eyes on it. Suddenly, the gargoyle began to stir. In an instant, the creature shed its stone exterior. Ian straightened, marveling at the fact that even after 300 years, a genuine gargoyle had remained hidden in this forsaken place. He gazed at it, and in the blink of an eye, it vanished. Ian glanced up just in time to see the creature diving toward him. He thrust out both hands, conjuring a swirling ball of water between them. With a fierce determination, he hurled it at the monster. The blast struck its chest, sending it crashing backward into the wall. Ian's gaze remained fixed on the spot where it had fallen, tension coiling in his chest. In his past life, he had dispatched this beast in mere seconds. With his current strength, this would require genuine effort. The gargoyle emerged from the hole in the wall, its purple eyes blazing with malice as it locked onto him. In an instant, it let out a piercing shriek and lunged at him once more. Qian dropped low, pressed a hand to the floor, and summoned ice spears. Massive spikes of ice pierced through the gargoyle. Undeterred, he continued to cast lightning, his gaze fixed on the creature. With intense concentration, he unleashed the spell. A colossal bolt of electricity struck the monster, causing its entire body to convulse violently. As Ian gazed at the lifeless gargoyle, he expected that its defeat would reveal a new passage. Suddenly, an opening began to materialize in the ground beside him. The hatch swung wide, and a faint smile crept across the protagonist's face. Everything felt eerily unchanged. He leaped down, casting a soft landing spell as dust swirled around him. Touching the ground lightly, he spotted a table ahead, upon which rested a book, glowing with radiant light. A wide smile spread across Ian's face. It seemed they had finally met much sooner this time. The Dragon Book. He approached it, studying its pages with keen interest. As he stepped closer, the main character pondered who might have concealed the book in this spot. Tilting his head, he speculated it could either be the work of a dragon or the first magician. With great care, Ian picked up the book, hoping that in this life he would finally be able to read the notes and grasp their true meaning. He froze in shock, unable to comprehend what lay before him. The book was open, yet entirely blank. In a panic, he flipped through the pages, struggling to grasp how this could have happened. As he looked up, a dawning realization washed over him. He knew exactly who was behind this. Visions of his past self flooded Ian's mind, and the realization struck him. He was the one who had already used the book. With a swift motion, the protagonist snapped the book shut, a wave of relief washing over him. As he recalled the spells he had mastered, he parted his lips to speak, only to flinch in shock at the sound of his own voice. He instinctively touched his throat, realizing he couldn't speak. As he gazed at the book, Ian deduced that the dragon language operated through mana rather than spoken words. Dragon spells could only be cast once before they disappeared. With the absence of time magic, he understood that returning to the past was no longer an option. A small smile crept across his face as he closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Part of him had always wished he could return whenever he desired. But as he opened his eyes, he realized it was better to confront the truth now, before it was too late. This new life would come with an even heavier burden. Gazing up at the light above, he felt that weight settle upon him. A voice warned the main character that they would soon reach the capital. As the convoy rolled into the grand city, Ian gazed at the bustling streets, feeling a sense of arrival wash over him. However, his thoughts quickly shifted to the prisoner in the cage, and a wave of concern began to settle in. Cecilia remained trapped inside, and if she managed to escape and reach the other cold walkers, the Empire would be on his tail in no time. He recalled their conversation, realizing that the first thing she would do was inform them that he was aware of their existence. That thought only fueled his anger further. He had enough problems to deal with already. Suddenly, Ian glanced to his left. A magician in a gray cloak stood before the convoy. The tower's owner stepped forward, raising a hand as the crowd behind him shouted for them to halt. Oliver slammed on the brakes, bewildered. He turned to the old man and called out, seeking answers. Dismounting his horse, Oliver confronted the captain, demanding to know why he was obstructing the crown prince's path. The captain stiffened at the mention of the emperor's order. With a sense of urgency, the tower master presented a scroll, declaring that the case involving the girl magician had been transferred to the ivory tower, and she must be surrendered to them. With a composed expression, Oliver noted that they must be in quite a hurry if they weren't even pausing to enter the castle. The tower master closed his eyes and declared it was best to resolve the matter immediately. As a fifth-class magician brushed past Oliver, he offered a casual remark, urging him to take it easy. They would handle the investigation themselves, allowing everyone else to rest easy. Oliver clenched his teeth, his veins bulging with tension. Without breaking his gaze, he commanded that the prisoner be handed over to the Tower Master. This snapped the magician back to attention. It was premature to label her a criminal until her guilt was established. She was still a tower magician and deserved the respect that came with her title. With that thought in mind, he strode toward the cage. The knights by the carriage were in heated debate, insisting that they had escorted and guarded her throughout the journey, so the magicians had no right to take control. One soldier even questioned the legality of the order, regardless of who issued it. It simply wasn't fair. As Ian watched from the window, he felt a sense of inevitability wash over him. He understood that their concern wasn't for Cecilia. It was the very notion of a magician being judged by mere soldiers that unsettled them. They planned to cast her into the deepest prison of the Ivory Tower, a place so secure that even the Cold Walkers couldn't breach its walls. This would buy them time to save face and devise their next move. His mother, gazing out, inquired about the commotion. He reassured her it was nothing important. As he continued to stare outside, he felt a flicker of relief. At least one problem had been resolved. Just then, someone called for Ian and delivered a message. Before entering the castle, His Highness requested one final visit. Their carriage came to a halt in front of an impressive mansion. The protagonist stepped out, taking in the sight, and instantly recognized it. In his past life, Ragnar had gifted him this very mansion after he achieved the rank of 5th-class magician. The prince approached with a smile, inquiring if he liked the mansion. The crown prince explained that it was a gift from his father. Bowing deeply, the MC expressed his gratitude, saying the emperor's kindness knew no bounds. This made the prince chuckle and dismiss the compliment with a wave. Ian reflected on his own journey, having acquired time magic at 20. Yet here he was, not even 14, and already receiving such a grand gift. Whatever the reason, it was truly remarkable. The prince offered to leave his family behind, while they ventured to the castle to meet the emperor. The protagonist felt a rush of warmth and blushed slightly, taking a deep breath to steady herself. He then asked if he and his mother could take a quick look around first. The prince nodded, granting them permission. Ian's face lit up with excitement as he immediately thanked him and stepped inside with his mother. Turning to her, he asked how she felt about it all. She blinked in surprise, wondering what he meant. He gazed at her thoughtfully and gently explained, "This is our new home." Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she cried out in joy, while he was reminded of his past life, where she had perished long before he ever reached this place. With a hand on her chest, she remarked that someone as simple as her could never belong in a home so magnificent. It seemed even more splendid than an imperial palace. The protagonist gazed at her, realizing that no matter how powerful he became, he could never escape the pain of losing her. He revealed that the mansion actually belonged to the imperial family. As she stepped slowly into the hall, Ian felt a shift within him. This time, he could offer her what he hadn't been able to before, and they could share more moments together in this place. Watching her, he felt a surge of happiness. In this life, he could finally witness his mother's smile. The main character blushed, his gaze fixed on her. She looked around in awe, marveling at the vast beauty of the place. However, her expression shifted as she asked, "But how am I supposed to keep such a huge house clean?" Ian's mood dipped slightly at her words. Without hesitation, he rushed over to her, calling out, "Wait!" He believed that from this moment on, she would never have to wash dirty dishes or clean again. Shortly after, they arrived at Green Imperial Castle. The protagonist adjusted his sleeve, acknowledging the nerves bubbling within him. As he straightened his formal attire, he reflected on how, in his past life, he never had the opportunity to meet the current emperor. By the time he graduated from the academy and set out to change the world, illness had already claimed the emperor's life. Ian had always heard tales of the emperor's wisdom and exceptional skill in governance. As he strolled down the hallway, he hoped to glean some valuable lessons from the legacy left behind. Just then, he turned his gaze and spotted a magnificent house outside, its grandeur captivating his attention. He examined it intently, and then Ragnar crossed his mind. Ian couldn't help but wonder what the Empire's 5th prince was up to now. Of all the Emperor's sons, Ragnar bore the closest resemblance to their great father. Yet, unlike the Emperor, Ragnar was devoid of compassion and mercy. The protagonist clenched his fist, reminding himself that Ragnar had once been a friend, but was now a formidable enemy. Lowering his head, he pondered the inevitable confrontation that awaited them. As he approached the golden doors, an attendant stepped forward, gesturing for him to enter. "The Emperor is waiting," the attendant announced, his tone both formal and urgent. He stepped forward as the doors creaked open, revealing the grandeur of the throne room. Inside, the emperor sat regally, flanked by the crown prince. Ian dropped to one knee, bowing his head in reverence. "It is a great honor to meet your majesty," he declared. At the emperor's command to rise, Ian stood, his heart racing with anticipation. Terry observed him closely and remarked that the MC, a boy from the north, was still young, yet had already achieved so much. The boy lowered his gaze slightly, feeling that this assessment was inaccurate. The Emperor responded, insisting he was merely speaking the truth. Ian had made remarkable progress in such a short time that he likely hadn't even mastered the proper etiquette of the palace yet, allowing him to simply be himself. The protagonist bowed in agreement, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. He truly hadn't had the time to learn court etiquette. As he focused on the floor, he recalled Ragnar's words from their first meeting, echoing in his mind. From his throne, the Emperor cast a glance in his direction and remarked that he had traveled a long way. The Crown Prince inquired if he liked the mansion, noting that he had chosen one previously used by the royal family. The protagonist smiled gently, admitting that even in his wildest dreams, he had never envisioned a home like this. The Emperor, with a hint of amusement, asked once more if he truly liked it. Ian lifted his gaze and affirmed that, of course, he did. His mother shared in his happiness. Terry then revealed that he understood precisely why the main character was there, why the Crown Prince had sought him out, why he had been summoned to the palace, and why he had received a mention upon his arrival. Ian stood still, staring ahead, contemplating whether he should respond with complete honesty. He quickly lifted his head and met the Emperor's gaze. Ian recalled how much he appreciated Ragnar's blunt honesty, and it seemed the fifth prince had inherited that trait from his father. Clasping his hands together, Ian made a decision: not yet. Until he obtained what he needed, he would continue to act like an ordinary 12-year-old boy with simple thoughts. The main character glanced away for a moment, then chose to respond like any typical kid would. "It's because I'm a talented magician," he declared. The Emperor nodded, acknowledging that many had remarked on his exceptional magical skills. With a piercing gaze, he then asked the protagonist what he believed was the source of that talent. The main character fell silent, and the prince couldn't help but roll his eyes inwardly. Moments later, he turned to the Emperor, noting that Ian was still just a child, which made his reaction understandable. Terry observed this was the first time he had witnessed the prince stand up for someone. The Emperor paused, contemplating his words, before finally agreeing. He recognized the truth in his own statement. He explained that the protagonist had been invited due to his remarkable skill. The mages and knights accompanying him were in awe of his talent, especially after he had aided the Empire by capturing a foreign spy. After all, children who did good deeds deserve to be rewarded. Ian stood tall, his attention focused. Terry then inquired about the reward he desired, while the Emperor observed him intently. Lowering his head, Ian felt a surge of hope. This was his moment. As a child, he had learned to ask for simple things, but now, with age, came the opportunity to dream bigger. He looked up and expressed his desire to explore the palace. Terry stared at him, taken aback, and asked him to repeat himself. Ian confirmed his wish, eager to see the castle's interior and its beauty. He added that he wanted to share all his discoveries with his mother later. The prince then reminded his father that he had already been curious about the ruins of the old tower on their way there. Children are inherently curious. The protagonist offered a gentle, cautious smile and asked if that was all, if it was permitted. Terry informed him that with a special sign, he could access any room in the castle. Just then, a servant approached and presented Ian with a golden tablet. As the main character accepted the engraved tablet, he learned that the guards could also escort him wherever he wished. When asked if he desired anything else, he replied that nothing else came to mind. Terry smiled and, in that case, decided to reward the protagonist with a little something extra on his own. Ronan glanced at the maids as the Emperor gestured for them to step forward. A chest overflowing with gold was presented, gleaming in the light. The maids bowed respectfully, and the Emperor declared that both the gold and the servants would be dispatched to Ian's mansion without delay. Having served in the palace for years, there would be no issues in the transfer. The protagonist felt a sense of relief, believing that at least now his mother wouldn't have to worry about cleaning. He expressed his gratitude to the Emperor for his unexpected kindness. As he slowly retreated from the throne room, he couldn't help but reflect on the Emperor's impressive demeanor. The generosity he had just witnessed was far beyond what he had anticipated. Despite the lingering sensation of being tested, Ian understood the importance of remaining cautious around everyone, even the fifth prince. He focused intently on the golden tablet as he hurried down the hall, recalling Ragnar's words echoing in his mind. Distrust may be the foundation of politics and power, but there was something more pressing he needed to address, and time was slipping away. As he approached the royal garden, a soldier spotted him immediately. The guard inquired about his presence, but the protagonist responded with a question of his own. "Is this the royal garden?" The main character revealed the golden tablet, stating that the Emperor had instructed him to present it. The guard, taken aback, quickly allowed him entry and offered to guide him. The MC chose to feign casual interest, pretending to be merely a sightseer. As he paused in front of a magnificent marble building, he realized he had finally arrived at the royal sanctuary. He gazed at the sacred ground, a wave of affection washing over him for this cherished place. Memories flooded back of standing here with Ragnar, sharing quiet moments. This resting place of their ancestors was reserved solely for the royal family. One day, Ragnar would find his final rest here as well, but that day was still far off. Back then, Ragnar had smiled and asked if the protagonist was on board with the plan. Ian cautiously peeked around the corner to assess the area. The guard at the entrance was slumped in his chair, fast asleep. Nevertheless, the main character proceeded with caution, casting a sleep spell just to be safe. In the dimly lit room, he cast a light spell, sensing he was close to the tomb of the first emperor. As he navigated through the graves, he searched intently for what he had come to find. Moving cautiously, he scanned each corner until his gaze suddenly fixed on a particular spot. There it was. He had found it. Near a column, Ian noticed a cluster of stoneheart mushrooms. With a swift motion, he fired an ice spear, shattering them free. Carefully, he collected the mushrooms into his bag. This haul was more than enough. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, asking what he was doing there at such a late hour. Startled, he spun around. Curiosity piqued about who had spoken. With a swift wave, he extinguished his light spell and ducked behind the graves. From his concealed vantage point, he spotted torchlight flickering down the passage. Ian tensed, wiping the sweat from his brow. A red-haired man entered, speaking of the princess. Hidden behind a column, the protagonist pondered which princess he could possibly mean. The royal family had 3 members, and it was clear that the 5th prince was not among them. A blonde girl smiled, her voice breaking the silence of the empty space. She placed a hand on her chest and declared that she had come because it was her duty as a princess. Mr. Kevin, she added, is merely assessing the security of the sanctuary. They had their reasons for being cautious. As Ian peeked out, he recognized her. Haley, the crown prince's sister. Kevin warned that someone might report their presence to the tower. Haley's expression darkened as she snapped that such a thing would never happen. With a fierce intensity, she demanded to know if he understood just how dangerous the tower was. But then, her mood shifted unexpectedly, and she added that her parents would surely understand. She was doing this for her brother and father. Kevin bowed his head, offering his support. "I'll help however I can," he said. He then asked if she remembered the techniques he had taught her. Haley clenched her fist, determination shining in her eyes. "I do," she replied. With a deep breath, she focused her energy, knowing she needed to begin with light by gathering mana. Moments later, she extended her hand and unleashed a brilliant light spell. A faint glow flickered to life in her palm, hidden from view. Ian's eyes widened in disbelief. The princess could wield magic. Haley frowned at the dimness of the light, prompting Kevin to remind her that she was still a beginner. Meanwhile, the main character reflected on her future. She had lived a quiet life, trapped like a bird in a cage. After Ragnar seized the throne, she followed the crown prince, only to meet her end alongside him. He still couldn't comprehend it. He had never known that Haley was a magician, so why had she kept it a secret? It made no sense at all. Learning magic in secret and concealing magical abilities were both illegal, and Kevin, as a magician, was well aware of this. Haley then approached him with a request. She wanted to learn a defensive spell, perhaps something like volcano magic. However, Kevin hesitated, admitting that such spells were challenging even for him. Suddenly, Haley sensed a presence behind her. She spun around, her heart racing. Kevin, noticing her alarm, asked what was wrong. "I heard something," she replied, her voice tense. Panic washed over Kevin as he flailed his arms, insisting they might have been discovered. "We need to get out of here fast," he urged. Haley took a deep breath and said, "Just calm down." As dusk settled in, the royal family's exclusive sanctuary remained off-limits to all but its members. Ian stood outside once more, gazing upward as thoughts swirled in his mind. Today had unveiled a staggering surprise. He shifted slightly, pondering who else might be aware of Haley's secret, her identity as a magician. Reflecting on the sanctuary, Ian began to suspect that Kevin was concealing her true power. This revelation made even more sense, especially considering that the master of the tower had backed the 5th prince by the fountain in the garden. It dawned on Ian that their visit to the sanctuary had taken far longer than anticipated. As he stepped outside, the guard inquired if he had finished his exploration. The protagonist smiled to himself, satisfied that he had obtained what he came for. He thanked the guard and confirmed he was done. Upon returning to his mansion, he was greeted by Lediel Heyman, who beckoned him over. Ian rushed to the alchemist, anxious to ask where his mother and the others were. With a smile, Letio mentioned that Miss Page was conversing with the maids while Douglas explored the mansion. At that moment, Douglas dashed through the expansive halls, marveling at the sheer size of the place. After observing the alchemist for a moment, he realized this could be beneficial for both of them and asked Letio if they could speak in private. They entered an empty room, and the protagonist closed the door behind them. Without hesitation, he turned to Letio and requested an elixir. Letio glanced at him, curiosity piqued. "What kind?" he asked. Ian produced a bag of mushrooms, and the moment Letio laid eyes on them, he was taken aback, disbelief etched across his face. These were stoneheart mushrooms, notorious for their potent poison capable of paralyzing a person and halting their heart. Tilting his head, he remarked that anything derived from such a dangerous source would inevitably be toxic. The main character stepped closer, inquiring if he was familiar with interrogation magic. Letio confirmed that he was. Ian lowered his gaze, expressing his need for an elixir that could bypass the obstacle. His eyes drifted to the bedside table as he inquired if he could create it himself. Letio replied that he would need to conduct some tests first, then asked how urgent the matter was. The protagonist half closed his eyes and replied, "It's very urgent. The sooner, the better." Suddenly, the main character turned toward the door as an announcement echoed through the room. A letter had arrived from the ivory tower. A maid entered, balancing a tray that held the letter. Ian swiftly took it from her and opened it. The message revealed that the newly arrived magician, Page, was expected at the tower. According to their rules, he was required to start his training there, and they acknowledged his talent without reservation. As he continued reading, he discovered that an official meeting was scheduled for exactly 1 week from now. As a magician of the tower, his attendance was expected. Once he finished, the protagonist remarked that Letio had 1 week left. Turning to him, he asked, "Do you plan to sleep at all?" A bit shaken, Letio replied, "A week is a week. This is work." He approached Ian, determination in his eyes. "I just won't sleep. I'll do everything I can." Ian offered a small grin, saying, "I'm counting on you." Meanwhile, a lavish carriage rolled through the forest. Inside, the main character sat quietly, surveying the elegant interior. In his hand, Ian held a bottle of dark liquid Letio's elixir, crafted from the elusive stoneheart mushroom. It was potent, but its effects would only last 2 hours. A wave of concern washed over him. 2 hours was all he had. He turned his gaze toward the window, where the towering ivory structure loomed in the distance. Memories flooded his mind as he stared at it, each one tethered to that imposing place. Yet here he was again. As the carriage came to a halt at the tower, the servants quickly noticed their arrival. The protagonist stepped out immediately, only to turn when he heard someone call his name. A girl with glasses greeted him with a warm smile. "Follow me," she said cheerfully. "I'll take you to the owner of the tower." As Ian walked beside her, memories from his past life began to resurface. She led him through the first floor, describing it as the Hall of Enlightenment. Ian lifted his gaze, and as he strolled down the corridor, he couldn't shake the feeling that this place had remained unchanged, and likely always would. The girl pointed ahead and asked if he could see the golden disc. Ian nodded, and she explained that it was a lift used by magicians to travel between floors. She added that high-ranking magicians relied on it to reach the very top. When she asked if he wanted to give it a try, he stepped forward without a moment's hesitation. As he stepped inside, she informed him that the tower's owner awaited him on the top floor before bidding him farewell. Golden light shimmered beneath his feet, and in an instant, the lift shot upward. Ian glanced down at the bottle in his hand, then uncorked it and took a swig. Moments later, the lift came to an abrupt halt. The protagonist fixed his gaze ahead, where a dark, elegant door loomed before him. To his surprise, it swung open on its own, spilling bright light into the dim corridor. Without hesitating, Ian stepped inside. A voice beckoned him to come closer, and he turned to see the tower's owner smiling warmly, expressing gratitude for his acceptance of the invitation. Seated at the table, the old magician gestured for him to come closer, urging him not to linger at the entrance. The main character glanced around, noticing a crowd already gathered, their eyes fixed on him. The old man reassured him, acknowledging his nerves, but insisting there was no reason to worry. As MC turned to the side, he realized even more people were watching him intently. With a deep breath, he carefully took a seat. As the old man explained that every magician in the tower underwent the same initiation, the protagonist sensed an undercurrent of distrust. The owner raised his hand, and glowing text materialized above it. He acknowledged the protagonist's talent, but noted that its uniqueness sparked their suspicion. The old man examined the floating text intently. As he sat there, he recalled the saying that magicians were closer than family, suggesting there should be no distrust among them. With a smirk, Ian quipped, "So, are you planning to torture me?" The old man chuckled, questioning if they truly appeared that intimidating. He quickly reassured them, stating that they didn't resort to barbaric methods. However, his expression shifted, growing serious as he informed the protagonists that all they needed to do was answer their questions. Scanning the room, the old man declared that it was time to begin. He then started to read from the glowing text before him. Ian Page, born in 488 under the sign of the Red Goat, was the son of merchant Fran Page and a cook. When asked if that was all correct, he nodded, affirming that every word was true. A bald man with a mustache leaned forward, his expression serious, and inquired about Ian's connection to the alchemist Lydia O'Hammond. He looked down, his voice tinged with concern as he explained that his mother was ill and needed medicine. The Lord had advised him to seek the help of an alchemist. A short-haired woman then inquired why he had ventured to the ruins of the old tower. The protagonist replied that he had read about them in books and had always dreamed of witnessing their grandeur for himself. Another man folded his hands and inquired if he remembered the magician girl. He continued, mentioning that Ian had seen her meeting someone, and when she spotted him, she attempted to kill him. The main character looked away uneasily, admitting, "That's true, I really thought I was going to die." A gray-haired woman raised her hand and closed her eyes, inquiring if he had ever studied magic. He replied with a simple no. However, she quickly referenced the advanced spells he had cast, such as Fireball and Freezing Explosion, insisting that she needed a more convincing answer. Ian kept his gaze fixed on the floor as he confessed that he had only ever imagined what he wanted to do. A flickering flame materialized above his palm as he spoke. He recalled how he used to envision fire dancing in his hand, and then, one day, it actually appeared. The protagonist watched the flame intently, captivated by its glow. A voice in the crowd suddenly broke the tension, declaring this all to be nonsense. Instantly, the hall erupted in chaos. The tower's owner observed Ian in silence, aware that the interrogation magic was active there. Was no reason to doubt the boy's words. Could it truly be possible for a legendary first magician to be reborn as a child? The old man couldn't shake the thought that the MC might be a top-class magician capable of resisting interrogation, magic, and impressive feat, especially for someone his age. As he stared, the owner found himself questioning the true identity of this enigmatic figure. Suddenly, a red-haired woman sprang to her feet, her voice cutting through the tension. "This has gone on long enough," she exclaimed, her hand slicing through the air. "Stop with the foolish questions. What truly matters is why we're all here." Ian gazed up at her with wide, innocent eyes as the others attempted to soothe her anger. Yet she retorted sharply, insisting they all sought the same answer. Helene positioned herself directly in front of him, her hand resting firmly on her belt. "We've heard enough of your filthy lies," she declared, her voice steady and demanding. "Tell us the truth. Who are you, and why do you keep lying?" The protagonist gazed at the red-haired woman, noting that she hadn't changed a bit. Memories flooded back of Helene, once the youngest fourth-grade magician, known to many as the Fire Lady for her fiery temper. With a hint of guilt, Ian asked if she was unaware of something. Helene shot him a piercing glare, demanding to know exactly what he meant. MC glanced at the floating text, noting that everything was written there. Turning fully toward it, he introduced himself as He Page, born in 488 under the Red Goat, and asked if she could read. Helene's anger flared as she clenched her fist. In a sudden burst, she turned to the others and shouted for them to stop. A fifth-class magician turned to Ian, stating he had one final question. As the tower's owner mentioned the incident, painful memories flooded back to Ian, memories of a soldier harassing his mother. On the day of the inspection, he had confronted a soldier named Jonathan for his disrespectful behavior towards her. Ian remained silent, allowing the magician to continue. Jonathan passed away the very next day. A vivid image surged through Ian's mind, Jonathan's lifeless body drifting to the surface. The owner revealed that traces of mana had been detected during the examination of the body, fixing Ian with a piercing gaze. He demanded to know if Jonathan's death was somehow linked to him. The protagonist sat up straight, his gaze fixed on the floor. It was clear to him that the Tower Master had earned his title for a reason. Observing the fifth-class magician, he realized that the man didn't rely solely on magic. He questioned everything and approached each situation with careful consideration. He lifted his head, contemplating that if an ordinary person were accused of murder, their panic would only serve to make them appear guilty. So, he remained still, weighing his options. As this was the final question, the protagonist pondered whether to shake off the elixir's effects or simply provide the answer they sought. A moment later, he placed a hand on his chest and claimed he knew nothing about it. The hall erupted into chaos. Ian remained still, unyielding. The Tower Master offered a faint smile and inquired if that meant the MC had no involvement. Without a moment's hesitation, he affirmed, "Yes, The fifth-class magician lowered his head slightly, acknowledging the situation. He murmured that it was acceptable and apologized for posing such a difficult question. In response, the Tower Master confessed that he had lied about the mana traces. In truth, Jonathan had simply fallen off a bridge. Ian shot him a piercing glare, his silence heavy with disapproval. Meanwhile, Leon raised his hand, admitting that lying was indeed wrong, but he hoped the protagonist would understand the circumstances. Every magician faced this test. However, the situation with the MC was unique. The Ivory Tower was largely unaware of his true potential. They needed to uncover not only his current abilities, but also what he might evolve into in the future. The other magicians remained silent, their attention fully captured as they listened intently. Ian gazed at the orb before him, as Leon explained that it was a mana storage device, the primary power source of the tower. Currently, the orb was neutral in color, but as it absorbed more mana, it would gradually turn a deeper shade of blue. With determination, Ian contemplated whether he should channel all of his mana into it. Leon nodded, confirming their eagerness to see everything. As the main character approached the orb, he estimated it could store mana up to a third-class level, deciding that stopping at second class would be the safer option. He placed both hands on the orb, thinking that if he delivered what they anticipated, they would finally ease their tension. Yet, a shadow crossed his face as he pondered the underlying reason for his unease. As an 8th-class magician, his name was never etched in history alongside terms like wise ruler or great leader. Yet, as memories of his past life surged within him, the orb glowed a brilliant blue. Ian realized he had always lived in accordance with the demands of the moment. With his hand resting on the glowing orb, he reminded himself that he had never cared for power, status, or honor. He had never needed any of those things. As magic swirled around him, he came to a profound realization. The only thing truly precious to him was magic itself. A thought struck him once more. No one had ever been stronger than he was. The wind around him intensified, swirling with an ominous energy. Suddenly, the orb began to crack, and in an instant, it shattered into countless fragments. Everyone instinctively raised their arms to shield themselves from the force of the blast. A thick white steam filled the room, enveloping them in a shroud of mystery and tension. Ian leaned forward, gasping for breath, his body trembling as he doubled over. Leon watched in shock, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. The other magicians in the room were equally stunned, their eyes wide with disbelief. Helen, struggling to process the moment, could only ask, "How is this even possible?" As she picked up a shattered piece, she remarked that they had thought he was merely third class. Now it was evident that his abilities surpassed their expectations. Ian took a cautious step back, one hand pressed against his chest. Sunlight poured onto the balcony, illuminating the scene. Suddenly, one magician slammed his hand on the table, exclaiming that the rumors were true. He leaped to his feet, declaring that the protagonist was far from third class. He was a 4th class, and only the Tower Master could rival him in this realm. As he recalled Ian's face, the man noted how everyone had witnessed the denial etched across his features when he claimed he hadn't killed the soldier. With a sudden shout, he demanded to know if everyone grasped the implications of that denial. A heavy silence settled over the hall as he contended that the Ivory Tower needed to intervene and contain Ian before he transformed into a true monster. There was no need for academy training or a 5-year mana mission in the provinces. The Tower Master nodded to himself, realizing that the protagonist's entry into the academy made little sense. Beads of sweat trickled down the magician's face as he listened to Leon's words, emphasizing that the protagonist would only become a burden to the beginners. Even the most skilled magicians were unsettled by his presence, so one could only imagine the effect he had on the students. The room fell into a heavy silence, a collective understanding hanging in the air. Leon Sheens then spoke up, asserting that it didn't matter whether Ian had directly killed the soldier or merely played a role in his death. That wasn't the crux of the matter. What mattered was that interrogation magic still worked on him, ensuring they could always discern if he was lying. As Leon Sheen surveyed the hall, he knew no one needed reminding of the Ivory Tower's reputation. The strength of their magicians directly influenced the tower's power and prestige. He proposed recognizing Ian as the 12th Archmage and officially announcing him as a 4th-class magician. Given the MC's age, Leon suggested that he should receive private training from a high-class magician. Did everyone agree? The entire hall resounded with a unanimous yes. Leon smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction as he asked who wanted to train with him. A hand shot up immediately. Later, standing outside the tower, he reflected on how he never expected to be named Archmage so soon or called back here so quickly. While he had anticipated something like this might occur, the rapidity of it all took him by surprise. A girl with glasses approached him, calling out his name. Ian recognized her from a previous encounter. With a hint of shyness, she mentioned that she had heard he'd been acknowledged as a fourth-class magician. Ian lowered his gaze, modestly admitting that it had just sort of happened. Her eyes sparkled with excitement at his words. She told him he was amazing, only 12 years old, and already an archmage. A bit embarrassed, he asked what rumor she was referring to. With a smile and her eyes closed, she replied that he might have already heard, but she would explain anyway. She had been assigned as his assistant for the next year and hoped they would get along well. Ian offered a small smile, dismissing her surprise. "There's really no need for that. I may be younger, but I still have a lot to learn." She paused, taken aback, feeling the weight of her own experience. Straightening her posture, the girl declared, "In that case, I suppose I owe you a proper tour." She guided him to a grand building, declaring it the Magic Academy. As they walked, she explained that he would have attended there, but his talent was so exceptional that he required a personal mentor instead. Ian couldn't help but chuckle to himself. The notion of needing a personal mentor struck him as almost amusing. It was likely that they intended to mold him into a loyal servant of the tower. Just then, the protagonist spotted a familiar group, his old friends, gathered with a teacher. As he gazed at them, memories flooded back from his past life when he had stood among them. A pang of sorrow struck him as he recalled visiting their graves, haunted by the knowledge that Coldwood's spies had taken their lives during the First Unification War. He never anticipated crossing paths with them again. Ian smiled at the group, fully aware of the vast distance that now separated them. Yet he held on to a glimmer of hope that they might talk someday. The girl paused, smiled brightly, and declared that this would be his study room. By the door, she mentioned that she had already cleaned it with magic, leaving no speck of dust behind. As the door creaked open, he stepped inside and was taken aback. The room was exactly as he remembered it. The girl continued, explaining that when the new tower was constructed 300 years ago, there were 24th-class magicians. Now, with far fewer occupants, many rooms lay empty. She mentioned that the Tower Master had permitted Ian to use this room for his personal training. Just as she turned to leave, she paused and instructed him to wait. She would fetch his teacher. Moments later, the door clicked shut. The protagonist gazed at it in silence. He placed his hand on the table, reflecting on how long it had been since he was last here. His gaze drifted to the window above the desk. As he looked out, Ian realized that he had claimed this room 7 years ago in his new life. Having been named an archmage at such a young age, his path had already been determined. As he approached the window, he resolved that over the next 6 years, he would need to cultivate his strength within the tower. He returned to the table, resting a hand on its surface as his thoughts raced. The owner of the tower loomed in his mind. In his past life, the entire tower had rallied behind the prince, and he understood that he needed to secure his position before history repeated itself. To achieve that, he needed a power formidable enough to confront the Tower Master and free the prince from his grasp. Ian realized he had to seize control of the tower for himself, rather than allowing it to remain under the influence of its current master. A vision of a staff flashed in his mind, igniting a determination within him. He knew he had to earn genuine respect as a high magician, one capable of reaching the tower owner's level and surpassing it. He pictured colossal hands grasping the ivory tower, and if he could achieve that, the tower would be his. But for now, he lowered his head and resolved to embrace a more childlike demeanor. He was still too young and too weak. At this stage, he wouldn't even rank as a 5th grader. The sudden sound of the door jolted him from his thoughts. Someone stepped inside and greeted him. Ian turned sharply toward the door, immediately questioning why they had sent this person. Helene stepped in, a warm smile on her face, and remarked that it had been far too long since they last met. Playfully, she called him a little liar. With a faint grin, she greeted him once more, continuing her lighthearted teasing. Ian returned her playful banter with a weary look, silently questioning why she was the one they had chosen for this reunion. He slowly opened his mouth to respond. Lifting a finger, MC reminded him that her task was to gather the mana storage fragments. With a smirk, she added that he had become even more shameless. As Helene stepped closer, she noted that he likely already knew most of the curriculum, etiquette, the tower's history, magic theory, everything taught at the academy. Since regular students would struggle to keep pace with him, the tower owner assigned Ian a personal teacher. Ian remained silent, absorbing the atmosphere. Moments later, Helene snapped her fingers, and books began to float off the shelves. She caught one midair and questioned its purpose with a hint of skepticism. The remaining pages fluttered to the floor at Ian's feet. Tossing the book aside, Helene declared that books were for old people, not for her. Leaning closer, she brought up the spy he had unmasked, noting that the spy had performed admirably in battle and that many held high hopes for her future. Glancing to the side, Helene confessed that if the girl hadn't been a spy, her magical abilities might have even surpassed her own. Turning her piercing red eyes back to him, she remarked how fortunate it was that he had uncovered the traitor. She studied him quietly, her thoughts lingering in the air. She turned and extended her hand, declaring that as his teacher, it was her duty to impart knowledge. As images of various magicians flashed through the protagonist's mind, Helene elaborated on the different types: warrior magicians, assistant magicians, and research magicians. Raising her chin, she dismissed the rest as mere trash. Glancing back over her shoulder, she asked him which type he thought she was. Ian, sounding uninterested, replied that she was the first one. Helene shouted in delight that he was correct. Turning with a proud smile, she declared that she was the best on a whole different level. As she began to walk, she mentioned that her teaching style was a bit unconventional. Glancing back at him, she urged him to follow. Refusing was not an option. Ian simply watched her in silence. Before long, they arrived at the training ground. Spreading her arms wide, Helene asked if he understood what they were about to embark on. Before he could respond, she answered her own question. She was going to teach him how to fight without the fear of death. The MC watched her intently, sensing that everything was unfolding just as he had anticipated. Memories of Helene from his past life flooded back to him. In the past, she had never ceased her relentless teasing, but this time he shot her a fierce glare, determined to demonstrate his strength from the very beginning. Nearby students began to murmur, speculating about who had instigated the confrontation and whether challenging her was a wise move. Holland surveyed the crowd with a smirk, noting that enough people had gathered for the event to begin. As Ian stretched his shoulder, he caught her voice, inviting him to make the first move, reminding him that she was the teacher. With a swift motion, he removed his cloak and challenged her playfully, asking if she was ready for what was to come. Helene bristled at his words, snapping back that he should focus on his own problems instead. He tossed the cloak aside, watching as it vanished into thin air. With a calm demeanor, he replied that he understood. But then his expression shifted. Narrowing his eyes, blue smoke began to swirl ominously around him. Red smoke swirled around Helene as she urged him to raise his shield. Flushed and grinning, she warned him that no matter what he attempted, she would crush him. Behind her, 3 massive fireballs began to take shape. Yazun concentrated, summoning an ice block spell. A chilling wave of frost enveloped his entire body. In an instant, he found himself encased in a solid block of ice, leaving Helene staring in shock. Frowning, she asked if he was joking. Approaching the icy prison, she knocked on its surface and questioned why he had chosen an ice block of all spells. Did he plan to sit there until his mana ran out? Inside the ice, Tyne remained still, fully aware that the ice block was one of the best defensive spells available. Its weakness was straightforward. The caster would fall asleep and be unable to use any other spells. Helene spread her arms, puzzled by his strategy. To her, he was still just a boy. Suddenly, a strange sound caught her attention, and the other students heard it as well. Helene quickly turned her gaze back to Ian. Fear washed over her as she gazed at the ice block, disbelief settling in this should be impossible. Inside the frozen prison, the protagonist began to move, and Helene couldn't comprehend how he managed to do so. She cautiously stepped closer, but then froze in place. Towering stems erupted beside her, looming ominously. Looking up, Helene realized the situation was dire. The towering stems loomed overhead, visible from a distance. Suddenly, one shot up from the ground, twisting and curling like a bolt of lightning. In a panic, Helene dashed around, unleashing flames in an attempt to incinerate the threat. But how many more would emerge? Staring ahead, she realized she was on the brink of defeat. Her gaze shifted back to Ian, and she knew her only chance was to free him from that ice prison. Meanwhile, from within the icy confines, MC watched her intently. Helene felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. How could she approach a magician capable of moving within an ice block while still casting spells? A sharp stem rose behind her and lunged forward. Helene stiffened in fear as the tendrils wrapped around her body. Just then, Ian emerged slowly from the ice. Bound in place, Helene glanced down and finally grasped why so many believed he was the reincarnation of the first magician. With a gentle expression, she conceded defeat, admitting he had won. He offered a faint smile in response. When she requested to be released, he replied that it was too soon. Ending things now would be far too dull. As he began to approach her, Helene found herself puzzled by his intentions. Feeling a surge of anxiety, she reminded him that she had already lost. Yayu raised his hand, and sparks flickered around his fingers as the sky darkened ominously. Panic set in for Helene, and she shouted for him to stop. Meanwhile, Ian caught a lightning bolt in his hand, prompting her to cry out that this was just training. Helene opened her mouth wide and screamed at him, but the protagonist merely regarded her with calm indifference. He pointed to the ground and unleashed a lightning spell. A massive bolt arced down toward her, striking with a deafening crack. The students watching stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide as the ground beneath her blackened and smoldered. Helene stared in terror at the lightning mark etched into the ground between her legs. Taking a moment to catch her breath, she realized she was still alive, and a wave of anger surged through her. As Ian knelt beside her, she shouted for him not to come any closer. Ignoring her plea, he leaned over her, locking eyes with her in an intense gaze. Leaning in closer, the MC asked Helene if she truly believed she had anything to teach him. A cold smile crept across his face as he held her gaze. Helene quickly lowered her head, concealing her eyes. Noticing her reaction, Ian's smile widened once more. He stood up and declared that, in that case, he would be leaving. Turning away, he walked across the training ground, leaving the stunned crowd in his wake. As he passed through them, Ian urged everyone to clear out. He was utterly exhausted. By evening, the warm glow of the sunset bathed the tower in a golden light. The tower owner strode down a dimly lit corridor alongside another magician. Ladio inquired about Helene's condition. The magician lowered his gaze, his voice heavy with concern, as he replied that it was dire. She had refused food for days. The tower owner's expression darkened as he stared ahead, grappling with the humiliation of having lost to a mere 12-year-old boy. Li Yun had tasked Helene with breaking Ian's spirit and drawing him to his side, but instead, it was she who faltered. A vivid image of a wolf with a chain in its mouth flashed through Li Yun's mind, and he understood then that the protagonist would not be easily subdued. Ian was no mere house pet. He was a wild wolf, untamed and fiercely independent. Li Yun quickened his pace, realizing this task was taking far longer than he had anticipated. Suddenly, the doors swung open. Ragnar, holding his book with a satisfied expression, looked pleased to see him. Li Yun bowed and apologized for his tardiness. Ragnar remained by the table, the book still cradled in his hands. The fifth prince snapped the book shut and declared it was fine. They had arranged to meet. Li Yun quickly glanced up at the prince, who responded with a faint smile. With his arms crossed, he urged Li Yun to share more about Ian. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the mansion, illuminating the scene. Douglas dashed down the corridor, skidding to a halt as he shouted that he was ready to go. Letio Hammond approached her son with a warm smile, announcing that it was time to leave. The alchemist then informed Ian that he would be taking Douglas to the academy. With a cheerful wave, Douglas called out that they would be back soon before the door clicked shut behind him. He lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the door, before reminding himself that today marked the first day of classes. As Douglas and Letio Hammond climbed into the carriage, Ian observed that the alchemist's son had been accepted into the finest alchemy academy in the area. It was clear he possessed a remarkable talent. The protagonist returned to his reading, convinced that studying was a breeze, having mastered this material long ago. Suddenly, he snapped the book shut. Leaning back in his chair, he recognized that there was nothing left to occupy his mind. Rising to his feet, he reflected on the fact that, since returning to the past, he hadn't taken a single real break. Ragnar had yet to make his move, but that wouldn't last for long. As he strode down the corridor, Ian caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He realized that the best course of action was to train his body and push his limits further. Yet, as he stared at his trembling hand, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. Could he allow himself to rest just this once and do nothing? He swiftly turned toward the door just as a maid entered, balancing a tray that held a letter. "An invitation has arrived from the palace," she announced. Ian focused on the tray, prompting her to repeat the message. With careful hands, he picked up the envelope and examined it closely. The seal revealed that the message was from the Crown Prince. Ian froze for a moment, his gaze fixed on the envelope. Later, he arrived by carriage at an opulent mansion. As he stepped out, a question nagged at him. Why had he been invited at all? It was common knowledge that magicians without noble blood were rarely welcomed into high society. With one hand resting at his side, he gazed toward the entrance, pondering the prince's intentions. It struck him that this was the first time the crown prince had taken charge of a banquet. In his previous life, the crown prince had never hosted public events. He never formed close ties with the nobles, remained passive, and struggled to find his footing in imperial politics or high society. Instead, Ragnar came to mind. The fifth prince was his polar opposite, charismatic and daring, who seized power by taking direct control. Noticing Ragnar's broad smile and the thought swirling in his mind, Ian realized that the Emperor, the Crown Prince's only true ally, had finally nudged his son into action. With a weary sigh, the protagonist crossed his arms and turned his gaze away. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this might ultimately benefit him as well. As he entered the hall, he resolved to remain silent, endure the proceedings, and slip away when the moment was right. He had never been fond of events like this. As he entered, a servant took his invitation and announced, "Mr. Page may enter." The doors swung open, revealing a lavish room filled with nobles. All eyes turned to the young magician, who felt the weight of their scrutiny as they began to size him up. The protagonist offered a faint grin, already sensing his own discomfort in the lavish surroundings. Just then, a servant announced the arrival of His Highness, the Crown Prince. Instantly, every noble in the room bowed in unison. The prince made his slow entrance into the hall, stepping onto the balcony with an air of authority. He rested a hand on the railing and turned to face the crowd, commanding their attention. A moment later, he smiled and expressed his gratitude to everyone for attending. Glancing over the guests, he noted that this time he was opening the banquet in place of his father. With a slight grin, he added that he wanted to introduce someone before they began. Turning toward Ian, the atmosphere shifted, and MC tensed, sensing the weight of the moment. The Crown Prince turned to the crowd once more, announcing his special guest, the fourth-class Archmage of the Ivory Tower. With a sweeping gesture, he revealed that the Archmage hailed from the northern province of Mogrian. Ian's heart raced as he stared in shock, his fists clenching tightly. He averted his gaze upward, desperately trying to mask his reaction. The prince beamed, spreading his arms wide as he called for the protagonist to step forward. As the protagonist approached, the prince declared that he was the true reason for the celebration. With a small smile and his eyes closed, the protagonist realized that the prince had orchestrated this entire spectacle to signal to the nobles that he was firmly on his side. Terry crossed the protagonist's mind, and he felt certain this was part of the Emperor's scheme. As he scanned the hall, he caught the prince boasting about Ian's remarkable feats in the tower. With a commanding voice, the prince declared that the main character had hardly set foot inside before vanquishing a high-ranking magician right at the entrance. He could only imagine how the tower's seasoned veterans felt about that. Then, the prince turned to him and remarked that when they first met in Mogrian, he had seemed like trouble, far too careless. The protagonist recalled that initial encounter, puzzled by the prince's perception of him. With a smile that lit up his closed eyes, the Crown Prince admitted that MC's talent had truly amazed him. His father had commanded him to bring the MC back, but he couldn't help feeling relieved by how things had unfolded. Standing there in a haze of confusion, he listened intently to the prince, who wore a wide grin. Then, with a glint of excitement in his eyes, the prince announced that there was one more person he wanted to introduce. Turning to the side, he extended a hand and called out to them. The protagonist watched in surprise as a girl in an elegant dress stepped forward. The prince introduced her as his younger sister, Haley Greenriver. With a polite smile, she turned to Ian and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you." The main character was momentarily captivated by her beauty, as she revealed that people in the Imperial Palace often spoke of him. He was practically a celebrity there. With her hands clasped near her chest, Haley continued, saying she had only come to greet him today, but next time, she wanted to invite him to lunch and hear about his life in Mogrian. He responded with a proud smile, admitting that all he could offer were mundane tales of monsters and magic. Yet, she insisted that those were precisely the stories she was eager to hear. Haley was captivated not only by magic, but also by the way people lived in the world. With a bright smile, she expressed her eagerness to discuss a myriad of topics with him. Standing beside her brother, she promised to send him an invitation soon and hoped he would enjoy the banquet. Ian expressed his gratitude for her kindness before the prince and princess moved on. The protagonist observed them intently, lost in thought. He recognized that the princess was nothing like he had imagined during their time in the sanctuary, and although the crown prince appeared nervous, he was managing his role with surprising poise. Meanwhile, the prince continued his conversation with the nobles, their laughter echoing in the grand hall. Ian, feeling the weight of the dull atmosphere, decided it was time to make his exit. He opened the door and stepped outside, eager for fresh air. Just then, he spotted a figure by the entrance. It was Oliver, who greeted him with a warm smile as soon as their eyes met. He strolled over, noting how striking the knight appeared in a tailcoat. Oliver inclined his head, explaining that the crown prince had commanded him to dress formally. They exchanged glances, and, for a moment, words eluded them. The silence grew heavy and awkward. Ian averted his gaze, regretting his decision to step out onto the terrace. As Oliver claimed to be aware of the rumors circulating, the protagonist pressed him for details. Instantly, a vivid image of a red-haired girl bound and helpless flashed through his mind, whispers of his supposed victory over Helene, the archmage of their tower. The protagonist's expression darkened, and he averted his gaze. The prince had already mentioned it, and Oliver chimed in, noting how brilliantly the MC had performed in the tower. Glancing down at the street, Ian remarked on the surprising fact that even Oliver was aware of it. He believed that matters concerning the tower typically remain secret. With a sly grin, Oliver replied, "Knights must gather important information, after all." What purpose do they serve now, he wondered, his gaze fixed ahead. He reflected on how mages had taken over the Empire's defense, relegating knights to mere polished attendants, flaunting their master's status. As he stared at the lantern, Oliver couldn't help but feel a surge of disbelief. The protagonist had not only defeated a fourth-class mage, but had also bested Helene herself. It almost made him question whether the protagonist was truly just a boy. The main character felt a surge of awkwardness and attempted to intervene, but Oliver turned to him, asserting that the Crown Prince trusted him enough to invite him to a banquet for the kingdom's elite. Therefore, he had every right to know. Oliver dropped to one knee, his gaze intense as he asked Ian whose side he was on. Ian froze momentarily, caught off guard by the question. Oliver continued, emphasizing that it didn't matter who Ian was or how someone so young had acquired such talent. With a piercing look, he pressed on, asking if Ian was aware that the Ivory Tower supported the Fifth Prince, and whether he stood with them as well. The main character offered a faint smile, acknowledging that such a question couldn't be answered on the spot. Oliver lowered his gaze, his expression serious as he replied that, as the Crown Prince's chief knight, it was essential for him to distinguish between enemies and allies. He shot a glare at Ian, who met his stare, recognizing that Oliver was the type of knight who would lay down his life to protect the Crown Prince. He replied that he still didn't have an answer, fully aware that this would not satisfy Oliver. The protagonist met his gaze and added one certainty: he would never side with the Fifth Prince. This revelation took Oliver by surprise. As Oliver turned away, Ian reassured him not to worry. He had cast a spell to ensure their conversation remained private. With a smile, the protagonist asked if that answer sufficed. Oliver returned the smile, confirming that it did. Then, looking up with a serious expression, he requested a favor. When asked what it was, Oliver revealed that before the protagonist made a choice about which side to take, he wanted to have a duel. He needed to grow stronger. MC tilted his head, curious. "Do you want to learn how to fight mages? One day my sword might be aimed at you." Oliver met his gaze with a hard look, acknowledging the truth in MC's words. Ian, watching the exchange, smiled and remarked, "Ruthless, aren't you?" Then he shook his head, adding, "But honestly, there's nothing in it for me." Oliver reached behind his head and began to unfasten something. He removed a gold necklace and held it out for all to see. "This was given to me by the late Empress when I became the Crown Prince's personal knight," he explained. "She said it possesses magical properties that can clear the mind." Ian examined the object intently, pondering whether it might be one of the lost imperial treasures once belonging to the Empress. A vivid image of a woman adorned in gold jewelry flickered in his mind. Oliver had expressed his willingness to part with it, convinced it would serve him better than it ever could. Oliver, taken aback, the protagonist reminded him that it had originally been a gift from the late Empress. Oliver replied that her final request was for him to protect her son. Bowing his head, he expressed that training with MC would enable him to fulfill that promise, believing she would understand his intentions. After a moment of contemplation, Ian closed his eyes and nodded in agreement. He then slowly reached for the necklace. Oliver's face broke into a wide smile, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sudden explosion nearby. Both he and his companion turned in shock as a massive fireball erupted, slamming into the Imperial Palace. Without hesitation, Oliver shouted for the Crown Prince and rushed inside, frantically searching for him. It wasn't long before he spotted the prince and called out, urgency lacing his voice. The Crown Prince stepped protectively in front of Haley, his voice steady as he demanded to know what was happening in the palace. Oliver rushed to his side, concern etched across his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked anxiously. "I'm fine," the prince reassured him, though the tension in the air was palpable. Just then, a squad of knights arrived, their expressions grim as they echoed Oliver's question. "Report!" Oliver commanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. One knight, visibly shaken, stammered, "An explosion has struck the palace grounds." The cause remained a mystery, but the emergency communication system had already been activated, summoning reinforcements from every outpost. Yayan glanced to the side, contemplating the implications of that very system. He recalled the Imperial Emergency Network, the vital connection between the palace, the army, the nation, and the ivory tower. Once activated, it mandated that everyone rush to the palace. Yehian understood that this meant soldiers and mages would be arriving any moment now. He scanned the room, realizing that if the explosions were intended to create chaos, he needed to act fast. Suddenly, he looked up, his body tensing with urgency. In an instant, he conjured a mana barrier, enveloping all the important people nearby. Turning to Haley, he asked, "Can you hold on to the mana?" Startled, Haley blinked in disbelief. "Could you repeat that?" she stammered, her fear evident. Yehian insisted there was no time to waste and urged her to respond clearly. She wrapped her arms around herself, finally admitting that she had learned about the pulse. The main character instructed her to demonstrate, stepping out of the barrier. He approached a nearby maid and inquired if there was a maid named Isabel present. The girl began to tremble and nodded, confirming her identity. Isabel had arrived from the second palace, eager to visit the central palace. Yehian's expression darkened. It was exactly what he had feared. His thoughts turned to Cecilia, bound and trapped. The Cold Walkers were using the explosions to lure guards away from the ivory tower, creating an opening to reach her. They had no regard for her life. They sought information about him, and he couldn't allow that. The protagonist stood frozen, staring into the dark passage ahead, where the prison cells awaited. The sound of boots echoed through the corridor as a cloaked figure approached Cecilia's cell. "It's been a while," he remarked, taking in her disheveled appearance. Clearly, she had endured a difficult time. Cecilia fixed her gaze on him, her voice trembling as she asked who he was. The man slowly pulled back his hood, revealing himself. It was Daniel. As he fully removed the hood, a hint of disappointment flickered across his face. "I expected more from you," he said. In a surge of desperation, Cecilia rushed to the bars, her voice rising in urgency as she pleaded, "You have to free me." Daniel waved a hand, agreeing. But first, they needed to clarify something. Grabbing the bars, Cecilia insisted she hadn't revealed anything. It was Yehian who was aware of the Cold Walkers and the orders they had received. Daniel tilted his head, intrigued, and asked if MC truly knew that much. Cecilia remarked that he even knew about the magic marks, unlike her. Her voice echoed down the hall as Daniel replied that almost none of the Cold Walkers were aware of those marks. Most had only learned of them recently. He pressed her for more information. Cecilia insisted that was all she knew and urged him to let her out already. Daniel hesitated for a moment before reluctantly agreeing. Suddenly, the cell door swung open. Cecilia looked over, relief washing over her as Daniel called her name. But in an instant, everything changed. He slashed her throat. Terror filled her eyes as she stared ahead, and Daniel held the knife out, watching as she dropped to her knees, clutching her neck in a desperate attempt to stem the flow of blood. Looking down with icy detachment, he revealed that the leaders had deliberated for a long time on how to infiltrate the tower and what to do once inside. Meanwhile, Cecilia trembled, clutching her bleeding throat. Daniel continued speaking, a hint of regret in his voice. After all, she was still only a third-class mage. Perhaps saving her would have been the wiser choice. Standing over her lifeless body, he declared that this was his final decision. With a faint grin, he instructed her to rest peacefully. Just then, Daniel heard a voice behind him and spun around. Instinctively, he drew a dagger and hurled it with precision. The blade flew straight toward Ian. It embedded itself in the wall next to the protagonist's head. The main character stood there, arms crossed, as Daniel pressed him for answers. He cast a glance at Cecilia's lifeless body, a chilling thought crossing his mind. Had Daniel already killed her? Strangely, he realized that this could simplify matters. Daniel's legs began to freeze, encased in a chilling grip. Ian approached him, a smirk playing on his lips as he remarked on Daniel's astonishing bad luck to cross paths with him here. With a deadly glint in his eyes, the protagonist confessed that he had longed to end Daniel's life with his own hands. In response, Daniel offered a faint smile and suggested it would be wiser to capture the main character alive instead. He replied that he could finally avenge his friends. Confused, Daniel shouted, "What are you talking about? What friends?" The protagonist stepped closer, his expression intense, and said, "Those events are still 10 years away." A chill enveloped Daniel as Ian recalled his journey back in time, vowing to alter the course of fate. The main character reached out, his fingers brushing against the ice before he forcefully shoved it aside, sending the frozen form crashing to the ground. He observed the scene with a stoic expression, then turned and walked over to Daniel. He reached for Daniel's neck, searching for the mana seal he believed was hidden there. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him. 3 mages rounded the corner, their eyes widening at the sight before them. The archmage stepped forward, demanding to know what had transpired. Ian remained composed beside the 2 lifeless bodies, meeting the archmage's gaze. It was then that the archmage's attention was drawn to the seal on Daniel's neck. Furious, he slammed his fist down. First, a maid, and now another palace official had turned out to be a spy secretary, no less. From his throne, the emperor glared at the old man with the staff, demanding to know how the magic tower had allowed this to happen. Still seizing, he questioned why the tower had requested control over the investigation into Cecilia, only to neglect their duty to conduct a thorough check. No longer able to trust the tower, he resolved to strip it of its authority. He commanded the old man to surrender every detail of the case to the imperial guards. After a brief pause, the old man bowed in acceptance. With the argument settled, the emperor dismissed him. He still had much to manage on his own. The tower master turned and made his way toward the exit, staff in hand. Just then, a servant announced the arrival of Ian Page. He entered the room and bowed respectfully before the emperor. The protagonist stepped forward, and the emperor greeted him warmly, referring to him as MC Page, the young man from the north. The emperor commended Ian, acknowledging that his skill had once again safeguarded the empire from spies. Without Ian's vigilance, critical information could have slipped into enemy hands, jeopardizing the imperial family's secrets. Standing before the throne, the emperor declared that he never overlooks loyal and dedicated service, and thus he chose to reward him. A servant approached, carrying an open case that left the protagonist momentarily speechless. Inside lay a radiant blue cloak adorned with a chain and medallions. The main character's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the robe of his ancestor, Mitchell Greenriver, the only magician of imperial blood. The emperor acknowledged that the artifact should remain within the family, yet he believed Ian needed it more. He proposed that Ian could consider it a loan, to be returned at the end of his life or whenever he chose. After all, Greenriver was the first and last magician of imperial blood. He was the hero who saved the empire, now elevated to the rank of Tower Master, a testament to his extraordinary magic. The emperor requested that the protagonist try on the cloak, mentioning that it could be worn over his clothes. With a flick of the fabric, Ian donned it, but it hung too loosely around him. The emperor noticed as well and chuckled, remarking that one day the robe would fit him perfectly. In that moment, the main character recalled the cloak's unique ability and decided to adjust it. As he focused, the fabric began to glow and gradually shrink. Moments later, it fit him like a glove. The onlookers were left in awe, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. From the throne, the emperor commended Ian for his quick thinking, noting how well the robe suited him, particularly its color. With a smile, he bowed, expressing his honor in receiving such a gift from His Majesty. Later, at the White House, the princess approached Ian, requesting a moment of his time to share her thoughts. As he bowed, she shyly urged him to stop. With her hands clasped together, she requested a moment to talk. Her nervous demeanor hinted at the weight of her words. The protagonist sensed immediately that what she had to say was important. He apologized for his rude behavior that evening and bowed once more, leaving the princess feeling perplexed. Then, with a finger pressed to his lips, he assured her that their secret would remain safe. This gesture finally eased her worries. Just then, a man approached from behind them and praised Ian, causing the MC to freeze in place. Without knowing who it was, he suddenly felt a surge of tension. The newcomer showered him with praise, claiming he had not only saved the palace, but the entire empire from spies. When he turned around, he was met by the sight of a young man. As his father had often said, Ian was a true hero of the nation. Yet the protagonist's expression turned pale. The man filled him with dread. It was the Empire's fifth prince, Ragnar Greenriver. Memories flooded back, a haunting reminder of their past. Once, Ragnar had been his friend, but that bond had twisted into something darker. In those days, the protagonist could only muster fear, while Ragnar regarded him with a mix of hatred and pity. The prince appeared calm and smiling, yet the mere mention of Ragnar sent a chill of fear through Ian. Ragnar continued speaking, expressing that although it might be late, he still wanted to congratulate him on the Ivory Tower's recognition. But Ian barely registered his words. He was too shaken, staring in stunned silence. He couldn't recall Ragnar ever being this young. In gratitude for protecting the Empire from spies, Ragnar extended an invitation to Ian for dinner, patiently awaiting his response. Still reeling from the surprise, Ian found himself at a loss for words. He clenched his fist to steady his racing thoughts, but then a voice interrupted. It was the princess. She offered an apology to Ragnar, explaining that he already had plans with her. She held out her arm, halting him in his tracks, catching him off guard. Ragnar chuckled at the unexpected gesture and proposed they meet tomorrow instead. It was only then that the protagonist responded, apologizing and explaining that he had too much work to do, so he had to decline. Ragnar averted his gaze, clearly annoyed, yet he accepted the situation. The princess caught the displeasure etched on his face. Maintaining his politeness, Ragnar bid them farewell, citing another meeting and expressing his gratitude for their time. Ian, still shaken, remained silent, simply watching as Ragnar departed with his guards. The princess awkwardly apologized for interrupting their conversation. He reassured her, saying she had done nothing wrong. As he watched Ragnar walk away, memories of their future encounter flooded back 2 years from now. They would meet again. Even now, Ragnar was already revealing his ambitions. Ian vowed to thwart the prince's schemes before he could amass any more power or influence. Ragnar refused to take even a single step forward, while the protagonist watched his impending fall with a sense of satisfaction. From this moment on, they stood firmly on opposite sides. 5 years had passed, and we found ourselves back at the familiar White House. On a bright, sunny day, the prince sat in the library, surrounded by a mountain of books, his frustration palpable. He grumbled to himself, lamenting that none of the texts were written in plain language, and questioned who would dare to make books this difficult to read. A man approached, carrying a collection of books penned by the first emperor, each detailing the essential qualities a future ruler must possess. Soon 2 towering stacks loomed beside the prince, but to him they resembled nothing more than mountains of nonsense. When the man insisted that he must read every single one, shock washed over the prince's face. They delved into the empire's history, culture, economics, and politics. The prince, feeling irritable, protested that today was hardly a good day for reading. Yet deep down, he knew his father would be furious if he skipped it once more. He turned to the vice-captain beside him and asked if the final match between the captain and Ian was today. The vice-captain confirmed it was. Instantly, the prince's face lit up. This was an event he couldn't miss. He leaped to his feet and commanded his team to move out immediately. At the second squad's training ground, a man stood panting, acutely aware that this was his final opportunity. Gripping his sword tightly, he reminded himself that he couldn't afford a single mistake today. Just then, he glanced up and saw spikes of ice cascading toward him. With a shout, he sprinted away. Miraculously, none of the falling ice struck him. After narrowly evading the attack, he paused for a moment, only to see sharp stone pillars erupting from the ground behind him. Without hesitation, he sprinted forward, kicking off the earth to scale the jagged formations, narrowly escaping yet another strike. He landed safely, the deadly rocks remaining in his wake, but he knew he had to stay vigilant. Another assault was already on its way. A wall of fire surged toward him, a blazing wave moving with terrifying speed. Yet, his eyes betrayed no fear, only unwavering confidence. With a fierce yell, he swung his sword upward. As the flames closed in, he cleaved the wave apart, preventing it from reaching him. His sole focus remained clear, to touch his opponent. Surrounded by flames, he searched for the magician, desperate for success this time. Through the swirling smoke and flying sparks, he finally spotted his target ahead. Without a moment's hesitation, he charged forward, shouting with determination. In an instant, his sword plunged through the magician's heart. Silence enveloped the battlefield, leaving only swirling smoke in its wake. The captain stood frozen, his blade embedded in the enemy's chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. Just then, a light tap on his shoulder broke the stillness, and a voice praised him from behind. It was the real magician. The captain remained frozen in the same stance he had taken when he struck the fake body, completely unaware of what had transpired. As the truth dawned on him, he exhaled sharply and turned away. Despite his efforts, he had yet to lay a finger on Ian. The magician stood unscathed, the sword that had pierced through the illusion leaving him entirely unharmed. Otherwise, the main character would have met his end. They shook hands, and the captain expressed his gratitude for the training. In response, the protagonist remarked that it had repaid the necklace. Yet, the knight couldn't shake the feeling that he had gained far more from this experience than the protagonist ever could. Reflecting on the past, he acknowledged that the protagonist had surpassed his own abilities from 5 years ago. Now, the captain could even endure attacks from him. Curiosity sparked, and the man inquired about the MC's current rank. The MC, with a hint of humility, confessed that his level wasn't as impressive as it might appear. In his previous life, he had only achieved 5th class by the age of 26. His growth was rapid, yet he still hadn't reached the level of a 6th-class magician. Due to the pace of his physical development and the limitations on how much mana his heart could replenish, 5th class remained his current ceiling. He gazed at his hands, clenched his fists, and resolved not to give up on his quest for strength. Both of them noticed someone in the distance calling out to the best magician and the best knight of the empire. It was the prince. Having heard that this was their final sparring match, he had come in person. With a warm smile, he invited them to breakfast to celebrate their hard work and dedication to improvement. Ian bowed respectfully and offered his apologies. His training at the tower concluded today, and before he could assume his duties as Archmage, he needed to meet with the tower's master. The prince was displeased by this, but he couldn't prevent the protagonist from leaving. With a resigned sigh, he suggested they share a meal another time. The main character bid farewell, promising to reunite soon. With determination, he ascended into the sky, making his way toward the towering structure. Just before departing, he called down, assuring them he would return shortly, then soared away. Below, the captain, vice captain, and prince watched him vanish into the distance. The prince remarked that Ian could soar through the skies, all thanks to the mantle his father gifted him, a hint of jealousy creeping into his voice. He then shifted his attention to the captain. With the training session concluded, he asked for the captain's thoughts. The captain had observed two key points. First, he still hadn't managed to land a single blow on Ian, and second, the gap in their abilities was only widening. Despite the tension, the captain spoke with unwavering confidence, capturing the prince's full attention. After a brief pause, he boldly proclaimed that he could outmatch any other magician. Just then, Ian arrived at the tower. As the door swung open, the protagonist stepped inside, greeted by the master of the tower, who welcomed him with a mix of surprise and warmth. He still recalled the tales of a gifted boy from the north, which had drawn him here. With a smile, the old man remarked that it felt as if no time had passed. Yet, standing before him now was a handsome young man, no longer that boy. Ian closed his eyes and assured him that he still had many years ahead. The tower master then began sifting through a stack of papers, each one brimming with praise for Ian. They referred to him as a blessing to the tower and the entire empire, claiming that aspiring magicians sought to emulate his example. As the old man read these words aloud, he remarked that the young man was practically a guidebook for the ideal magician. The young man, however, humbly requested that he not be praised so highly. The old man remarked that they would soon find out if it was too much. Today marked the final day of training for the renowned hero. While a typical academy student would graduate and then be dispatched to the provinces for testing, the protagonist's situation was anything but ordinary. The old man inquired how the protagonist felt about spending such an important day in conversation with him. The protagonist replied that it was an honor. The tower master recognized that this was the polite response, yet he still expressed his gratitude for the kind words. With a warm smile, he congratulated the protagonist on becoming a true magician and presented him with a badge marked with a cross. With that sign, everyone in the Empire's soldiers and common folk alike would have to heed his words. He examined the gift closely, pondering whether they were already in need of his assistance as a full magician. The old man had confessed that they were short on personnel. They had lost Helen, and no one remained to take on her responsibilities. He didn't want to pressure Ian, but he expressed his gratitude for any help he could offer. Turning his gaze away, the protagonist murmured that he hoped to be of use. The old man nodded, reminding him that as one of the tower's main archmages, many hopes rested on his shoulders. With that, he reached out and opened the magic tablets. As this was his first assignment, Ian had the freedom to choose his destination. He scanned the options before him. The first was Rodmere, the Empire's bustling port city, renowned for its vibrant trade. The second was Benson, the largest producer of iron in the region. The last province was Peric, where the protagonist had conducted mana tests in his previous life. He recalled a magician who had perished during that mission, the very moment he was sent back to take that person's place. Without a moment's hesitation, he chose Peric. The old man nodded in agreement. Peric found himself in desperate need of magical assistance. Despite sending 2 third-class magicians and a squad of Imperial Knights, the situation remained unresolved. It appeared that the monsters from the Great Meadows had begun their relentless attacks. The old man, clutching a piece of paper, insisted that all the details were documented within. He asked Ian to read the document and provide his answer by the end of the day. If Ian refused, they would have to seek someone else. The main character didn't even take the paper. He resolutely declared that he would go to Peric. By evening, in another White House, a man was so taken aback by the news that his first mission would be to that province that he lost his appetite. He knew that massive monsters frequently invaded that area and voiced his concerns at the dinner table. Ian felt a surge of annoyance, convinced that the protagonist was merely trying to frighten everyone. Setting down his utensils, the protagonist's mother inquired if the situation was truly that perilous. He offered her reassurance, stating that a couple of months should be sufficient to resolve everything. With a heavy heart, she had no choice but to accept his words. Though she inquired about how long he would be away, the vast mansion would undoubtedly feel too quiet without him. The main character assured his mother that he would return as soon as possible. Shortly after, the same young man eagerly offered to show Ian an elixir he had crafted himself. The man beside him raised an eyebrow in surprise, but the boy remained steadfast, insisting that it might be useful for their journey. Their father interjected, reminding him that he was no longer a child. Wasn't it time to stop calling him captain? The boy bristled at the remark. To him, a captain would always be a captain. With a slight puff of his chest, he turned to the protagonist, ready to defend his title. Ian glanced back, bewildered by the unfolding scene. In a moment of unexpected affection, the boy decided to call him brother. Ian nearly choked on his water, sputtering as he fought to regain his composure. The boy, alarmed by his reaction, was at a loss for what to do next. Across from them, he and his mother exchanged puzzled glances. Forcing a smile, the boy quickly corrected himself, referring to Ian as brother, the protagonist of this unexpected encounter. The protagonist struggled to comprehend how this person had ever become a villain in his past life, and the realization weighed heavily on him. Their mother smiled warmly, announcing that her son now had a younger brother and that she had a youngest son as well. The boy flushed with embarrassment, bewildered by the way the two were looking at him. Their father broke the tension, instructing his son to call Ian master. The boy hesitated, protesting that they had grown up together. His father insisted that this fact changed nothing. Nevertheless, the boy vowed to be of service to both his brother and the household. The woman who had observed the entire exchange let out a soft laugh. Her son noticed the joy radiating from her, and he felt a warmth in his heart at the sound of her laughter. In that moment, he understood that this life wasn't so bad after all. However, after dinner, Ian told him not to refer to him as brother anymore, leaving the boy feeling disheartened. The following morning, the magician prepared to depart. When the driver inquired if he wanted to head straight to Perik, he replied that he would first say goodbye to the Tower Master before continuing on to the province. He also reminded Lydium Han that mana traps had been established for their protection. Lydium was prepared to risk his life to protect the protagonist's mother, while the protagonist hoped nothing would go wrong in his absence. Suddenly, Lydium's son dashed over, calling out to Ian as if they were brothers. Noticing the mage's displeased expression, he quickly backtracked, addressing him as captain instead. In his hand, he held an elixir. His father had crafted a similar potion, but this one was uniquely his own. Leaning in, he whispered to MC that his version would be even more effective. Ian smiled, grateful for the thoughtful gift. Despite having 3 years remaining at the academy, his younger brother's talent had already caught the attention of the Empire, earning him the prestigious title of Imperial Alchemist. Their father acknowledged this achievement with admiration, but reminded him that there was still much to learn. Nevertheless, he placed his trust in the younger boy's elixir. The boy inquired if the protagonist would fly there using his mantle. However, the protagonist replied that doing so would attract too much attention, so he decided to travel by carriage instead. Just then, his mother rushed over, carrying a bundle of food for the journey and, as always, a little extra. The top compartment held food that would spoil quickly, while the bottom contained dried meat and vegetables that would last longer. She had even prepared his favorite bean pie. Ian expressed his gratitude, thanking her for taking such good care of him. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him tightly, urging him to be careful, not to push himself too hard, and to eat well. The warmth of her embrace touched him deeply. He smiled and hugged her back, promising to heed her words and return soon, assuring her that there was no need to worry too much. But soon, it was time to part. He climbed into the carriage and, with one last glance, set off into the distance. His family and the servants remained behind as he ate. Gazing out the window, he reassured himself that his mother would be safe in his absence. One by one, everyone filtered back inside, but his mother continued to watch the carriage fade from view. The mansion, large and well-guarded, stood as a fortress around them. The city was a haven, with little crime to disturb its peace. The mana traps, powerful and intricate, were under the control of Douglas, his mother, and Ladeo Hammond. That should be sufficient to protect his family and home. It had been 25 years since his last visit to Perik, a place forever marked by the scars of a terrible battle that had erupted there. As monsters surged from every direction, storming the city, he commanded his soldiers to bring back 100 monster corpses. Until that goal was met, thoughts of dying were strictly forbidden. The knights rallied, charging fearlessly into battle. Just then, a mounted knight galloped forward, cutting through the chaos. As captain, he felt a surge of alarm and rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, he reported that a group of orcs had attacked from the rear. It was hard to believe how had they managed to flank them. He quickly ordered the second and third squads to remain with the magicians, while he took the first squad with him. He rallied his forces for the city's rescue. Though the monsters were formidable, they adhered to predictable patterns. Veteran soldiers could manage them. But for the newer recruits, orcs posed a significant threat. The captain could only hope they weren't already too late. As he charged ahead, snow began to fall, blanketing the battlefield in a hushed white. But snow never falls in the east, so how could this happen? Suddenly, massive blocks of ice began to rise before them, each encasing frozen orcs within. The sight shocked the army and halted the charge of the monsters. Confusion swept through the ranks as no one could comprehend what had just occurred. Then, in the distance, a figure emerged, standing atop one of the towering ice pillars. He was spotted, waved his cloak, and vanished. In an instant, the battlefield fell silent. Ice blades pierced through some monsters, while others were encased in massive blocks of ice, rendered immobile. Moments later, the man descended to the ground, only to find spears aimed at him as the soldiers demanded his name. He spoke calmly, stating he had come to offer assistance. The commander and his men could only stare in disbelief. Then, he removed his robe and introduced himself, Ian Page, Archmage of the tower. The captain was taken aback. Could this truly be the same mage from the northern village of Magrion? He never imagined he would be this young. Even as a child, they said he had cleared goblins from Mount Magrion. For the captain, meeting him was a great honor, and Ian expressed his own respect, saying it was a privilege to meet the East's finest warrior, Callian Pyrrhic. They shook hands, and despite the protagonist's long journey, Callian inquired if he could still find time to discuss the war, as he had something important to share. With that, they left the battlefield behind and made their way back to the city. In Callian's room, the warrior shared his concerns. He had anticipated the return of monsters, but not in such overwhelming numbers. Today's assault was bolder than anything they had faced before, signaling that something significant was shifting in the Great Grasslands. If Ian wasn't already aware, they had sent urgent requests to both the palace and the tower for assistance. One requested reinforcements and supplies, while the other called for an archmage, knowing that only a top-tier mage could turn the tide. The protagonist's ice wall had bought them some time, but it was only a temporary reprieve. They had battled monsters for years, and the invasion showed no signs of letting up. Food supplies were dwindling, and the soldiers were outnumbered. If their requests had been heeded, they might have continued the fight. Yet, it seemed the palace had turned a blind eye. As for the tower, Ian's arrival was a clear message. He grasped the situation immediately. The ice wall should hold for about 10 days, he stated, a hint of resolve in his voice. As long as the monsters remained on the other side of the mountains, they were safe for now. In the meantime, the protagonist set out into the vast meadows alone. He was determined to uncover the source of the threat and put an end to it once and for all. Ian spoke with unwavering confidence. The province had protected these lands for centuries, yet the source of the monster invasion remained a mystery. What they had discovered, however, was alarming. Various types of monsters were uniting rather than battling among themselves, and their singular goal was the extermination of humans. Green River was merely one of many targets. The Sorcerer Empire to the north and the Roe Kingdom to the west also faced attacks, but the damage was limited due to their rough, narrow roads. Most of the monsters emerged from the Great Snake Canyon. However, the most puzzling aspect was the south. The kingdom of the Agaton Aborigines remained untouched by the chaos. The main character pointed to it on the map, highlighting the anomaly. It felt as though an unseen force was driving the monsters away. The soldiers suspected that the south was linked to the increasing attacks on the grasslands. Yet they could never venture there, as the canyon was perpetually under siege. The main character pondered this. In his previous life, invasions of this nature had occurred, but never with such intensity. He found himself agreeing that they needed to take action. Ian headed straight for the Aboriginal Kingdom, convinced that the great shaman held the answers he sought. Could he truly communicate with him? Deep down, he believed he could. That night, he stepped outside and gazed upward, his heart racing at the sight of the artifact still hovering above him. It was the same relic once wielded by the Aboriginal shaman, the legendary Staff of Great Bows. The memory of it flooded back to him, vivid and undeniable. Crafted from rare iron birch, the coalition of the Green River Empire, the Sorcerer Empire, and the Roe Kingdom had formed 3 years prior to eradicate the monsters plaguing the Great Bows. With the majority of these creatures lurking in that territory, the three nations devised a plan to divide the land among themselves once the threat was eliminated. In his past life, the great shaman had vanished, leading to the enslavement of the Aborigines. Because of this, none of the events unfolding now had ever occurred. His return could have altered history, or perhaps even triggered these bizarre invasions. With determination, he pressed on across the desolate landscape. This marked the beginning of the Aboriginal territory, but an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. To the north, monsters roamed freely, yet here, in this place, not a single one could be found. Why had they targeted Pyrrhic, but chosen to bypass this area? As he ventured further, he noticed a group of men nearby. Their anxious glances betrayed their unease at the sight of a stranger among them. Ian raised his hands in a gesture of peace, declaring himself a mage from the Green River Empire. However, his attempt to communicate only heightened their fear. Without wasting a moment, he stated he was searching for the shaman. His words left them speechless. The king of shamans held a status as significant as that of the tower's master. A shaman was a being born with the heart and mind of mana. However, shamans were not mages, and at the pinnacle of their order stood their king. Ian revealed that he was investigating the monsters terrorizing the north, convinced that their leader held the key to understanding why. One warrior pressed his weapon against the MC's neck, a fierce warning in his voice. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded. "Keep talking like that, and we'll offer you up to the spirit of the Great Meadows." The MC stood firm, unyielding in his defiance, which only fueled the warrior's anger. They charged at him, but Ian conjured an ice spear in his hand and swung it with precision. In a single strike, he shattered his enemy's weapon, delivering a chilling warning that their heads would be next. "You can avoid this fight if you simply take me to the king," he urged. Just then, footsteps echoed from behind them. It was the king himself, inquiring about Ian's urgent request to see him. The warriors stood frozen, taken aback by his sudden arrival. Their reaction made it clear to the protagonist that this was indeed the Shaman King. He was surprised that the old man had come in person, but there was no time for pleasantries. The situation was dire. Monsters were assaulting the 3 neighboring nations, an unprecedented occurrence that demanded immediate attention. Ian was convinced the old man held the truth. The ruler insisted that the raids were simply part of a monster's nature, claiming ignorance. But Ian saw through the lie, locking eyes with him in a silent challenge. The old man's serious demeanor couldn't deceive Ian. He demanded the truth. The warriors bristled at his boldness in addressing their ruler, but the old man raised a hand, silencing them. He was taken aback when the old man saw through his deception magic. Realizing that lies would get him nowhere, he reluctantly agreed to explain. The old man began, recounting a prophecy from long ago. A sea of fire would engulf the Great Meadows, and the Golden Land would flow with blood. It also revealed that their people, who had inhabited the land for thousands of years, would be enslaved. The news shocked Ian to his core. They felt utterly helpless, knowing that war would spell their doom. So, they continued their daily lives, clinging to the hope that prayer might somehow postpone the inevitable. Then, one day, a woman arrived in the village. She handed them the powerful staff and vanished without a trace. A woman. Ian hesitated, recalling her final warning. If a stranger appeared, he must be eliminated immediately. In an instant, flames erupted around him and the dead began to crawl from the ground. The ruler offered an apology but coldly declared, "You will die here today." He understood immediately. It was black magic, a forbidden art, banned 3 centuries ago and thought to be extinct, yet somehow it still lingered, and now it had found its way to him. But Ian had no intention of succumbing to this dark force. He boldly declared that he would seize the staff linked to that black magic. The old man replied, "Take it if you can." The protagonist instructed him to watch closely before beginning to cast his spell. Meanwhile, back in the province, Callian couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. 10 days had slipped by since Ian ventured into the meadows. The ice wall was on the verge of melting, and once it did, everyone would be in peril once more. As Callian pondered the situation, he turned to Ardal. "Put everyone on alert," he commanded. "Gather every unit, every weapon, every catapult, and recall the guards from the mountain." Without hesitation, Ardal sprang into action, fully aware of the urgency. They needed to defend themselves and safeguard the province and its people. No matter the cost, they had to be the shield that held. Fog rolled over the mountains as the catapults were readied. When Callian issued the order to prepare, he spotted a figure emerging from the mist. Ian stepped forward, coughing, and Callian was taken aback by his disheveled appearance. He called out, but MC merely lifted his head, warning them not to touch the staff in his hand. Later, EA opened his eyes and found himself in a room within the castle, relieved to discover that, for now, everything had worked out. They still had to confront the staff he had brought back. Sitting up, he clutched his head, feeling the weight of his injuries. His body was wrapped in bandages, a testament to his ordeal. Just then, Callian entered the room, a look of relief on his face. "You're finally awake," he said. EA had been unconscious for a full 4 days. When asked about his condition, the doctor advised him to remain on bed rest. However, the protagonist, determined to prove his strength, insisted he was fine and sat up. He then inquired about his staff. The Lord informed him that the magicians had locked it away in a chest in the corner, a sort of mana prison. He praised Ian for managing the situation so effectively. Then, the Lord paused, his expression growing serious. He revealed that MC's mana and body had been completely drained. If he had arrived even a moment later, MC would have perished. Yet, the Lord knew he had to uncover what had nearly claimed MC's life and what had transpired in the Great Meadows. He revealed that the staff before them was the source of their troubles. Crafted from a black poppy, it was a tool the shaman used to ward off monsters. This revelation alarmed the Lord. Black magic had been outlawed and presumed extinct for 3 centuries. While he suspected the shaman's involvement, he was certain that someone else had forged the staff. Ian remained unaware of the identity of the mysterious figure. When the shaman perished, the dark magic began to wane, unleashing the monsters upon the new owner of the staff. It felt as though a curse had been cast to obscure the truth. This was the reason for the protagonist's delayed return. If the staff is that dangerous, why not destroy it or leave it behind? The Lord asked, still puzzled. Ian simply replied, I like it. The Lord raised an eyebrow, seeking clarification. The main character explained, I've already removed the black magic from it, and honestly, I'm quite pleased with the result. In that moment, darkness enveloped Ian's vision, and his heart raced violently. His legs trembled as he clutched his chest, and then he collapsed. The Lord, gripped by panic, rushed to his side, looking as if he were caught in a relentless whirlpool. Blood seeped through Ian's bandages, and the Lord could hardly comprehend the sight before him. Blood splattered across the floor, prompting an immediate shout for a doctor. But then, Ian suddenly awoke, reassuring everyone that he was fine and there was no need to panic. Nothing serious happened, he explained. I just shed my skin, in a way. The Lord, confused, asked what he meant by that. The protagonist clarified, my mana heart still isn't large enough to contain all my mana. And sometimes moments like this occur. The Lord felt a wave of calm wash over him. He asked MC if he was truly okay, and MC reassured him that he was fine. Realizing his mana had significantly increased, MC decided it was time to upgrade his class. As he examined his hands, he recognized that he could finally move forward. The Lord, though relieved, still insisted on having a doctor check him. The protagonist expressed his gratitude, and they swiftly shifted their focus to more pressing matters. The Lord began by discussing the protagonist's upcoming trip to the Great Meadows. Someone had wanted to show him the orb, but he had been unconscious at the time. Now, however, the moment had finally arrived to present it to him. Ian accepted the package, but the Lord had one more item to deliver. A messenger had also brought a letter which His Majesty had insisted be placed directly into the protagonist's hands. But why send it by messenger instead of using a faster, more modern method? Ian couldn't shake the feeling that there was something the tower wasn't meant to discover. With a sense of urgency, he decided to check the tower's message first and opened the orb. Inside, he found the message addressed to Archmage MC Page. It explained that the delivery had been delayed to avoid interfering with his mission, and they requested his understanding. While he was away, robbers had broken into his home to steal his inheritance. Robbers? He was stunned. His family was under the protection of the Ivory Tower, so he believed they should have been safe. The thought ignited a fury within him. They knew he would worry why send this message now, unless it came from the tower's master. After taking a moment to steady himself, Ian opened the Emperor's letter. It revealed that if this message had reached the Archmage, then fortune still favored His Majesty and his son. The Emperor had a favor to request. Ian was on a crucial mission, unaware that a meeting was about to take place in the free city of Demodora. This gathering would determine the fate of lands overrun by monsters. The protagonist couldn't believe he hadn't realized it sooner. In his past life, this event had occurred 3 years later. The meeting would include the Crown Prince, the 5th Prince Ragnar, and Captain Duncan from the Magic Tower. By the time the main character read this, they had likely already arrived in the Free City. With no support there, the Crown Prince was instructed by the Emperor to stand by his son's side and guide him through the challenges ahead. In return, the Emperor issued a direct decree promising protection for Ian's family. The protagonist closed his eyes, contemplating the implications. Negotiations in Demodora were the perfect stage for Ragnar to showcase his talents. As the Crown Prince faltered, Ragnar could establish himself as a skilled diplomat, advocating for the relinquishment of imperial land. Following that, the nobles would rally around Ragnar, leaving the Crown Prince to bear the brunt of their scorn, nearly casting him out from high society. Ian couldn't shake the feeling that both past and present events had been orchestrated by the tower's master. He wasn't sure when or why this thought had taken root in his mind, but everything seemed intertwined. The monster invasion, the Shaman King receiving a black magic staff from a mysterious sorceress, and the discussions that had begun 3 years earlier than expected. It all felt like part of a larger, sinister design. He was certain of it. The attack on his house felt like a clear warning. Ian understood now that this was no mere guess. It was a chilling reality. He longed to return to the capital and reunite with his family, dismissing the Emperor's request. Yet, to defeat his enemy, he required something extraordinary magic that had never been documented, a power even the tower's master was unaware of. To secure victory, he needed to ascend to the ranks of a 6th and 80th grade magician. Ian turned to the Lord, hoping for the chance to make a single request. Demdora, a free city untethered to any nation, surrounded them with its magnificent blue and white cathedrals. The Crown Prince then instructed Captain Duncan to summon Ian. He offered an apology and requested the prince's patience. His Majesty had dispatched him to represent the Empire, and this opportunity could alter his destiny entirely. The prince understood, yet anxiety lingered in his heart. Duncan recognized the source of his unease. The meeting would involve foreign envoys, the master of the tower, and Ragnar himself. Ahead, Ragnar and the tower's master were deep in conversation with others. The prince couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. He knew that MC's support would be invaluable right now. Duncan remained silent, sensing the tension in the air. The tower's master felt that the moment he had long prepared for had finally arrived. Surely, he was already racing back to the palace. The old man was convinced he understood him completely. He would always prioritize his family, regardless of the political turmoil surrounding them. Suddenly, people began to point at the sky, mistaking a figure for a giant bird. The crown prince gasped in disbelief. It was Ian, descending gracefully, his cloak billowing dramatically in the wind. The protagonist landed gracefully, offering a sincere apology for his tardiness. Those nearby were left in awe by his dramatic entrance. The tower's master was in disbelief. How could the main character prioritize anything over his family? Meanwhile, at the palace of the Green River Empire, Ian's family remained safe and sound. His younger brother anxiously awaited Captain Duncan's return. Stuck at the palace due to the ban, he was utterly bored and restless. Their father urged him to remain calm and appreciate their shelter within the palace walls. He also expressed relief that the mana traps had successfully captured the robbers. After all, anyone meddling with that perilous map magic would have been reduced to dust in an instant. He turned to Lady Page, reassuring her not to worry. "This is the Imperial Palace," he said. "Is there any place safer than this?" When she remained silent, he continued speaking to fill the void. He mentioned that a letter had arrived from the Ivory Tower, and that the gentleman would be here very soon. Just then, the door swung open, and a voice inquired if he was late. The entire family froze in shock. His mother, who had remained silent until that moment, called out his name, leaped to her feet, and rushed into his arms. Yen apologized for causing them concern, assuring them that everything was fine now and that he would protect them. The night before, at Callion's provincial castle, he had discussed his request with the Lord. The man agreed to assist, but only if the protagonist revealed his plans. Yen urged him to protect his body with his very life. The Lord, however, didn't fully grasp the gravity of his words. The main character explained that he intended to cast a spell that would put both his body and mind into a deep slumber. If anything went awry, the local magician would need to channel mana into his head to awaken him. After all, no one had ever officially achieved 6th and 80th grade magic before, leaving almost no records to guide them. Even in his past life, before ascending to the 6th circle and beyond, he had to devise his own methods or sift through ancient tomes. Without hesitation, he began his work. He drew a magic circle with a star at its center. As he activated it, his body felt as though it were splitting in two, and then he collapsed. The Lord was quick to catch him, preventing a complete fall into darkness. Cradling Yen in his arms, he stared in disbelief. How could there be two perfect copies standing within the circle? This spell was known as Puppet Show. With magic of 6th grade or higher, the caster's real body becomes the controller, falls into a deep slumber, and summons two lifelike dolls. The dolls possessed a life of their own, capable of wielding 5th grade magic. Still cradling Yen, the Lord addressed one of the replicas. Through it, the protagonist conveyed his trust, expressing that he was counting on him. Meanwhile, at the meeting with the prince, joy lit up the prince's face upon seeing the main character. Instantly at ease, he expressed his heartfelt gratitude. Before they could continue their conversation, the tower's master approached them, so the gentleman had truly arrived. He had already received word that the mission in the province had been a success. Yen had performed admirably. The Archmage replied that all his efforts were for the Empire. It was simply his duty. If he had truly recovered, shouldn't he return to the tower to address other pressing matters? When the old man alluded to the protagonist's family, the protagonist swiftly interrupted him. He had received a letter from the tower, but there was also one from the Emperor waiting for his attention. In the letter, the Emperor personally requested his assistance for the prince at today's meeting. The old man asked to see it, and Yen handed it over without hesitation. As soon as he folded the letter, the tower owner realized the Emperor was up to his usual tricks. He couldn't shake the disbelief that MC would leave his family behind to come here. While he acknowledged the Emperor's letter, he insisted that Yen still couldn't stay. That response ignited the prince's fury. Was he truly defying the Emperor? The tower owner turned to him and said, "This is about trust between the three nations. The number of attendees for the meeting was predetermined, and we can't simply alter that. If the prince were to suddenly bring an archmage like you, it could tarnish our country's image and raise suspicions." Surely, His Highness understood the dangers of such misunderstandings. Yan recognized that the old man was correct. The three nations enjoyed peace now, but they had endured years of conflict and strife. Under the new agreement, each country was permitted to bring only its representative, an escort, and guards. Their side already had 3 archmages present, including the tower owner. Introducing another could jeopardize the fragile trust between them. Yen lowered his head, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. The concerns surrounding diplomacy and trust were all too real. The tower owner expressed his gratitude and urged him to return to the capital soon before turning to leave. The protagonists reflected on their lengthy journey, acknowledging the time spent but feeling relieved that everything was now clear. He would report this to His Majesty. But first, he had one request. If any archmage decided to leave the group, he wanted to be informed immediately. That way, he could step in and take their place. Given that this was a direct order from the Emperor, finding a replacement would be a straightforward task. The old man nodded in agreement, but questioned who would actually be willing to step down. Just then, one man stepped forward, declaring he would gladly relinquish his position for Yan. A stunned silence fell over the crowd, even catching the prince off guard. The tower owner turned to Ronan, seeking confirmation. Ronan met his gaze with unwavering seriousness. "As servants of the Empire," he stated, "we cannot ignore the Emperor's command." Yen felt a surge of satisfaction. Ronan, well-versed in the art of diplomacy, recognized the necessity of the Emperor's will, and as a loyal citizen, he would never dream of defying him. This resolution addressed both concerns seamlessly. The tower owner's expression grew stern, yet he chose to remain silent. Ronan then requested the prince to transfer his duties to MC Page. The prince readily agreed, expressing gratitude for Ronan's commitment to the Empire. He assured Ronan that he could return to the capital under his personal orders, along with the crew. With a respectful bow, Ronan thanked the prince before turning to face Yen. From this moment on, he would take his place in the delegation. He urged him to approach the role with the utmost seriousness. The protagonist expressed his gratitude for the opportunity. Archmage Ronan was a figure worth winning over, honest, fair, and impartial toward both the Ivory Tower and the Emperor. He was a simple man who had devoted his entire life to the art of magic. If the main character taught him a few new tricks, he would likely be swayed to join his side. The main character understood this all too well. With a respectful bow, Ronan announced his intention to take his leave, recalling the tower owner's words. Since the Archmage was not on an official mission, he shouldn't linger here. This only fueled the tower owner's anger. Initially, he had dismissed Yan as a harmless fool, but now he began to suspect that the young man was vying for his position as tower master. He observed Yan effortlessly engaging in conversation with the others, a confident smile on his face. The man had dedicated years to constructing the tower, transforming it into a powerful stronghold that influenced the entire empire. He would not allow a young mage to jeopardize everything he had built. Meanwhile, Ragnar observed the protagonist from afar, a purple pendant glinting at his neck. As they gazed over the city, it became evident that the meter was indeed a free city, unbound by any of the three nations. They examined the Grand Gate, noting how the city had maintained its neutrality for years, a fact acknowledged by all sides. The 19th mayor, Ingelo Ingelo Neville, offered a slight bow and warmly welcomed them inside. The prince inquired about the whereabouts of the remaining assembly members, to which the mayor replied that they had already departed for their guest estates. Onkiglo then gestured toward a grand mansion, explaining that it had been prepared for the ambassadors of the Green River Empire. He added that this estate was reserved exclusively for the prince and used solely for their most esteemed visitors. The prince examined the work and declared it quite impressive. He then turned to the tower owner, inquiring if there were any plans for the day. Leon lowered his head slightly, closed his eyes, and replied that nothing was scheduled. The crown prince beamed at this, his smile widening as he exclaimed that it was wonderful news. He waved to the group, signaling that they could take a break. Then, turning to Ian, he beckoned him to follow. Memzi and the prince quickly made their exit. Ragnar watched them go before turning to the tower owner, stating that they needed to have a conversation. Leon nodded in acknowledgement. Moments later, the door to a private room swung open. Ragnar and Leon entered the room, the atmosphere thick with tension. The tower owner, head bowed, listened intently as Ragnar declared he wouldn't place blame for the recent events. What truly troubled him, however, was the magician who seemed to linger around his brother like a shadow. Suddenly, Ragnar whipped around to face Leon, his anger palpable. "I don't like any of this," he said, his voice low but fierce. Leon kept his gaze lowered, murmuring his understanding. Without raising his head, he reassured Ragnar not to worry. Ian Page was undoubtedly talented, but this meeting would hinge on diplomacy, not magic. In this situation, magic would be of no use. Leon was confident that the protagonist would be at a loss for words in a setting like this. What could a young magician possibly contribute? Among the esteemed diplomats of the three nations, Leon glanced up at the fifth prince and remarked that Memsi would merely serve as decoration. The true highlight of today's meeting would be the one they had orchestrated. Ragnar closed his eyes, acknowledging Leon's words, yet a lingering unease still gnawed at him. Every attempt to win Ian over had ended in failure. The fifth prince envisioned him as a looming obstacle, and he knew that if this continued, Ian would become a significant threat to his future. Turning to Leon, he expressed his hope that the situation would be resolved swiftly. The tower owner bowed and reassured him, promising there was nothing to fear. As Leon gazed out the window, he reassured himself that everything would unfold just as Ragnar desired. The crown prince stepped into his room, plopped down onto the sofa, and declared it a splendid place. Oliver and Ian then caught his enthusiastic remark about Demeter's renowned nightlife, suggesting they should go out and catch a show. He perked up and excitedly asked if he could buy new clothes for going out. As Oliver summoned the servants, the protagonist interjected, calling out to the prince. The prince turned to him, surprise flickering in his eyes, his expression tinged with a hint of nervousness. "What's wrong?" he asked, curiosity piqued. Ian's intense gaze bore into the prince, prompting him to ask, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Scratching his head, Memsi inquired if Ian understood the purpose of their visit. They were there for a crucial meeting of three nations, with the prince set to speak as the official representative of the Green River Empire. Raising his hands, he made it clear they weren't there to fool around. The prince's expression fell, disappointment washing over him as the protagonist dismissed the idea of a party. However, he quickly pointed out that they still had plenty of time ahead. That remark sent Ian into a fury. He shouted that preparations would begin immediately. The prince cast a sympathetic glance at Oliver, but Oliver merely turned away in silence. Memsi then reminded the prince that, as the head of the delegation, he had the right to speak first. If he remained silent, that opportunity would pass to the fifth prince. The prince lowered his gaze, acknowledging the truth in Ian's words. He knew the fifth prince was undoubtedly ready to seize the spotlight. But did he truly desire that? Ian pressed him for an answer. The prince closed his eyes, responding with a quiet, "Of course not." He sank into a seat, exhaling deeply, and admitted, "I know nothing about diplomacy, armies, borders, or slavery." No one had ever taught him these lessons. He observed in silence as the prince offered a faint smile. "Perhaps it's better to remain silent than to say something foolish in front of important people," he suggested. Ian recognized that the prince was merely attempting to escape his own vulnerabilities. But for Ian, that was simply not an option. Turning his gaze away, the protagonist reminded himself that the crown prince was essential to toppling the fifth prince. Ragnar's image flickered in his mind. Memsi bowed his head, closed his eyes for a brief moment, and declared that the prince must become the focal point of the meeting. The prince looked at him, bewildered, and asked how that was even possible. With a decisive snap of his fingers, Ian resolved to give the crown prince a genuine opportunity to shine. Papers and a pen materialized in the air, as he explained that the emperor had sent him to assist the prince in the upcoming meeting. Deep down, Ian was determined to help him prove his worth. The pen continued to glide through the air as the protagonist declared he would provide the prince with every answer he needed, ensuring he wouldn't lose his standing or allow the spotlight to shift to the fifth prince. Narrowing his eyes slightly, he raised a hand. A peculiar sound echoed through the room as he proclaimed that from that moment until the day of the meeting, the prince was required to study diligently. The prince stared in horror as papers swirled chaotically around the room. Ian shot him a stern look and declared that he would have to memorize every last one. A week slipped by, and at last the day of the meeting arrived. That evening, Ragnar walked alongside the master of the tower, the weight of anticipation heavy in the air. The fifth prince turned to him and remarked that he had heard his brother hadn't left his residence even once since arriving. With a curious glance, Ragnar inquired about what could possibly keep him so occupied. Leon admitted he found it strange as well, but the guards reported that nothing unusual occurred within those walls. Apparently, the crown prince only ventured out for brief walks in the garden. Lost in thought, Ragnar cast a knowing glance at the magician and nodded in understanding. He then turned sharply, his gaze landing on the crown prince. "Good morning," he greeted, but the prince responded with a frosty stare. Standing before him, Ragnar inquired about his night. "It was fine," the prince replied coolly. Ragnar offered a faint smile and remarked that it was good. He studied his brother for a moment before announcing that he would head to the meeting room first. The Crown Prince quickly moved closer, and Ragnar assured him they would meet again soon. Without a second glance, Ian strode past the fifth prince, his determination unwavering. He stepped in behind the prince, who then turned to face his brother. The Crown Prince's fists clenched tightly. The protagonist noticed immediately. When Ian called out, the prince's gaze shot forward, his expression stiffening as fear flickered across his face. Turning to him, the protagonist reassured him not to worry. They had prepared diligently all week. Glancing to the side, he added that he was certain the prince would shine in today's meeting. The prince observed him intently, his expression shifting to one of unwavering confidence as he replied, "Yes." Jolo stood at the entrance of the hall, introducing himself as Nogolo Neville, the 19th mayor of the free city of Demeter. As the princes gathered around the round table, he announced that the meeting would be recorded and could only be paused at his request. The princes exchanged wary glances, sensing the weight of the moment. The mayor officially opened the meeting. Ragnar and the Crown Prince sat upright, flanked by their mages. One prince raised his hand. It was Maxwell Vane, heir to a duchy in the kingdom of Luo. He spoke up, noting that the route from the kingdom of Thorns to the Great Meadows was treacherous, making trade and exchange a significant challenge for them. As a result, he proposed that they focus on enlisting magicians and elite knights, rather than relying on regular troops, money, or supplies. The Coldwood Empire had already given their consent. Maxwell surveyed the room, asserting that there was no need to overcomplicate the matter. He added that if the Green River Empire refused, they would be open to reconsidering their options. Ian observed the Crown Prince, recalling that their discussions had initially centered around military support. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment they had prepared for. Ragnar flashed a broad grin at the Crown Prince. Just as he cleared his throat to speak on his behalf, his brother interjected, reminding everyone that the discussion was about army supplies. The prince maintained his steady gaze and insisted he would prefer to hear their commander's opinion first. Maxwell appeared slightly taken aback, clearly questioning whether the fifth prince was meant to be the one speaking. The Crown Prince declared that an expert was present, making it the perfect opportunity to listen in. Ragnar stared at his brother in disbelief. The Crown Prince turned abruptly, summoning the commander. Duncan glanced over and nodded in agreement to speak. As Duncan began to talk, the protagonist lowered his head slightly, feeling that this was a promising beginning. Ian continued to observe intently. His gaze swept across the entire table as the discussion about supplies unfolded. The prince confidently presented his argument, standing firm against another royal, his demeanor calm and assured. Maxwell smiled, placing a hand on his chest, while Ragnar sat stiffly, silent. The discussions continued into the evening, and Ian observed intently, sensing they were approaching the final topic. Suddenly, one prince clapped his hands to capture everyone's attention. Hector Coldwood of the Coldwood Empire extended his hand, insisting that honesty was essential in their deliberations. They aimed to divide the land into 3 equal parts, but who could truly verify their equality? He argued that such a vast expanse contained varying resources and soil quality. Why should one section benefit from the fertile land, while another was left with the less desirable? All the princes turned their attention to Hector as he spoke. The side that loses will undoubtedly attempt to seize land from the others, and that could spark a war among all 3 nations. Ian shifted his gaze, realizing that this was the crux of the day's discussion, how to fairly divide the vast meadows among their realms. Hector then folded his hands and added, "My empire has no desire for such conflict." They longed for peace to endure for many more years. So, if anyone had a better plan, now was the time to speak up and avert conflict. With that, the entire hall erupted into discussion. Ragnar turned to address the master of the tower, while Leon tilted his head in curiosity toward him. Ragnar lifted his chin, ready to speak, but his brother abruptly interrupted, claiming he had a brilliant solution. The Crown Prince sprang to his feet, and every prince turned to him in astonishment, their eyes gleaming with curiosity. With confidence, the Crown Prince declared that he would present his idea. Ragnar slowly lowered his hand, a look of confusion crossing his face. Adjusting his monocle, Angelo announced that everyone present would be eager to hear from the Prince of the Green River Empire. Leaning on the table, the Crown Prince revealed that the Ivory Tower, known as the Tower of Magic, had developed a groundbreaking method to detect hidden resources underground and assess their quantity over vast areas. Ragnar and Leon exchanged stunned glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and intrigue. Sweat trickled down the Tower Master's cheek as he grappled with the unsettling realization of how the prince could possibly know that. Maxwell pivoted sharply, demanding to know if the claim was true. With unwavering confidence, the prince replied, asserting that they must have heard of the magician standing beside him. The prince tilted his head, extending a hand as he revealed that the method had been developed by Ian Page, the youngest archmage in their empire. The entire hall fell silent, disbelief washing over the crowd at the mention of such extraordinary magic. Meanwhile, Leon's expression darkened with tension and anger. This had been their plan as well, to harness that very method for their own advantage. How had that kid known this would become the focal point of the meeting? Leon fixed his gaze on the protagonist. The prince stood tall, extending a hand as he proposed the idea of creating a resource map that would also detail soil quality. He envisioned the map in his mind, suggesting it could aid in fairly dividing the land. The prince acknowledged that the results might not be perfect, but he insisted that in 10 years, every nation would inevitably turn to the land for resources. Ragnar clenched his fists, trembling with barely contained rage. He shot an angry glare at the protagonist, who met it with unwavering confidence. The crown prince proclaimed that there was no answer better than his own. A faint smirk crossed the protagonist's lips. Lifting his chin defiantly, the crown prince suggested they settle the matter this way. By sunset, the meeting had come to an end. Oliver leaned against a column in the corridor, his gaze drifting until a voice called out to him. He looked up to see the crown prince striding down the hall, a broad smile lighting up his face. As he rushed over, he exclaimed that Oliver simply had to hear about it. He had won everyone over in the meeting. He paused in front of him, a smirk playing on his lips as he remarked how unfortunate it was that Oliver had missed the Tower Master's sour expression. With a confident grin, the prince promised to share all the details as they walked. After all, they hadn't had a moment to truly enjoy themselves amidst all the preparations. He then turned to the protagonist, urging him to join in on the fun after all. When would they get another chance like this? Ian nodded in agreement, which only brightened the prince's spirits further. Approaching Ian, the prince placed his hands on his shoulders and said with a grin, "Soon you'll be an adult, so perhaps you can indulge in one more drink." The prince smirked, ready to offer his guidance, but Ragnar interrupted him with a rude remark. The fifth prince stood nearby, observing the exchange with keen interest. Ragnar wore a smile, yet remained silent. Growing annoyed, the prince turned to his brother and asked, "What do you want?" Ragnar placed a hand on his chest and bowed, declaring that he had been magnificent today. Delving even deeper, he added that he had learned a great deal from his brother, leaving him taken aback. The crown prince smiled faintly, crossing his arms and turning his head slightly. "I'm glad to help," he replied. It was heartening to see Ragnar engaged in his studies and participating in meetings like this. He sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the floor. The prince turned to his brother, encouraging him not to lose hope. He assured Ragnar that he could always come to him for help. Slowly, Ragnar lifted his head and expressed his gratitude to his older brother. Ragnar suddenly turned and walked away, leaving the crown prince standing still, watching him go. After a moment, he addressed the boys behind him, gazing westward. "This has truly been the best day," he declared. Ian and Oliver exchanged small smiles, sharing in the moment. The prince approached, placing a hand on each of their shoulders, and declared that they needed to make up for the entire miserable week. With a grin directed at Oliver, he urged him to relax and stop standing so stiffly. After all, they were off duty here. Turning to MC, he added with a mischievous glint in his eye that he would teach him how to drink. He continued speaking, but his gaze returned to Ian. Noticing Ian's blue hands, he asked, "What happened?" The Tower Master and Ragnar exchanged stunned glances, their shock palpable. Oliver and the prince watched in awe as a blue light radiated from the protagonist. With a hand outstretched, the MC declared that it seemed as if his entire body had turned blue. He concluded with a heavy heart, stating that this was his limit. Startled, the prince inquired, "What do you mean by limit?" Ian lowered his head, closed his eyes, and declared that the drinking lesson would have to wait until they reached the palace. As his form began to fade, he promised to explain everything there, assuring them he would return. The crown prince stared at the empty space in fear, while everyone else in the room stood frozen, equally shocked by his sudden disappearance. Leon tightened his grip on the staff and declared that Ian had been nothing but an illusion. The Tower Master trembled, his voice quivering as he questioned whether Ian had been fake the entire time. If that were true, then what did it mean for them? Ragnar stood frozen, his gaze fixed ahead, utterly speechless. The only evidence of the protagonist's presence was the unsettling silence that lingered in the air. Horrified, the Tower Master came to a chilling realization. The MC had merely been toying with them. Suddenly, Leon erupted into loud laughter, his mirth echoing through the chamber. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the castle was bathed in the soft glow of morning light. A soldier entered with lunch, announcing that the Lord's meal had arrived. The Lord turned, gesturing for him to set it down. The soldier cast a glance at him and inquired if he was still unconscious. The Lord, turning his gaze toward the soldier, replied, "Yes, for now." Several days had already slipped by. He continued, noting that the magicians had managed to reduce the protagonist's mana drain and life force depletion, allowing his body to gradually heal. Just then, one of the protagonist's fingers twitched. The Lord recalled Ian's earlier warning. If anything went awry, he should send a mana signal directly to his mind. Rising quickly, he declared it was likely time to summon a magician. However, he turned back toward the bed when he heard a calm voice say, "There's no need to call anyone." Ian was still lying there, but his demeanor was surprisingly composed. Shocked, the Lord inquired if the protagonist was finally awake. Turning his head slightly, Ian offered a faint smile and replied that it seemed so. The Lord leaned closer, asking how he felt and if anything hurt. With a soft exhale, Ian closed his eyes and admitted that he still wasn't fully awake. He then added that his head felt like it was splitting. He couldn't move, and his stomach was in knots. The Lord panicked, offering to call a doctor immediately, but the MC shook his head. "No, I'm just hungry." The Lord froze, a bead of sweat trickling down his face. Silence enveloped the room until, suddenly, Ian's stomach growled loudly, breaking the tension. A moment later, he quietly confessed that he was quite hungry. As dawn's light flooded the castle, he turned to hear a request. Could he stay just one more night? The Lord acknowledged that he understood the protagonist was busy, but they wished to properly say goodbye and share a meal together. MC lowered his head slightly and replied that their assistance had already been more than sufficient. Glancing toward the fountain, he added that he wasn't a great savior, just an archmage. Any other archmage would have acted similarly. The Lord, resting a hand at his side, shook his head and said he didn't believe that. He looked down, acknowledging that he had initially doubted Ian. Most would have simply slain the monsters and returned to the tower. Yet, he remembered his own words, how he had claimed the young magician could genuinely help put an end to the monster attacks. Now, the Lord admitted he had been mistaken. The protagonist had accomplished more in just 10 days than they had in a long while. That kind of power was truly extraordinary. The main character stood there, a hint of embarrassment coloring his cheeks as he listened to the knight. The Lord smiled and mentioned that before Ian departed, there was one more matter to address. Curious, the protagonist inquired what he meant, prompting the Lord to challenge him to guess. With a knowing look, he revealed that about 5 years ago, the protagonist had been honored as an eternal high-ranking guest in the Mogrian province. "Why not do the same here?" the Lord suggested with a grin. The main character hesitated, skepticism etched on his face. "That doesn't sound simple," he replied. The Lord chuckled, reassuring him, "Don't worry about it. We can skip the extra ceremony." With a flourish, he spread his arms wide and officially welcomed him as an honorary guest of the Calian-Pyrrhic province. The knight emphasized that this was no ordinary thank you. He remarked that even a sixth-rate archmage would be delighted to receive such an honor. With both hands resting on his belt, the Lord noted that this gesture benefited both the province and Ian alike. The protagonist lowered his head, uncertain if such significant imperial decisions were typically made so casually. However, if the Lord believed it was acceptable, he looked up and declared that he saw no reason to refuse. The Lord turned to his aide, took the sword from him, and expressed his satisfaction with a nod. With a swift motion, he pulled the blade free and declared that their pact would be sealed for 1,000 years. A slight grin crossed his face as he reassured Ian, "Don't worry, it will be over quickly." He then plunged the sword into the ground. Closing his eyes, the Lord began the formal vow in the name of the Calian-Pyrrhic family. He pledged that the Archmage would always be welcomed and supported whenever he needed it. The main character listened with a smile, appreciating the sentiment. The Lord bowed his head, swearing on his name that this promise would be passed down through every generation. After returning the sword, he covered his face, admitting with a sheepish grin that he still wasn't quite accustomed to these formal speeches. He preferred to simply declare the contract complete. Ian chuckled softly and expressed his gratitude. The Lord extended his hand, requesting that Ian notify them before his next visit, so they could showcase the finest attractions of the region. The protagonist nodded in agreement, assuring him he would. He ascended into the sky, bidding farewell to the knight. The Lord and his aide watched him soar away. Ian climbed higher, gazing toward the rising sun. As he hovered there, he reflected on all that had transpired in such a brief span and the treasures he had gained along the way. A smile spread across his face as he lifted his staff, ready for whatever lay ahead. He recalled discovering an Archmage's staff, a relic of black magic that had been lost for over 300 years. As he gazed ahead, he resolved that once he returned to the capital, he would dedicate himself to restoring it. Just then, a woman in heels hurried down the stairs. When Ian's mother spotted him in the hall, she called out to him, clutching a letter in her hand. He quickly turned toward her, a smile breaking across his face. "Mother," he replied warmly. She hurried over, her expression shifting to concern as she scolded him for vanishing without a word. "Do you have any idea how worried and scared I was?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. She halted in shock, her hands instinctively rising to her mouth as she gasped at how terribly thin he appeared. Gently touching him, she exclaimed that he was nothing but skin and bones. "Have they not fed you at all, after everything you've done?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Her gaze swept over him sadly, and she added, "It's clear you've suffered." Ian gently took her hands and reassured her that a lot had happened, but he was confident he would regain the weight soon. With a subtle shift, he slipped a hand beneath his cloak and revealed a shimmering blue orb. "This," he explained, "is a communication sphere powered by mana." He had set up a workshop along the road to the capital, ensuring she could always reach him, even when he was away. After handing it to her, he gestured to the sphere embedded in his staff and apologized for causing her worry. His mother gazed at him with warmth, cradling the sphere in both hands. Ian assured her that he would make an effort to stay closer from now on. Just then, Douglas burst into the hall, calling out for him. The alchemist's son emerged, curiosity etched on his face as he inquired about the magic he had just witnessed. Despite his extensive studies at the academy, he had never encountered anything like it. Lidio trailed closely behind, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Douglas rushed forward, eager to know how the protagonist could be present both in the capital and in Demeter at the same time. Was it an illusion or a reflection? The main character tilted his head, asking if they could tackle one question at a time. Looking up, he assured them he could explain it simply. Ian straightened his posture and declared that he had reached 6th grade, which meant he could now use spells like that. The room fell silent as everyone stared at him in disbelief. Douglas raised a hand, declaring himself the strongest mage in the Empire. Lidio took a cautious step closer, acknowledging that he had sensed Douglas's strength from their first encounter, but this was beyond what he had expected. The protagonist closed his eyes for a brief moment, then spoke softly, insisting that nothing had truly changed. They should continue to treat him just as they always had. Douglas's eyes sparkled with excitement as he invited the main character to join him that night for a test of some new elixirs. Ian looked up, declining the offer. Curious, Douglas pressed him for a reason. Ian met his gaze and explained that he had already received another invitation. Just then, the protagonist stepped into the bar, confident he had arrived at the right place. The Crown Prince spread his arms wide, beckoning MC to join him. When he announced that this was a banquet in his honor, MC's mood soured slightly. He had never been fond of such gatherings. With a faint smile, Ian glanced down at his plainclothes, pondering what kind of celebration this was truly meant to be. The vice captain beckoned the protagonist over, settling him into a chair. Oliver gestured toward the table, demanding more snacks. The protagonist's gaze fell on the mug before him. With a flourish, the Crown Prince placed it down and boisterously congratulated him on reaching the 6th level. His eyes half closed in a mix of pride and mischief. The prince declared that he had brought a special drink from the Imperial Reserves just for this occasion. It was a rare choice, unlike anything he had encountered before. Then, the prince called for more drinks. Ian glanced at the mug, reflecting on how little he had drunk in his past life. He picked it up, recalling Ragnar's warning that alcohol dulls the mind. With a deep breath, the protagonist swallowed hard. To everyone's astonishment, he began to drink rapidly. The Crown Prince observed him closely and inquired about the taste. Ian slammed the mug down on the table, wiping his lips with satisfaction, as he declared it was truly excellent. The Crown Prince smiled, pleased that Ian enjoyed it. Just then, the bartender approached the prince, eager to discuss Demeter. The prince turned with a broad grin and immediately agreed. He strode over, brimming with confidence as he began to tell the story. Ian watched in astonishment, captivated by the prince's charisma. His attention remained fixed until someone approached to refill his mug. Turning, he found Oliver standing there holding a bottle. Oliver poured another drink and cautioned him to take it easy, reminding him that it was his first time. With a playful grin, he added that if Ian got too drunk, his mana might just make the entire night disappear. The protagonist took the mug, dismissing their concerns with a confident smile. He couldn't help but be surprised at how effortlessly the Crown Prince mingled with the knights. Was that normal? Pouring himself a drink, Oliver assured himself it was. The local knights had sworn their loyalty to him, and that trust was mutual. The main character rested his head on his hand, softly echoing, in oath and trust. Oliver glanced over at him. As he took a sip, he remarked, "I finally understand why I have no friends." He sat up immediately, questioning why Oliver would bring that up now. With a calm demeanor, Oliver replied that he had pieced it together during their first encounter. He asked if the protagonist recalled their initial conversation 5 years ago in Mulgrean, right after catching that spy. Oliver remembered how, even then, the young mage had already reached the rank of 3rd class and managed to apprehend a dangerous criminal, all while appearing completely unfazed. He managed his emotions far better than most kids his age, who were still figuring out how to navigate society. Slowly, he loosened his grip on the mug. Oliver remarked that his expression resembled that of a seasoned knight rather than a mere child. Resting his head on his hand, the protagonist pondered what that could possibly mean. Oliver had always known he was different from the other kids. With a grin, he remarked that it was then he realized MC was already burdened with many secrets. With that kind of distance, forming friendships would be a challenge. He then locked eyes with MC and confidently declared that he had a knack for seeing through people. The protagonist briefly closed his eyes, acknowledging that Oliver was right, even if the bluntness of it stung. He admitted to having once had a friend, though that friendship had ended in heartbreak. Taking another sip, Oliver expressed his curiosity about the kind of person that friend had been. Leaning in closer, he added that there was something else he had discovered after 5 years of knowing the protagonist. The protagonist braced himself, apprehensive that another harsh truth was about to surface. Oliver leaned in closer and remarked that speaking with him always felt like conversing with a grown man. The protagonist shut his eyes, realizing that Oliver truly had a knack for reading people. The MC glanced at him and, with a deadpan expression, declared that he was actually 48 years old and used magic to maintain his youth. Oliver recoiled in horror, but Ian quickly reassured him, "It's just a joke." He broke into a wide smile and admitted that Oliver had once said he was bad with people, so it was no surprise he was still terrible at jokes. Oliver glanced at him, a small smile forming on his lips. With a beaming expression, he declared that as the generous captain of the knights, he would graciously forgive him. The protagonist grinned back, grateful for the light-hearted moment. Much later, night had fully enveloped the surroundings. Outside, a serene silence reigned, broken only by the distant sounds of the bar. Ian stepped out, cradling his head in his hands, convinced he had indulged a bit too much. Even in his past life, he had never consumed this much. Just then, a voice called out to him. Archon turned to find the vice captain squatting near the bar. As he descended the steps, he inquired about his companion's unusual position. The vice captain sheepishly admitted that he was feeling weak from the alcohol. 1 glass was his limit. Archon regarded him thoughtfully before revealing that he had stepped outside for some fresh air. Curiously, he asked why Ian had left. Leaning against the wall, the protagonist exhaled deeply, confessing that he too had come out to catch his breath. He wasn't accustomed to nights like this. Amphi observed Paul, the vice captain, recalling that in his past life, Paul had been the most skilled swordsman after the captain. As he watched Paul crouch there, he remembered how, despite his humble origins, Paul's unwavering loyalty to the crown and the country had earned him a place among the crown prince's most trusted men. Paul inquired if today was the protagonist's first experience with drinking and what he thought of it. Amphi lowered his head slightly and replied that it wasn't bad. Perhaps he would indulge in evenings like this from time to time. Paul beamed, clearly pleased by his response. The knights expressed their gratitude for Ian's assistance, noting how long it had been since they had seen the prince this joyful. It was all thanks to him. With a small grin, Ian looked away, appreciating their kind words. Reflecting on the well-dressed crown prince, the protagonist humbly remarked that he had merely given them a gentle push. They pressed on together, but then Amphi widened his eyes and repeated the question. The prince was happy? With a faint smile, he replied, "I'll take that as a compliment." Paul gazed at him in surprise, almost entranced by the moment. He turned to Paul and asked what was wrong. Paul replied that he hadn't expected him to smile like that. The protagonist glanced up at the dark sky, puzzled by his friend's words. Just then, someone poked their head out of the bar, spotted them, and shouted that the vice captain was over there. Paul's expression shifted to one of fatigue and alarm when the man added that His Highness was calling for. If he continued to dodge drinks, he'd find himself demoted. Paul muttered that this was all too much. Rising to his feet, he turned to Ian and offered a quick apology, explaining that he needed to head back inside. NC smiled as Paul added that the crown prince would likely pour him even more this time, so he'd better keep an eye on things himself. With a glance toward a nearby tree, he began to walk away. He paused at the railing, gazing out over the city, and felt the weight of his past life begin to lift. A vivid memory surfaced, himself standing in a field at sunset. Then, the image of the crown prince laughing in the bar flickered through his mind, bringing a faint smile to his lips. Ian reflected on the choices he had made and the changes they had wrought. He envisioned a somber Ragnar standing by the window, and it dawned on him just how drastically everything had shifted. Ragnar's image lingered in the protagonist's mind, leaving him uncertain of where Emperor Terry's decisions, made in the solitude of his office while poring over papers, would ultimately lead. He reached out and caught a feather drifting through the air. Standing across from the girl, he watched as she gazed in awe at the white magic bird. Ian's mother sat at the dinner table with Douglas and Ledio, laughter filling the air. The warm image of her joy lingered in Incy's mind. He understood now that protecting those he loved was a straightforward task. Meanwhile, his past self remained frozen in time, gazing into the distance. Beneath the stars, Ian moved forward in silence, contemplating the path ahead. He smiled, resolving to live with a clean heart from that moment on. As the King Peace descended toward him, he understood that the game had finally begun, right here, right now, with Ragnar. Moonlight bathed the fifth prince's estate in a silvery glow. Suddenly, a voice drifted in from the window. By the window, Ragnar lowered his head and turned to the tower owner, inquiring about their next steps. He then pivoted toward the magician, reminding him of his earlier desire to eliminate Ian before he became a threat. "So, what now?" he pressed. Li Yun kept his gaze downcast, reluctantly admitting that Ragnar was right. Ragnar scrutinized him, waiting for more. "Is that all you have to say?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. He instructed him to wait, assuring him that he would deal with the protagonist, and this was the outcome. Turning fully to face him, Ragnar's voice was icy as he declared that Li Yun had become their greatest obstacle. Li Yun, drenched in nervous sweat, quickly backtracked, admitting that his earlier words had been a mistake. All he wanted was to bring this to a swift conclusion. But even then, he was too late. Leon lifted his head, admitting he hadn't anticipated the boy's cleverness. "I'm done making excuses," he declared, his voice steady. "Just give me one last chance." Ragnar regarded him with weary eyes, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" he asked. Leon lowered his gaze, declaring that this would be the last time he would ask Ragnar to wait. Then, lifting his eyes with renewed determination, he announced that they were finally ready. A girl in a black cloak emerged from behind him, prompting Leon to instruct Helene to step forward. Ragnar's eyes widened in shock as he asked if she was the archmage who had been concealed all these years. A flicker of fear crossed Ragnar's face as Helene slowly pulled back her hood. Once the mask was removed, she fixed her gaze on him with her striking black eye and said, "I'm pleased to meet your highness." Ragnar stumbled back, raising a hand in fear. Leon quickly stepped in front of her, reassuring him, "Don't panic. She's just a novice following orders." With anger burning in his eyes, Ragnar insisted that she would do anything for them. Trembling with frustration, he pointed out that Leon was the tower owner. But before he could finish, Leon interrupted him with a wide smile, asking, "Really? What?" Ragnar shot him a glare and replied, "She's a forbidden black magician." Leon confidently declared that soon Queenie and Paige would kneel before them. Ragnar's eyes widened in fear as he listened, prompting Leon to reassure him. "Don't worry," he said. "Everything will go according to plan, and the Crown Prince's seat will rightfully belong to you." As dawn broke, casting a warm glow over the ivory tower, Leon sat in his office, muttering about the 6th grade, his grip tightening on the table. The old man repeated it once more, 6th grade. Suddenly, a surge of purple energy erupted from Leon, shattering everything in its path. A plate crashed to the floor and papers scattered wildly across the office. Staring at the chaos he had unleashed, Leon's mind raced with disbelief. How could that kid have done this? Just then, he looked up to see a magician stepping into the office. "I called for you," Leon said, his voice a mix of confusion and urgency. The man surveyed the wrecked room, his surprise evident. Leon stood by the desk, surrounded by a chaotic mix of scattered papers and shattered dishes. With a faint smile, he announced that Marco had arrived. As Marco stepped closer, he folded his hands and inquired about the mess. Leon waved it off nonchalantly, saying it was nothing, while he nervously clasped one hand with the other. Leon smiled faintly, recalling their first meeting. 20 years had passed since that day, when Marco was just a small child. As Marco listened, Leon's voice grew nostalgic. He turned slightly, his gaze distant, and said, "I remember it clearly. You were an abandoned child, wrapped in cloth." He recalled how the baby kept tossing and reaching out, a memory that filled him with an indescribable joy. Then Leon turned to Marco and said he was certain that child would not only become a mage, but an official magician. It had once seemed impossible, and that was why he felt such pride. Marco smiled and replied that it was all thanks to the tower owner's wisdom, a way to repay even a fraction of the kindness they had received. Leon was prepared to do whatever it took. With a slight grin, he declared that Marco was like a son to him, so there was no need to discuss repayment. Leaning forward, his hands resting on the table, Leon confessed that he had called Marco for a favor. Marco bowed, and when Leon invited him to his house that night, he readily agreed. Leon offered a thin smile, thanked him, and assured him he would be waiting. Later that night, as darkness enveloped the neighborhood, every window remained dark until, suddenly, the door swung open. The bartender turned, wiping a mug as he began to welcome the guest. But he halted mid-sentence, his expression shifting to one of surprise. Standing in the doorway was none other than Ian Page, the Archmage of the Ivory Tower. The MC strode confidently to the bar, pulled back his hood, and inquired if the bartender recognized him. The bartender spread his arms wide, declaring that everyone had heard of him. He bowed deeply, expressing gratitude for the visitor's presence in such a humble establishment. Then, with a spark of curiosity, he quickly asked why the man had come. Ian removed his cloak, a relaxed smile crossing his face. "Relax," he said. "I'm here to buy information." With that, he tossed a heavy pouch of gold onto the bar, the sound of coins clinking echoing in the quiet room. The bartender flashed a grin as he glanced at the coin. "People say tower mages pay well," he remarked. "Looks like that's true." With a smile, he inquired about the kind of information the protagonist sought. The MC extended his hand and replied, "I want anything connected to black magicians." The bartender stroked his chin thoughtfully and inquired if he shouldn't know more about the matter than they did. Ian tilted his head, acknowledging that his knowledge was merely superficial. He was seeking something deeper. As he opened his eyes, he locked his gaze onto the bartender and mentioned that while any detail could be helpful, he was particularly interested in something most people wouldn't know. The bartender beamed, spreading his arms wide in acknowledgement. With a slight nod, he lowered his voice and revealed that they had been fortunate lately, having dedicated considerable effort to this very issue. Leaning against the bar, he inquired if Ian had ever heard of the Order of Dragons. The protagonist observed him intently. The bartender elaborated that it was a religious group within the Empire, devoted to the worship of dragons as deities. Though not particularly large or renowned, the order had persisted for centuries. He continued, explaining that the order began as a small group of believers in a humble village. Then, a grave robber emerged, claiming to be the sole descendant of the dragon, and he began to persuade others that he possessed extraordinary powers. Initially, most people were skeptical, but as time passed, that small group steadily grew. Now the entire order was shrouded in mystery. No one knew who was behind it, how many followers it had, or what its true intentions were. As a result, rumors began to swirl, including tales that they could resurrect the dead. The bartender raised a finger, admitting he wasn't sure if those dragon followers were real. But one thing was certain, the rumors were everywhere. Ian's tension mounted as he listened intently. The bartender leaned in, his voice low and conspiratorial, revealing a connection between the Order of Dragons and black magic. He added that some whisper the Empire's upper class had ties to the Order as well. After all, black magic required more than just a mage. It demanded a network of people and resources to thrive. The main character lowered his gaze, lost in thought as the bartender elaborated on the elusive nature of powerful forces. With his arms crossed, the bartender remarked that the group was so secretive, it was nearly impossible to discern how to approach them or even identify their members. Yet, if they truly had the ability to manipulate others, then perhaps deceiving those in power for their own ends was not out of reach. The bartender's smile faded as he revealed that was all they knew for the moment. However, he assured Ian they would continue to dig for more information and promised to send word if anything surfaced. Ian turned away, pulling up his hood, and cast one last glance at the bartender. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I hope the investigation goes well." As the protagonist watched the bartender wave goodbye with a broad smile, he heard the cheerful thanks for the generous payment echoing in his ears. Later that night, moonlight streamed through the window, casting a silvery glow over his office. Alone with his thoughts, he rested his chin on his hand, a frown creasing his brow as he contemplated the mysterious Order of the Dragon. In his past life, he had never encountered that name. So, how could such an ancient group remain hidden for so long? His gaze drifted to the staff and thoughts of the Shaman King flooded his mind. As he examined it more closely, Ian recalled the dark symbols etched into its surface. The shaman had wielded that staff for black magic. He recalled the image of the burning Shaman King, flanked by monstrous figures, and pondered whether black magic required more than just mana. The main character averted his gaze, attempting to piece everything together. His thoughts drifted to Leon and his scrolls. While he couldn't prove it, he suspected that the tower's master was aware of the Great Meadows and the secrets of black magic. Perhaps he was connected to the Order of the Dragon itself. Leaning back, he cradled his head in his hands, reflecting on how much had changed since his last life, not just because he had returned. As he studied his hand, Ian came to a startling realization. The world may have always been this way. Yet the chasm between his past and present felt insurmountable, and it only seemed to widen with each passing moment. He envisioned the chest oozing black dust and pondered whether it was a consequence of using the dragon language or the act of traveling back in time. Either way, it felt as though he had unleashed something that was meant to remain sealed. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that it had all been worth it. The protagonist rose to his feet, removed his glasses, and acknowledged that forging ahead had been effortless when he already knew what lay ahead. Now he found himself knowing almost nothing. He opened the desk drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside lay the precious medallion. As he gazed at it, Ian reminded himself that he had to be ready for anything. Meanwhile, in another house, the light still burned brightly. Leon, on the other end of the line, offered a sincere apology for calling so late. Marco sat across from the tower's owner, a small smirk playing on his lips. "What do you want, Leon?" he asked. His curiosity piqued as he awaited the answer. Leon half closed his eyes, snapped his fingers, and began to speak. Suddenly, Marco turned his full attention to him, listening intently. Leon glanced away, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "No one else can know about this." Leon rose to his feet and beckoned Marco to follow him. Marco studied him closely, curiosity etched on his face as he inquired about their destination. Instead of responding immediately, Leon reached for a book on the shelf. As he opened it, a brilliant blue light poured forth, illuminating the room. "This book will show us the way," he declared, the glow intensifying around them. A portal materialized before Leon, drawing his gaze. Marco glanced at him and remarked that this was just like before. Confused, Leon asked for clarification, but without waiting for an answer, he turned and stepped into the portal, urging Marco to follow. Marco swallowed hard, his eyes lingering on the old magician, before he steeled himself and hurried after him. They arrived in darkness. Marco's gaze fixed on Leon. With a swift motion, Leon raised his hand and cast a light spell. The sudden brightness forced Marco to shield his eyes. When he dared to look again, he froze in shock. Before him stood a prison, and Leon remained motionless. Inside, people were confined within cages, their desperate faces illuminated by the eerie glow. Two individuals were crammed into one cell, while another pair was trapped in a separate one. Shaken, Marco turned to the others and asked who they were, but Leon interrupted him, urging him not to be afraid. "They're just ingredients," he said dismissively. Marco's frustration boiled over as he demanded to know how anyone could be referred to as ingredients. His gaze flickered nervously to one of the cages. There, he spotted a thin young man with ash-colored hair and one missing arm, Chris. Leon lowered his head and spoke calmly, revealing that Chris had nearly perished while practicing magic, a fate shared by many of the mages here. As Marco surveyed the emaciated figures of the mages trapped in their cages, Leon continued his somber tale. They could have perished in an accident or succumbed to illness. Marco lifted his gaze and noticed the cages suspended in the air. Leon continued, explaining that some of the captives were brought in from other countries, while others, non-mages, were snatched right off the streets. Marco lunged at him, but Leon pressed on, undeterred. They would have ended in misery regardless, squandering their lives. Horrified, Marco listened as Leon described these frail, sickly individuals as little more than broken beings, incapable of ever reaching first class. Gripping his staff tightly, Leon insisted that the world would have discarded them through neglect or abuse. He had rescued them from disgrace. His eyes blazed with anger as he proclaimed they were merely ingredients tools that could still serve the ivory tower. Moments later, Leon raised his staff and red smoke billowed through the room. Marco watched in astonishment as Leon reassured him not to worry. Dark magic surged from the staff as Leon declared that fate would not claim them. Not today. He had made a promise. With a chilling grin, he turned to Marco and asked if he understood just how much he meant to him, almost like a son. Then, with a powerful strike, he slammed the staff against the floor, unleashing a torrent of black smoke. Dark magic enveloped Marco, and he struggled against its grip. His eyes began to darken, and a groan escaped his lips as the malevolent force seeped into him, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably. Finally, Marco collapsed to his knees, utterly helpless. Leon approached him slowly, while Marco hung his head in defeat. Stopping in front of him, Leon commanded Marco to stand. Without hesitation, Marco rose to his feet. When instructed to look up, he tilted his head toward Leon. The master of the magic towers scrutinized him and inquired about his identity. Marco replied stiffly, acknowledging Leon as the master of the magic tower of the Green River Empire. When asked once more about his identity, Marco replied, "I am Marco, a second-class magician of the Ivory Tower." A blade floated ominously above Leon's hand as Marco continued, "And I am your personal assistant." Just then, the dagger clattered to the ground at Marco's feet. As he bent down to retrieve it, Leon casually inquired, "Could you cut off your little finger with that?" Without hesitation, Marco carried out the act in silence. Leon observed with a twisted smile as the finger was severed. Lowering his head, he declared that now he could truly call Marco his son. Later, the ivory tower stood still, bathed in the warm sunlight. Inside the hall, a voice broke the silence, announcing that the tower's owner had taken an indefinite leave of absence. One mage crossed his arms, remarking that Leon had a lot on his plate and wasn't exactly in his prime anymore. Another chimed in, speculating that it might have something to do with Ian. After all, the youngest archmage had already reached the 6th class, a fact that likely stung Leon more than he cared to admit. One of the girls in the group asked what would happen next. She noted that the tower's owner was the 5th prince, while the main character stood alongside the crown prince. It seemed impossible for the two most powerful figures in the tower to remain on opposite sides. As Marco walked past them, he overheard someone mutter that they didn't have much of a choice in the matter. Whoever ranked higher would have the final say. Marco approached the door and knocked. Inside, Ian turned to face him and called out, "Come in." As Marco entered, Ian closed the book resting on his lap and offered him a warm greeting. Marco reciprocated the gesture, his gaze fixed intently on Ian. Clutching the books tightly, Marco announced that he had brought what the protagonist requested. The main character watched as he set them down, expressing his gratitude and mentioning that he had been searching for those books for quite some time. Marco had been a tremendous help. Just then, Ian interjected with a question. Was the tower's owner unwell? Marco lifted his head slightly and reassured him that it wasn't serious enough to worry about. He glanced over, his gaze landing on the bandage wrapped around Marco's hand. Concerned, he asked what had happened. Marco replied that he had injured himself while practicing magic, urging the protagonist not to fret. Ian exhaled softly, offering Marco a gentle gaze as he wished him a swift recovery. Yet, as he observed his friend more closely, a sense of unease crept in. Marco seemed different. His usual ease around Ian had vanished, replaced by an unsettling tension. His face and voice remained unchanged, yet an invisible wall had risen between them, a barrier that began to form the moment Ian took his leave. As he concentrated, a realization dawned on him. Lowering his head, he recalled a moment from the past. His mind conjured the memory of their first meeting. He recalled their meeting 6 years ago in the Mogrian province. Ian mentioned the battle with the goblins, emphasizing that without Marco's assistance, the outcome would have been disastrous. Marco met his gaze, nodding in acknowledgement. Meanwhile, the protagonist fidgeted with a book in his hands, a simmering anger evident in his demeanor. Marco offered a slight bow and began to ask if the MC needed anything else, but the MC interrupted him. Ian abruptly stood up from his chair, urging Marco to hold on. Suddenly, it struck him. Marco hadn't assisted him during the goblin fight. That had been during the mana test exam. Marco simply stared back at him, bewildered. He approached slowly, his expression earnest as he apologized for not remembering sooner. In an instant, his staff materialized in his hand, leaving Marco in stunned silence. Without hesitation, the protagonist thrust the staff forward and it ignited with a brilliant glow. With a calm, confident demeanor, Ian invoked a powerful spell, Big Cancel. A massive blue magic seal unfurled before him, radiating with energy. Marco raised an arm against the howling wind, dark magic seeping from his eyes. He collapsed to the ground, black smoke swirling around him. A violent cough escaped his lips, and more dark energy spilled forth. His eyes blazed a fierce red. Ian watched intently as Marco writhed on the ground, caught in a battle he couldn't fully understand. Kneeling beside him, the MC asked if he was back to himself. Marco slowly lifted his head, his voice trembling as he asked why. The MC explained that black magic had taken hold of him, but he had used anti-magic to break free. Marco stared at the floor in shock, processing the revelation. Suddenly, he jolted upright, determination igniting in his eyes as he shouted that they had to stop the tower owner. Ian studied Marco intently and urged him to explain everything. With a determined expression, Marco began recounting his tale. As he spoke, the scene transitioned to a house bathed in the warm glow of sunset. Inside, Leon sipped his tea when a servant approached, announcing that the protagonist had arrived to see him. After taking a sip, Leon inquired if Ian was alone. The butler confirmed that he was. Lowering his cup, Leon instructed him to bring in the guest. His eyes narrowed, satisfaction creeping, and everything was unfolding just as he had planned. As thoughts of Marco crossed his mind, Leon recalled deliberately casting black magic on him. A mage like Marco would certainly notice it, which meant the trap was now set. Despite the cost of those materials, capturing a 6th-class mage was well worth it. Leon calmly sipped his tea, reassured by the thought that he could always acquire more ingredients. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Without glancing up, he remarked that he hadn't anticipated this visit. Ian entered the room, bowed respectfully, and greeted Leon with genuine concern. "I heard you were unwell," he said, placing a hand over his chest. "I wish you a swift recovery." Leon expressed his gratitude and gestured for Ian to take a seat. As they settled into their chairs, an air of quiet tension filled the space, both men sipping tea while silently assessing one another. Leon mentioned that Marco wasn't feeling well and expressed concern that the illness might spread. Ian narrowed his eyes slightly, skeptical of the worry. "I don't think that's likely," he replied. Leon looked away, relieved. "That's good to hear," he said softly. He always worried about Marco. The boy worked so hard. The protagonist set down his teacup and remarked that Marco had shared an unbelievable story. Leon remained silent, simply observing him. The protagonist continued, revealing that Marco claimed there was a hidden lab on the estate where Leon conducted cruel black magic experiments. Leon chuckled, his eyes still closed, brushing off the notion as mere nonsense from a delirious boy. Ian met his gaze, a serious expression on his face. "Marco seems to be under a black magic spell," he said, his tone heavy with concern, "and the one casting it is the man Marco believes to be his father." Without breaking eye contact, he mentioned that Marco had begged him to stop, though Leon feigned ignorance about what that meant. Gently placing his cup down, Leon revealed that he actually possessed a portal to a lab, created from an artifact he had stumbled upon by chance. With a chuckle, he dismissed the notion of black magic as utter nonsense. Leon rose from the sofa, inviting Ian to inspect it himself. "If you don't trust me, see the truth with your own eyes," he urged. The protagonist regarded him with a cautious expression, hesitating in his seat for a moment. Finally, a faint smile crossed his lips as he replied, "With your permission, I will." Leon began to walk away, but paused, turning back to Ian. He straightened his posture and declared that he would reveal everything. As the head of the ivory tower, he couldn't let rumors of black magic circulate unchecked. Approaching a red curtain, he grasped it firmly and, with a swift motion, pulled it aside. Behind it lay a hidden blue portal, shimmering with mystery. A book materialized in Leon's hand, a manifestation of his artifact's power. As he opened the glowing tome, he explained that its magic allowed anyone to cast portal spells, even those typically reserved for the 8th class. Ian remained silent, his gaze fixed on the book. Leon stepped toward the portal, urging him to follow. Moments later, they found themselves in a dimly lit room. As he followed, he reflected on how he had helped lay the groundwork for uniting the continents, guided the 5th prince to the throne, and significantly elevated the power of the ivory tower. Because of Leon's support for the 5th prince, Ian had once held him in deep respect, but then Leon abruptly stopped. Red energy surged around him as he called out to MC by name. With a slight grin, Leon fixed his gaze ahead. Pausing by his staff, he reminisced about a time when he too had aspired to be a hero. He wanted to save the empire with his own hands and alleviate the suffering of the poor. Gazing at his trembling hands, Leon reflected on a hard-earned lesson. Clenching his fists, he acknowledged that he couldn't change everything by himself. With determination, he lifted his gaze to the staff before him. After a brief pause, he reached for it, declaring that this was the power that could unite him. Gripping the staff tightly, Leon turned to Ian and remarked that this wasn't quite what he had envisioned. Dark streams of mana surged around him, swiftly coiling around his form. Leon observed as the protagonist fought for breath, his struggle evident in every strained gasp. A point of light flickered above Leon's hand as he declared that this power would compel countless mages to obey him, allowing him to save the empire from ruin. Gripping his staff tightly, he flashed a wild smile and told Ian that its name was simply Power. Dark mana seeped through the entire dungeon, casting an ominous shadow over the scene. Leon turned to the protagonist, a wide grin stretching across his face. "I will become part of this," he declared confidently. As dark magic surged into the protagonist, Leon continued, "Under my rule, you will help save the land and its people." With wild eyes, Leon declared that a man like Ian and an old man like him needed this. Leon silently observed as Ian endured his suffering. Then, lifting his head, he commanded him to stand. The protagonist quickly complied, rising to his feet and fixing his gaze on Leon. In response, Leon twitched, lowered his head, and clenched his fists tightly. With a triumphant shout, he declared it was easy, insanely easy. Reaching out toward Ian, Leon inquired about his identity. The main character lowered his head, closed his eyes, and replied, "I am the master of the ivory tower, Havard Leon." But as he continued speaking, Leon's expression shifted dramatically. The protagonist snapped his head up, casting a mocking glance at Leon as he declared him a total psycho. Just then, Leon froze, barely registering Ian's fist hurtling toward his face. With a powerful swing, Ian landed a heavy punch, sending Leon crashing into the wall with a startled scream. As he hit the ground, he trembled and clutched his face. Shaking out his hand, he exhaled sharply, while Leon muttered in disbelief that it was impossible. The protagonist glanced down at him, a smirk playing on his lips, and asked if he truly believed that counted as magic. Leon looked up in horror, still quaking with fear. Ian pointed out that since Leon had never advanced beyond 5th class, he likely didn't grasp the vast difference in their abilities. As he approached slowly, the MC remarked that even with black magic, 5th class was still just that 5th class. Kneeling beside him, he asked, "Did you really think I came here unprepared?" The protagonist offered a faint grin, lowering his head as he acknowledged that such a careless mistake was uncharacteristic of him. He realized he had rushed for nothing. Leon yanked his hand away from his face, demanding to know how Ian was still standing. But before he could finish, the MC shot his hand toward Leon's face. A blue magic seal flickered to life before him as he unleashed a mana drain. Leon's eyes widened in shock, and a scream escaped his lips. His fingers clawed desperately at the stone floor. Gradually, the protagonist withdrew his hand from the Tower Master. Ian sprang to his feet, urging Leon to take a moment to rest. After that, he knew he wouldn't be able to move again. As he turned to leave, the MC glanced back and remarked that age had finally caught up with Leon, meaning recovery would take quite a while. He walked away without a second thought, the sound of Leon's curses echoing behind him. With a flick of his wrist, he cast a light spell. The spell illuminated a shadowy chamber brimming with treasure. Ian's eyes widened as he spotted a massive chest overflowing with gleaming coins. Flanking it were shelves filled with expensive potions and exquisite ornaments. A smirk crept across the protagonist's face as he turned to mock Leon for being such a modest Tower Master. With a raised eyebrow, he asked the old man why someone with no place to spend such wealth would hoard it all. Had Leon truly intended to take everything with him to the next world, rather than offer anything to the Empire? Leon clutched his head, shaking it in despair as he groaned. It was then that Ian noticed something unsettling. He approached the cages that held the captives, peering inside to find them in a pitiful state. Though a few still clung to life, 2 of the prisoners had already succumbed to their fate. The main character studied them through the bars, reminding himself to be patient. He would free them and ensure they received the care they desperately needed. With his last ounce of strength, Leon managed to speak, uttering words that immediately captured Ian's attention. He slowly turned back as Leon remarked that Marco was the only one. Facing the old man, who was still attempting to press on, Leon shot him a wicked grin and declared that he had people everywhere, men far superior to Marco. The protagonist turned fully toward him, anticipation hanging in the air. Pushing himself off the wall, Leon shouted that Ian should stop pretending. They were likely already en route and wouldn't stop without his command. Lowering his head, Leon clarified that from the beginning, he had intended for them to focus on 2 targets. The main character stared at him, a flicker of realization crossing his face, as he asked if he meant his family and the prince. Leon slowly raised his head and extended his hand, proposing a straightforward deal. "Let's forget everything that happened today," he suggested. He pointed out that Ian had no proof aside from the portal itself, and if it came down to mere words, people would surely trust Leon over him. With a small grin, Leon warned that crossing him came with a steep price, one that would lead to deep regret. The protagonist half closed his eyes, turned his head aside, and calmly refused. Leon stared at him in shock, and then a wave of fear washed over him. He shouted that he would kill MC's mother and the crown prince, but MC simply extended a hand and challenged him to try. Leon looked bewildered, unsure of Ian's intentions. With a broad smile, he urged him once more, "Go ahead, give it a shot." The moonlight bathed the protagonist's mansion in an ethereal glow. His mother turned immediately when someone called her name. Lydia stood beside her on the balcony, noting the chill in the air. The alchemist bowed slightly and urged her to return indoors. Mrs. Page lowered her head, a shadow of worry crossing her face. "Ian still hasn't come home," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "And for some reason, I can't reach him, even through the ball." Her eyes grew heavy with concern. He always made it a point to inform her if he was going to be late. Lydia offered a gentle smile, trying to reassure her. "Remember, MC is a 6th-class archmage, respected throughout the Empire. He knows how to take care of himself. Even the most hardened scoundrels would beg for forgiveness in his presence, so she had no reason to worry." Mrs. Page's eyes widened in disbelief as she exclaimed that, to her, he was still just a boy. Leon flinched slightly, stepping closer. Sweat trickled down his cheek as he hesitated, then bowed his head and asked her to forgive him. Leon confessed that he had a child as well, yet he still attempted to downplay her feelings. He asked for her forgiveness once more. She offered a faint smile, glanced away, and replied that it was all right. Mrs. Page gazed out over the city at night, reflecting on how heavy Ian's burden must be. She envisioned him standing alone, his staff in hand and blue cape billowing behind him, pressing forward without relying on anyone. It pained her to realize the extent of his suffering. Fidgeting with her hands, she confessed her desire to help share that burden. Feeling frustrated that all she could do was wait for him, Lydia straightened, her expression firm, and urged her not to voice such thoughts. With a warm smile, he explained that Ian had achieved those heights thanks to his family. He recalled his own experience with mana poisoning, noting that he had survived solely because of his son. "That's what family is for," he added, a hint of pride in his voice. Mrs. Page gazed at him in astonishment as he explained that, despite her feelings of inadequacy, she brought others a sense of peace. With a gentle smile, Li Yongxing reassured her that he always had a place to return to, and that was a vital part of his identity. Lowering his head, he offered, "I can stay with you if that's what you'd like." She regarded him calmly as he mentioned he could stay until the protagonist returned. Mrs. Page tilted her head slightly and offered a small smile. They both looked up at the night sky, and Li Yun spoke softly. The night felt serene and clear. Sitting beside her, he remarked that there were usually many guards around, but tonight there seemed to be an unusual absence. Suddenly, Letio felt a shift in the air. Without hesitation, he shouted for her to get inside. Something was amiss. He had heard a sharp sound coming from below. Letio squinted toward the bushes, his voice cutting through the tension as he called out, demanding to know who was there. Two shadowy figures emerged from the grass, lurking near the underbrush. One of them, with piercing red eyes, locked his gaze onto Letio. With a surge of authority, Letio thrust out his hand, commanding them to halt. But as he ground his teeth in frustration, he realized they were ignoring him completely. One of the intruders stepped toward a thin blue thread, and Letolosanov realized the gravity of the situation. The truth struck him like a thunderclap, freezing him in place. He reached for Mrs. Page, shouting her name as he pulled her close. In a swift motion, he threw them both to the ground just as a massive bolt of lightning struck, shaking the earth beneath them. A massive lightning bolt struck their house, shaking it to its core. The prince and his companions were bewildered, unsure of the source of the thunder and lightning that had erupted around them. Concern etched on the captain's face as he turned to the prince, suggesting they return to the palace for safety. The prince firmly refused, insisting it was too early to depart and that nothing had transpired to warrant concern. The captain remained unaware of the lengths the prince had gone to secure his father's permission to leave the palace and witness the lives of ordinary people. Returning now was simply not an option. He had something important he wanted to ask. The captain bowed, placing a hand over his chest, prepared to listen intently. After a moment of contemplation, the prince made his request. It took the captain by surprise, leaving the prince feeling a bit embarrassed. He had only asked for the basics, wondering if that was truly such a difficult request. The captain remained momentarily stunned, as the prince even went so far as to ask him to teach a few stances. The captain suddenly glanced to the side and unsheathed his sword. The prince, assuming training was about to commence, urged him not to rush, suggesting they could begin later. However, the captain had other intentions. He commanded the prince to stand behind him, leaving the young royal bewildered. The captain summoned the second squad of Imperial Knights, who rushed in without hesitation to shield the prince. They quickly formed a protective circle around him, poised for battle, while the prince stood frozen in shock at the unfolding chaos. The captain's voice rang out, demanding that the hidden figure reveal themselves. Suddenly, a cloak materialized against the wall, and from its shadows, a figure stepped into view. Helene, the ivory tower archmage with striking red hair, stood before them. The captain had believed she had vanished years ago, so why was she here now? Helene remained silent, her gaze fixed ahead as she continued to move forward. The captain commanded her to halt for the prince's safety and demanded an explanation for her presence. After a moment of tense silence, the girl replied, "Hayden Greenriver." Her voice was icy, and she added that she would kill anyone who dared to obstruct her. Her eyes were devoid of emotion, betraying no hint of fear. The captain realized that this would be far from easy. Without hesitation, he charged directly at her. As he swung, Helene deftly blocked a strike with her staff. In that brief moment, he caught a glimpse of the eye concealed beneath her hair, completely black, devoid of light. She leaped back, regaining her stance, and then, with determination, she decided to unleash a fire explosion. With a swift motion, she swung her staff. A barrage of fireballs hurtled toward him, but the captain remained calm. He had trained for this moment. With determination, he charged forward, slicing through each fireball with his sword. Step by step, he closed the distance. The girl watched in disbelief, clearly taken aback by his unexpected resilience. He charged at her relentlessly as she fell back, thrusting his sword toward her staff. With a swift sidestep, she narrowly avoided the blow, allowing the blade to clash against her weapon instead. Undeterred, the captain leaped into the air and struck once more. Just as his attack connected, she summoned the mana barrier to shield herself. With that shield in place, nothing from the outside could penetrate it. Unsurprisingly, his attack simply rebounded. Yet the captain was still astonished to witness the barrier in action for the first time. He had longed to train with Ian, preparing for a moment like this. As the captain removed his gloves, he discovered he still had a way to confront the barrier. Though he couldn't manipulate mana like others, being a half-blood with only a mana heart, he realized the mana coursing through his veins could still empower him to overcome her. Now he was prepared to demonstrate the true potential of a half-blood. Blue magic enveloped his sword, swirling with energy. In a single decisive strike, he sliced through the barrier, closing the distance between them, and plunged his blade into her. It wasn't his intention to kill. He still needed to uncover who had orchestrated the attack on His Highness. At this moment, all she could do was pray for a swift end. Meanwhile, we shift to the tower's master and the magician standing beside him. The old man appeared visibly shaken, pondering what this young boy could possibly achieve. But Ian wasn't bluffing. Over the past 5 years, he had forged connections with all sorts of people. The old man began to shout, but MC remained calm, asking if he truly believed he had just been sitting idly by. He had once welcomed guests into his home, but that would never happen again. Anyone sent this time had likely already fallen into a trap or met a grim fate. There was no point in trying to bargain with Ian now. He sought nothing from the old man. The only outcome that remained was the full weight of the law. The old man deserved death, and the protagonist was determined to see that justice served. He smiled and remarked that the ivory tower, the very thing the old man had sold his soul for, could also protect his body. The main character hadn't intended to take it this far, but as he reached out toward the old man, he aimed for his head. The tower's master should at least safeguard its name, he declared before unleashing his magic. The nearby magician clearly understood why the old man favored the fifth prince over the crown prince. He once believed that the same prince should ascend to the throne. The old man, however, was consumed by greed for power and wealth. This was unmistakable. As he spoke, he writhed in agony, magic swirling around him, relentlessly tearing at his very being. Yet he pressed on, undeterred. He had crossed the line by targeting the protagonist's family, and now there would be consequences. People must face the consequences of their actions, and the protagonist had ensured that the Tower Master would suffer. The scene shifts to a vast white hall, where the Emperor's fury erupted as the Tower Master's crimes were laid bare for all to see. From his throne, he bellowed that the man had forsaken his duty, succumbing to the allure of dark magic and exploiting innocent lives for his grotesque experiments. Striking the bell on his throne, the Emperor proclaimed that not even death could absolve such sins. The crime was far too grave for mercy or understanding. At that moment, Herbert Leon lost every title of honor and was sentenced to death. The crowd erupted in shock as the Emperor announced that the execution would be public. He declared that Herbert would be remembered as one of the Empire's most notorious criminals, warning that anyone connected to him, be it accomplices or relatives, would face swift retribution. Anyone connected to the crimes would face punishment, and mages who practiced black magic would be relentlessly hunted. The Emperor declared that he would personally oversee the judgment of all involved. No one would evade scrutiny or consequence. Turning to the nobles, he demanded their complete cooperation in this matter. He was certain that others in the tower had acted without considering the consequences, so he commanded all black magic users to cease their activities and turn themselves in. There was only one exception, Archmage Helene. Having attempted to kill the prince, a far graver punishment awaited her. The prince beside him bowed his head, absorbing the weight of the moment. Though she had acted under the Tower Master's orders, her assassination attempt on the Crown Prince could not be overlooked. In the name of justice, the Emperor sentenced her to life in prison. It was a scandal of monumental proportions. Yet it also illuminated the bravery of two heroes whose actions truly deserved recognition. The Emperor spoke of the magician who had unveiled the Tower Master's sinister crimes, and of the knight Oliver, who had valiantly defended the Crown Prince. He summoned Oliver to the front. As Oliver stepped forward, the Emperor acknowledged the magician's crucial role in the investigation, hinting that even greater contributions were anticipated from him in the future. He then directed everyone's attention to the knight who had bravely defended the Crown Prince against a formidable fourth-level mage. As Oliver approached the throne, he halted just before the Emperor. The Emperor beckoned him closer, addressing him as Captain Oliver of the Knight Order. Oliver placed a hand on his chest and bowed deeply. The Emperor commended him, declaring him a true blessing to the Empire. He hadn't merely saved the crown prince. He had demonstrated that people could surpass their limits. Oliver, he declared, would become a shining example for the entire empire and perhaps even the world. Naturally, such remarkable service could not go unrecognized. The emperor declared that Oliver would be granted authority over every knight in the empire, bestowing upon him the prestigious title of Lord of Swords. The crowd fell silent, taken aback by the announcement. The emperor noted that this title had remained unclaimed for far too long. For centuries, no one had truly earned it, as magic had overshadowed the greatest deeds of knights. Yet Oliver had restored its significance by demonstrating unwavering loyalty to both the imperial family and the empire. In the crowd, the prince smiled, knowing that this honor was well-deserved. The emperor expressed his hope that the spirit would endure, remarking that the title of Lord of Swords suited Oliver perfectly. With a graceful motion, he lifted a stunning white crown and a gleaming gold sword from its sheath. He commanded the imperial knight to kneel, and Oliver complied without hesitation. The emperor then stepped forward, initiating the solemn ceremony. In the name of the first channel of the Emerald River, he officially conferred the title of Lord of Swords upon Oliver. With a solemn gesture, he touched the blade to Oliver's left shoulder, then to his right. Looking deep into Oliver's eyes, he asked if he was ready to accept this title, one that had awaited its rightful owner for centuries. The captain vowed by his honor to lay down his life in defense of the empire. Later, within the palace walls, the prince called out to his father, confusion etched across his face. "How can the empire execute the Tower Master?" he pleaded. "Please, think again. Don't you see how devastating this will be for the empire?" The Tower Master was an archmage, and his death would be akin to losing hundreds of ordinary mages. The prince contended that this would solve nothing. Once the punishment was executed, word would spread to every neighboring country, particularly Coldwood, which had long coveted expansion. They would seize the opportunity, ravaging the Great Meadows and striking while the empire was vulnerable, with its most powerful mage gone. The moment was right for an attack. His father revealed that the Tower Master was no longer a true mage, nor the strongest among them. That title had shifted to Ian Page, the new 6th grade mage of the Ivory Tower. With Ian capable of stepping into the Tower Master's role, there was little to worry about. The Emperor even viewed this as an opportunity to elevate the Tower's prestige across the continent. The prince fell silent, but his father pressed on. Was he truly in the wrong? Reluctantly, the prince acknowledged his father's point. The newcomer could indeed bring fresh ideas to the tower. Yet, he couldn't shake the thought that the old master, with his years of strength and experience, might have propelled their progress even further if he had collaborated with Ian. A young genius and an experienced veteran could have pushed each other to new heights. They could have also supported one another, lightening the burden on the imperial palace. Wasn't that valuable too? His reasoning was sound. Just as the prince prepared to continue, his father abruptly interrupted him. The Tower Master had delved into forbidden black magic, and to call it mere study would be an understatement. The materials for his twisted experiments were the very mages he was sworn to protect, along with innocent soldiers. He sacrificed them without a second thought, driven by a goal that had utterly blinded him. Such a crime was far too grave to overlook. Driven by his lust for power, the Tower Master was willing to sacrifice countless innocent lives. He even resorted to dark magic in an attempt to sway a powerful mage to his side. The prince closed his eyes, grasping the gravity of the situation. The Tower Master was not just a villain. He was one of the Empire's most significant figures. The heir acknowledged that the man was mistaken, yet he still believed that black magic could have been employed to bolster the Empire's defenses. Ragnar countered that if such ingredients were necessary, they might as well use criminals for the greater good of the public. That remark ignited the Emperor's fury. He declared that this was precisely Ragnar's issue. The prince, taken aback, could only stare in confusion. The Emperor's voice turned icy as he continued, declaring that this was why Ragnar would never be named heir. Black magic is evil, he asserted. It taints the user and endangers the entire world. That's why the founder of magic, Mitchell Greenriver, dedicated himself to eradicating it from their land. Had Ragnar truly forgotten that? The Emperor understands Ragnar's mindset and recognizes his ambition. While Ragnar may possess great capability, he lacks the one thing that matters most, and he doesn't even realize it. He had concealed that flaw for years, but when it truly mattered, it always revealed itself. As he walked by, the Emperor turned and declared, "The heart of politics is justice, and it must be upheld. A ruler must remember that justice applies to all. The moment he deems some lives disposable, it's all over." Ragnar paused for a moment, then let out a laugh, catching the Emperor off guard. But he quickly clarified that this wasn't the real reason behind his amusement. The Emperor turned back, curiosity piqued, and asked what he meant. With a steady gaze, Ragnar revealed that he understood why the Emperor would never consider him as heir. Haydn was the cherished eldest son, the recipient of all the love and attention. In contrast, Ragnar was born merely to help maintain control over the nobles. This stark difference fueled the Emperor's fury. Deep down, Ragnar understood the relentless effort he had put forth, all for a chance to be acknowledged, even just once. Was it truly so difficult to glance his way, even just once, instead of always favoring the other son? Was it really that hard to treat him like a son and love him equally? Ragnar boldly claimed that the Emperor would have released the Tower Master if Haydn had only asked. In response, the Emperor, unperturbed, raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap to Ragnar's face. A heavy silence enveloped them. Then, with a sudden laugh, the Emperor turned away, dismissing Ragnar with a scoff, calling him a fool as he exited the room. Outside the hall, he instructed Damphil to place Ragnar under house arrest, ensuring he had no contact with anyone. Damphil bowed, affirming that the order would be executed. With that, the day came to a close. Back at the palace, Ragnar sat alone in his room when Archmage Ian unexpectedly arrived. Stunned by the visit, Ragnar fell silent. After a moment, he finally spoke, expressing his desire not to see Ian and instructing the guards to send him away. However, the door swung open regardless, prompting Ragnar to shout in frustration that he had ordered no one to enter. Ian stepped inside and offered a polite greeting to the prince. The two faced each other, the protagonist gripping his staff. Ragnar suspected it had come from the Emperor, and he was correct. Ian had been dispatched to determine whether the Tower Master had ensnared him with black magic. He expressed his hope that Ragnar wouldn't object to the inspection, but Ragnar was already seething, especially on the day the Tower Master was to be executed. To him, this was the ultimate act of disrespect, a calculated test at the worst possible moment. Ian calmly explained that this was a routine check for both the imperial family and the palace staff. He urged Ragnar not to take offense. With a resigned sigh, Ragnar sat down and gestured for Ian to continue the inspection before anyone else arrived. He cautioned Ragnar that the spell might induce nausea or dizziness, but that would simply indicate the process was effective. Raising his staff, he unleashed a powerful incantation, magic swirling around Ragnar like a tempest. Ragnar bit his lip, and the protagonist glanced at him, asking if he could withstand it. The sensation was undeniably painful, which explained the discomfort. Still, Ian found no evidence of black magic and advised him to rest if he felt unwell. Grateful for Ian's cooperation, the MC turned to leave. Just as he began to walk away, Ragnar halted him with a question. He wanted to know why Ian served his brother. He was astute enough to recognize that the crown prince was unfit to rule, and many noble families shared his concerns. When the protagonist declared that he did not serve the crown prince, Ragnar was taken aback. He rose from his chair, confusion etched on his face, but Ian offered no explanation. Instead, he simply wished him a good rest and made his way to the door. Just as he was about to leave, MC halted him. "I do not serve Haydn Green River," he declared, his voice steady. "In another world, I swore my loyalty to only one person." He glanced at his hand, slowly clenching it into a fist, his head bowing in silent resolve. Whatever he chooses to do now could be seen as either revenge or a betrayal of his old oath. As night fell, Magard entered Ragnar's room. After knocking, he stepped inside, only to find the place in disarray. Ragnar looked up and asked if the Tower Master had been executed. The soldier confirmed, saying it had happened earlier that day in public at the main square of Green Riverium. Without turning from the window, Ragnar acknowledged the soldier's words and dismissed him. The soldier, concern etched on his face, urged him not to take his own life. Ragnar merely laughed, questioning why he would ever consider such a thing. As the soldier stepped closer, he placed a piece of paper on the table, sliding it toward Ragnar. Curiosity flickered in Ragnar's eyes. He had no idea what it contained. The soldier mentioned it was something personal he needed to read. Once the man departed, Ragnar sat in silence for a moment, his gaze fixed on the paper. Finally, he reached for it. As he opened the letter and read the message, a flicker of hope ignited within him. He realized they still had a chance. Meanwhile, the survivors from the old man's secret lab were being kept safe and receiving treatment. In the Emperor's chamber, he conversed with the Yin, who had been reviewing the statements of those regaining their health and memories. Additionally, many stolen treasures had been returned to the royal treasury. Anyone who had close contact with the Tower Master was being tested for black magic, but so far, no traces had been found. The Emperor commended Ian for managing the situation so effectively. Yet Ian couldn't shake the disbelief that the Tower Master could be so deranged. The revelation still stunned him, and a heavy weight settled in his chest as he grappled with the guilt of not having noticed the signs sooner. Despite his outward charm, the Tower Master had earned deep respect from everyone. Who could have imagined that beneath that smile lurked a tyrant? The protagonist vowed to report the test results and any new findings from the investigation. The Emperor nodded in agreement, but added that he had one more question. When Ian asked if it was all right, the protagonist replied without hesitation, "Of course." The Emperor inquired about his thoughts on the Crown Prince. The question took him by surprise, yet he fully grasped its implications. The Emperor was aware of this as well. A heavy silence enveloped the room. After a moment, Ian finally replied that he could not swear loyalty. That response inevitably led to a pressing question. What did he truly mean by that? The protagonist vowed to do everything in his power to help Hayden claim his rightful place on the throne. He was determined to support him in becoming a just ruler for the people. While he couldn't offer an oath, he promised to stand by Hayden until the very end. The Emperor rested his hand on his chin, contemplating the weight of this commitment. In the end, the answer brought him satisfaction. He summoned his servants, who entered the room carrying a large brown box. The Emperor instructed Ian to take it. Inside lay the staff left behind by the former Tower Master. Ian understood that this task would not be straightforward. Even though everyone knew who should take his place, there were still numerous details to finalize. Typically, the imperial family selects the Tower Master, but this time, the Emperor sought to avoid any delays and decided to appoint the new leader immediately. The staff of the Tower Master now rested in Ian's hands. The Emperor then revealed that he had one favor to ask. Without hesitation, Ragnar agreed, eager to know what was required of him. The Emperor was confident that Ragnar would not abandon his ambitions, even after losing such a crucial ally. He understood the depths of Ragnar's greed. If the man were to seize the throne, countless innocent lives would be at stake.